This is a small provincial estate located far from where the child was born. It is a busy day for this family because on this day the gods have blessed them with a newborn boy. The boy's mother could not take her eyes off her child, and seeing in him the future owner of the estate, she decided to name him Ruin Ardell. Many expectations were placed on this child because they wanted to see a bright future in him. The young gentleman sitting behind a book decided to eavesdrop on the adults' conversation, where one of them was going to look for food in the forest. Suddenly, the young gentleman called out to the adults, asking them not to go to the southern part of the mountain because there was a lot of mana there. But the adults were puzzled by the young gentleman's remarks. Suddenly, Baggins ran home without stopping, causing the owner of the house to worry about his employee. Baggins explained his tardiness by saying that he had chosen a different route home because he did not want to get into trouble. But the master of the house was puzzled by this statement and asked for an explanation of the situation. His friend decided to listen to the little gentleman's words, and as it turned out, there had been an attack by beastmen. Hearing this, the master of the house was greatly puzzled by this attack and worried about his friend. Since the prediction turned out to be correct, they believed that the child really feels mana, and thus he could become the future of the city of Ardell. From the day of the prediction, he began to feel mana. At 6 years old, he felt mana, and at 7, he began to control magical powers. At the age of 10, Ruin Ardell entered a magic school as the best student of all, proving himself to be the most experienced of his peers with the title of genius. But he felt the burden of this title, yet he was sure that such a title would bring glory to his family. In the early days, the recruits were tested with magic tricks, and it was the genius's turn. On the very first day, he learned that his body was not suitable for releasing mana, and that he did not have the characteristics to become a magician. If in the early days he felt like he was the best, now he was the worst, without any talent as a magician. Rumors spread very quickly, and the whole school was talking about him in a negative light. In the school hallway, Ruin accidentally bumped into another student, but when he came to his senses, he asked if everything was okay. But in response, the other boys just laughed that they had touched a supposed cripple and could become the same, and that they needed to wash away this shame as soon as possible. They called him disabled because of his lack of talent for magic, hurting Ruin with their harsh words, so he decided to get to the bottom of the situation. His envious classmates didn't like his persistence, so they decided to beat him up. He feels discouraged because of his lack of talent, and the main question in his mind is whether he will ever be able to become a real magician. He had the best entrance exam scores and good behavior, but because of the curse, he could not cast spells. When he was desperate to the last, he could not have expected that his future would be brighter than ever. In a moment of intense despair, he was suddenly thrown into another dimension where he discovered the player's artifact. When he woke up, he didn't understand where he was, but it felt like he was floating in water, where he saw an inscription that said he had become the embodiment of the destroyer of worlds. Suddenly, a huge man appeared before him, and Ruin could only guess who he was. A few hours earlier, at the Academy's training ground, it was Ruin's turn to show his talent for magic. The professor who was teaching the class was named Heidel. He asked the students to make a fireball, which any student should have been able to do with ease, but what could be expected of someone so untalented? Summoning his courage, and after the professor's insistence, Ruin gathered himself and began to make a fireball. The size of his ball amazed the other students because to do this, a person must have a lot of mana, which was unusual for everyone. As it turned out, having so much mana in his body was more difficult than he could have expected, which made it difficult for him to hold the ball. Due to the overload on his body, he threw up his breakfast, which angered the professor. The angry teacher ordered him to drop or release the fireball, but Ruin was unable to control his powers. After all, he was already in his final year and couldn't handle a simple task that should have been mastered at the beginning of the course. The professor reminds him that he needs to take the final exam, which requires throwing balls, and that he is destined to fail. Accepting his clumsiness, he thinks that he will not even be able to become a third-rate magician. Other students at the school wonder about his admission with the best grades, but in reality, he is incompetent and would be better off giving up. He studies alongside children from prestigious families, and the only thing he can boast about in front of them is that he is a nobleman who got the best grades. This is the reason for his peers' poor attitude towards him, which Ruin didn't care about until recently, but now it puzzles him greatly. But the matter is cursed. After failing the test, Ruin approached all the students who were discussing how they had done on the test. His classmates, who disliked him, suggested that he pack his things because he was not fit to become a real magician. They hated Ruin because of the bad reputation of the upperclassmen, because they had never heard the name Ardell, and he should have at least been rich. His classmates believed that poor people were smart, but acted arrogantly even though they had nothing, not even a talent for magic. Ruin couldn't stand such terrible treatment of his family and decided to strike back at his tormentor. A second classmate decided to defend his friend, and then the two of them received a blow from Ruin that was stronger than they could have imagined. The angry classmates decided to use extreme measures, magic. But having lost his confidence, Ruin couldn't take a step when he saw the magic ball heading towards him. The professor, seeing the brawl, wanted to stop everything and shouted, "Stop!" But it was too late. The magic ball had already struck him and thrown him somewhere into space, where he felt like he was underwater. A very large man who seemed to be a magical creature called out his name, Ruin Ardell, and that name repeated itself in his head several times. As it turned out, he was still alive, and the healer Helen was trying to wake him up by calling his name. Before he could come to his senses, Ruin, who was in the recreation room, asked the healer where he was, whether he had lost consciousness, and how he had ended up there. It turned out that he had been lying there for a day, and only God had saved him from dying, but the injection seemed very real, and he could only guess what it was. He didn't have a scratch on him, and the main question was how he survived the lightning ball that kills a person from the inside, and he took a direct hit. The professor came into the room, and the healer decided to leave him there, but on the condition that he would not keep quiet if something was bothering him. The professor first inquired about his condition, and then began to share the news that Ben Folt, the student who had intended to destroy him with magic, had been expelled. They also took into account the bullying of Ruin and the insults to his family, but he said that he was also guilty of hitting Ben. The professor reassured him, saying that he would also be punished with volunteer service for a month. The professor also wanted to know if he possessed an artifact that was a legendary weapon of ancient magicians with unlimited mana. He denies having the artifact because he would have behaved differently if he had it, but he is concerned about why the professor is asking this. Heidel says that Ruin was surrounded by red light before being struck by lightning, as if it were an artifact protecting him. He thinks that the dream is somehow connected to this phenomenon in reality. He assures the professor that he does not possess any artifacts, after which he decides to let Ruin continue resting. After the professor leaves, he continues to think about the dream that seemed so realistic and what it was about the player status window. As soon as he utters the word status window, a blue window appears in front of him, and at the same time, a healer enters the room. He asks the healer if she sees the same thing he does, and she denies it and asks him, puzzled, how he is feeling. After checking his tests, the healer sends him back to the dormitory because everything is fine and he is healthy. As he was thinking about the artifact and the title of Drax's incarnation, the window from his dream reappeared in front of him. In this window, there was a task. In order to live up to the title of Drax, he needed to prepare his body for the future. He didn't really believe in these tasks because how could they help if they were just punches with his fists? But the number of completions grew, and he got excited. Perhaps the tasks required precise requirements, and some of his punches didn't count, so he decided to train better in the future. After training hard, he finally finished the training and tasks with difficulty. For completing the tasks, he was given a reward that seemed to pour blood and give him a new power, Ruin. As it turned out, the new reward gave him more power for his punches, adding to his strength. As we know, he has a lot of mana in his body, and this reward will replace his mana with strength, meaning he will not be able to make mage balls. Around everyone's heart, there are mana circles to use magic, but he had more than his peers because of the curse. He does not control magic. But after receiving the reward, all 4 of his mana circles disappeared and were replaced by power circles. Disappointed by the disappearance of his mana, he had less and less chance of becoming a mage, but he decided not to be upset and to try out his new power. The fireball he created turned out to be stronger and faster than he usually made, and then he realized that this was the power of the artifact and a chance to prove himself. It usually takes a certain amount of time to create a ball, but the new reward allows you to create a ball instantly. He didn't even think that someone who couldn't release mana could cast spells like a real mage. Before him was another new window in which he acquired the title of Mad Mage. As it turned out, Drax used a method of sorcery to release mana. The pop-up window informs the owner of the artifact that he has a new task. He had to hit the target by creating a ball, so he swung his arm with the ball, hitting the target and earning new points. Overjoyed, he collapsed to the ground, because after so many years, he was finally able to cast spells. Exhausted, Ruin fell asleep right on the street while his peers worried about his condition. When he woke up, he stretched, stood up confidently, and walked on as if nothing had happened, but his classmates noticed a change in his behavior. He returned to the academy while everyone else was just waking up, and his roommate asked him where he had been all night. He was the only one who did not treat him like an outcast, and judging by his own reaction, he thought that his friend had decided to take control of his life after the blow, but Ruin denied everything. Just as he decided to take a breather in the bathroom, he remembered his assignments and realized that he had to repeat the training, but this time it had doubled. After a month of training, he learned that the repetitions would only increase to 3,000 times, otherwise he would become exhausted, and if he didn't complete them, everything would be reset to 0. After a month of training, he mastered a new skill, the art of the body, where he could perform more complex variations of strikes. His classmates noticed the changes in him, because they noticed that he seemed to have settled on the training ground and slept in class, whereas before he had studied hard. During that month, he persistently searched for information about Drake, but it was all in vain. Suddenly, his excited friend Rowena ran up and said that the head of the Ardell family, his father, had come to the academy. He ran to his father, and it was clear that both father and son had missed each other very much and were happy to see each other. They began to talk about the family over a cup of tea, and his father told him how his younger sister was learning to wield a sword to protect her weak brother. His father was worried about his son because he was the weakest in the school, but his son denied that he was being ridiculed or bullied. As it turned out, his father had come with a proposal to leave this school, but his son was alarmed by this news because he had not seen his father for 6 years. To reassure his father, his son suggests that they agree that he will take a test of his magical abilities in the next class, and if he fails, he will leave. The day of the written exam arrived, where students had to write about their understanding of magic. They could not make a mistake because it would be punished by a 0 score. The practical part of the exam is divided into 4 parts: shooting, measuring strength, fighting, and one-on-one combat. If it was once easier for him to write the exam and be the worst in practice, now he is confident of his victory in both exams. His roommate is excited about his friend and how he will pass the practical class, which is about to begin. The student who always ranks first in practice decided to pick on Ruin, taunting him for his weak strength. Ruin, in turn, is confident because he has a trump card up his sleeve. But this student does not want to fall behind and offers to let him pass, to which Ruin responds with disagreement. He was angered by his confidence and decided to challenge him to a one-on-one fight. The shooting exam began, and this year it was made more difficult with moving targets, which affected the average score of the graduates. The student who is the best in practice is named Mikkel. His uncle is a professor at this school, and by calling his nephew, he shows everyone the best receiver. Indeed, he was able to hit several targets at once, and no other student has surpassed him yet. His uncle and all the other professors were pleasantly surprised that someone at the academy had the best skills, his uncle boasted. He was stopped by the head of the academy, Tyrion Ignat, who wanted him to leave the exam, but Professor Heidel stopped him so he could watch Ruina. Despite the crowds of onlookers watching him, he is determined to pass this exam with flying colors. He quickly and epically created many fireballs, stunning everyone with his speed. As usual, Mikkel confidently said that without the talent to release mana, his powers to create balls were useless. As it turned out, he had recently acquired another skill, moving very quickly, like a typhoon, and he dealt with the targets quickly and powerfully. All the professors were very impressed by the strength and speed of the weakest student in the academy. As it turned out, Ruin scored 27 goals, surpassing the academy's record. The head of the academy applauded, standing up, because no one had ever thought of using a ball to score goals. Mikkel's face turned blue from the shock, because he did not expect this from the weakest student in the academy. Ruin was very proud of himself because he had waited his whole life for this moment when he was the best of the best, but proceedings awaited him ahead. His father was very upset that his son had used magic on his hands, not considering it to be magic as such. The professors reassured him that magic was limitless, and that if he continued to do so well, magic would become like mathematics for his son. But to his father, it still sounded like nonsense, but the head of the academy calmed his ardor. After all, today he had seen a miracle he would never have expected, especially from Ruin. But the other professors did not share the headmaster's feelings because one of them was Uncle Mikkel, who was supposed to be his successor, but things did not go according to plan. Jason, his roommate, stopped Ruina in the hallway with questions, but almost the entire school wanted to talk to him because now he was the star of the academy. Of course, he was a thorn in someone's side because Mikkel was waiting for him in his room. He grabbed Ruina by the collar, saying that he was jealous. He grabbed Mikkel's arm and pulled him back, saying that they would settle it in a one-on-one fight so that he wouldn't get expelled from school. Mikkel shouted in a rage that if he had been a weakling for 6 years, he shouldn't think he could defeat the most experienced student. The second stage of the exam began, in which the students would measure their strength. This statue is an artifact that must be struck, and in the process, it absorbs mana. The first student's attempt was unsuccessful because, even though he put all his strength into it, the artifact decided that it was not enough. The girl who attacked after him was strong, but the artifact still considered her weak. Next in line was Mikkel, but the artifact was disappointed because he was the son of Gerhill, who had also once begged for points, but he was worse than his father. Next in line was Ruin Ardell, but this time he decided to use 4th-rank explosive mana-burning magic. While everyone was wondering how the weakest student managed to use such powerful magic, he suddenly transferred the magic to his legs and struck. The artifact's reaction was strange because it was shocked by such power, and it felt the power of Drac and Ruin, so it waited for him for a long time. The artifact was familiar with Drac, and Ruin asked it to tell him more about him, which it decided to do later when no one was around. The examiner who was recording the scores asked Ruin for his score, but he said he couldn't evaluate such magic. Even when threatened with a contract that obliged him to evaluate everyone, the artifact did not give Ruin's score. He was offered a choice between receiving 0 points or 100, and he chose to receive the highest score. As always, his peers discussed him, as he was at the center of events. On the road, he met Professor Heidel, who told him that the head of the academy had learned of his merit and wanted to offer him a reward. He gave him a scroll that mentioned the artifact room. The professor led him to the basement, which was difficult to reach, as no one knew the way there, since it was the only place no one knew about. When they reached the main door to the artifacts, the professor stopped, saying that he was only allowed to go this far and that he had to go on alone. He didn't understand what was going on, but decided to go in since it was his reward. The professor waited outside. In this room, there were many artifacts that he only knew about from books, and apparently, it was the magical warehouse of Archmage Freud Ignat. Walking through the hall, he did not notice the stone artifact sitting in the middle of the room until he called out to it. The artifact Kingram says that Ruin looks very lost, as if he does not realize his true value. By the way, this repository was the only place where he had the right to be in his usual form. He called Ruin a player and is trying to find out how he got such a valuable and unique artifact that no one else can find. But the most important question for Ruin was to find out who Drac was. His question was answered with the explanation that he was a creature who wanted to become a god. Once he came to the tribe of the Heavenly Peak to which Kingram belonged. At that time, he was unpolished and small with an unattractive appearance. Despite his appearance, he turned out to be very strong, and the whole tribe could not resist him because he was growing stronger every day. After that, he lived with the trolls, who respected him and treated him as a member of their family. He taught Kingram, the next leader of the tribe, the language of magic for almost 100 years. Ruins does not understand how an ordinary person can live so long, but he denies his humanity, as it turns out that his true essence was the black dragon Draconia. The student was impressed that dragons did exist after all, and that even magic came from them. However, Drac himself did not know how to unleash magic and found different ways to fight by filling his hands and feet with power. Drac created an ability that only he could control, filling his hands with magic and turning it into the power he demonstrated. With this fighting technique, Drac became the strongest being in the world. But his greed destroyed him and everything around him because he grew stronger every day and in an instant destroyed the world. And because of this, he was called the Destroyer. After this conversation, he gained new skills, such as the title of Ogre, the skill of Ogre Fury, and the spirit of the embodiment of the power of countries. The essence of the power of Ogre Fury borrows the power of an enraged ogre and gives Ruin a temporary increase in strength. When he thought about the skill embodiment of the power of the lands, a ball suddenly appeared in his hand. The ogre guessed that he had been given new skills, which was similar to how Drac often talked to himself in the void. In that case, he asked the ogre what the small ball in his hand was. Drac always carried this ball with him and he was unable to find out what it was, but he assumes that it is the embodiment of the strang in this ball. This strang is called a spirit, but it differs from the usual ones in that it had a nasty character and constantly asked Drac for endless power. Apparently it wants to awaken, because this embodiment should come to him soon. It hatched and came in the form of a bear, causing Ruin to wonder what it was. The bear cub turns out to be able to talk and is offended that he was called a bear. Everyone around is surprised that such a small, cute bear can talk, but it turns out that he doesn't like being called that. Ruin is interested in him since he is not a bear, so who is he really? It turns out that he is an incarnation not associated with form, which tells Ruin nothing about his essence. He can transform into anything and wants to demonstrate his power. Suddenly, he realizes that his magical power has disappeared and he cannot transform into anyone. This bear thinks that perhaps he has been reincarnated on an empty stomach and rudely demands food, which surprises Ruin with its rudeness. Since Ruin, the owner of the artifact, automatically became the bear's master, he may even be weak, because he couldn't even get him food. This little guy is very small, even for a hand, but he is so sharp that he makes his master wake him up when there is food, and then decides to go to sleep. But the big ogre recognizes him by his mischievous character, just like Stran, who has not changed at all over the years. The picture of Ruin and the bear reminds the ogre of his old days when he encountered Stran and Drac in the flames of the Heavenly Peak. He asks his student what he will do with the unknown power he carries within him in the future. The power that makes him stronger each time can set him on the right path, but it can also consume him alive, and the question is what he will do when he becomes stronger. The reason he craved power was to protect people from demons, elevate the Ardell family name, and prove himself to those who despised him. He decided that he would continue to gain strength so that he would be ready for anything. Kingram is happy with his choice and will wait for him in the future with good news. Although he found a clue about Drake, his life has not changed, except for one thing, feeding Strana. He wakes the bear, asking if he wanted to eat so much, and he instantly gets up to eat. This kid seems to be constantly obsessed with food and eats a lot. But he doesn't eat ordinary food, he eats the power he gets from the task, that is, Strana feeds on his power. Strana's skill is to be a companion, that is, he gives his master 100% of his power, accelerating his development. That is, the master gets an additional 100 points when he becomes stronger, but the higher the stars, and he has only one so far, the more he gets. As it turned out, before being sealed, he had 31 stars, which is 3,100 points of strength, which is much stronger than the less than 1,000 that Ruin has. Ruin is very motivated by this and wants to know if there is a way to increase his strength beyond completing tasks. The mischievous bear replies that he is great because he knows the answers to these questions. But the master turns out to be immune to blackmail and threatens that if he doesn't want to tell, he may be left without food. As it turns out, there are different ways to gain strength, such as receiving more difficult tasks, such as battles, and so on. But you can also search for artifacts or create artifact items yourself. You can also prepare elixirs from ogre tendons, which increase strength. But it turned out that none of these options were suitable for Ruin, as he had less than 1,000 strength points, and without this, his body might not be able to withstand such a load. Misha gave an example that he was now like a child who had just started walking. Motivated, Ruin decided that he would train every day, and when his score reached 930, the real combat exam began. Ruin was eagerly awaiting this day to fight Mikkel and show who he really was. The example of the students shows that sometimes they can hurt each other, which is why knights were invited to help with the exam. The test lasted 10 days, and as a result, 13 students were identified as the strongest. Everyone was curious about what monsters they would be given on the last day of the exam. It turned out to be a large, strong orc. They are much larger than humans and have comparable intellectual abilities, but are more cruel. The selected students doubted the correctness of fighting such a strong opponent, but Professor Heidel reassured them, telling them to work to their full potential. Mikkel decided to attack first, using his most powerful spell, the Ice Arrow. The orc turned out to be much more cunning and decided to jump over the knights and attack from above, which no one expected. But this only made Mikkel tremble, and he was so paralyzed with fear that he couldn't dodge, even with the professor's shouts. The professor could only watch and decided to help his student by grabbing the fence and shouting that Mikkel Garachil was failing the exam. Uncle Mikkel was very annoyed that his nephew had failed, so he thought something was wrong. He decided to ask the headmaster about the test for Ruin, but the headmaster did not understand what he was talking about. He reminded the headmaster that Ruin would get 100 points on the King Rima exam and that it would be unfair to give him a normal assignment. The headmaster doesn't quite understand what he means, because they don't have any other strong monsters for him. The knights who came from other schools brought an ogre, which is much stronger than an orc. Reminding him of the danger, the headmaster is puzzled, but Uncle Mikkel reassures him, saying that there are many professors and knights here and that everything will be fine. Unfortunately, no one was against testing Ruin's abilities in reality. Before the exam began, Professor Heidel stopped Ruin, warning him that his test would be more difficult and that everyone was counting on him. His face completely contorted when he learned that instead of an orc, he would be fighting a giant, which is much stronger than the previous one. But Strawn is quite sure that it will be fun to give Ruin his first real opponent. They are similar to orcs, but physically much stronger, so they can break a skull with a single blow. The head of the Knight Academy believes that it is wrong to test a student with such a strong opponent, but he has no choice but to obey. The knights cannot believe their eyes that such a frail student will fight the giant and be able to defeat him. Ruina pushes his way through the knights, who are outraged and want him to back off, but he explains that he has powers that are not quite ordinary. The knights still do not understand what is happening and wonder why he is taking such a risk. Taking off his cloak, he is completely confident in himself, and even the commander of the knights senses that he can do it because he does not feel any fear from him. The test begins, and everyone feels the tension like never before, because this is the first time they are using an ogre in an exam. Ruin began his attack with a fireball and rushed straight at the ogre, which made the knights nervous. No one understands how a student of the Magic Academy went into close combat. It is not clear to any of them how he managed to stay alive after such a blow. The commander of the knights shouted nervously, asking why he did not inform them of his actions, because he almost died. He apologized, of course, but asked if they would have given him a chance if they had known his plan. Battle is not the time for conversation, and the knight asks him to step aside until they can adjust their attacks on the ogre. But he does not move, reminding them that this is his trial and that they should give him the opportunity to complete it himself. He himself does not understand how the ogre ended up in front of him. He was confident because of his skill in understanding ogres, and he was given the task of defeating the ogre, which would give him more strength. Because of these factors, he had no reason to hesitate, and the first blow to the ogre completed part of the task, leaving only the part of defeating the ogre. If at first the monster asked not to approach him, after the first blow he only wanted to defeat the man. The student plans to find his weak spot, and for this he uses the skill of refracting time, which gives him super speed. At the same time, those around him cannot believe their eyes and also ask themselves many questions. He finally found the weak spot and decided to strike the ferocious ogre there. No one expected Ruin to be able to fight like this, but suddenly the ogre began to fight back, and he was able to withstand the blows. No human had ever been able to hold an ogre's arms during a fight. The ogre threw him by grabbing his leg, but suddenly he landed and immediately jumped high towards him. After knocking the ogre to the ground, he decided to finish him off, but suddenly he asked if he was human. He did not expect an ordinary person to answer him, and that he understood ogres. He used a power that increased his strike by 30 seconds and crushed the ogre to the floor. Stran, who was watching from the sidelines, was proud of him for not being as weak as he had expected. Finally, with his bare hands, Ruin Ardell defeated the ogre himself, shocking everyone who was watching the fight. While everyone was discussing and examining the ogre, the commander of the knights wanted to know where he had learned such skills, to which Ruin replied that he was teaching himself, but the contempt remained. Seeing Professor Heidel, he wanted to know his score for this exam. He did not expect that his student would not even give him a chance to help him, and would be able to defeat the ogre on his own, for which he was declared to have passed the test. For completing the task, he received the skill of the player's eye, which allows him to see the invisible and sense surveillance by digitizing everything. Stran, learning that he has acquired the skill, congratulates him on finally becoming a player. A player is a person who has an unusual eye and can see the faint outlines of enemies who hide themselves with magic. Now they have unlocked a mini-map that shows everything that happens within a radius of 500 meters. Another advantage is that he can see the status window of the desired target, and the available information depends on the target's level. But the advantages don't end there, and Strawn asks him to look through the eyes of the player at the ogre he defeated. As it turned out, a window appeared in front of him with information about the ogre. He had 3 stars out of 4 and was slightly weaker than the other ogres. His attempt to analyze the information about Professor Heidel was unsuccessful, because all he knew was that he was a 6th class mage. It turned out that he could not see information about people stronger than him, and as his strength grew, he would be able to see everything. After completing the last test, rumors that Ruin Ardell had defeated the ogre spread throughout the academy. While talking to a friend about whether he liked such attention, their conversation was interrupted by girls. They praised him for being so strong and cool during the fight and gave him gifts. But he didn't like such attention and, not attaching any importance to it, offered the gift to his friend. Very alarmed by Ruin's behavior, he scolded him for not appreciating that she had overcome her embarrassment and gathered snacks. But looking at Jason Damon, he remembers his high potential, which he envies. Over the past few days, Ruin has tested the potential of each student, and his and Mikkel's were equally high. He cares deeply about his friend, asking Jason to try harder and encouraging him that everything will be very good for him in the future. His friend did not expect such revelations and was surprised, but agreed with him and promised that next time he would try to get into the top 10. Jason, like everyone else, is very concerned about his friend's powers, and whether it is Ruin, with whom he has been communicating for 6 years, sitting next to him. Word by word, he himself does not understand if it is him and if all this is really happening. Lately, there have been rumors that he wants to oust Mikkel and become not just the best graduate and representative of the academies, but Ruin's pure heart does not allow such thoughts, and he is not interested in this at all. His friend runs after him and asks how he cannot be interested in this, since this year will be the year of the Great Festival. The Great Festival is a gathering of famous academies in the 5th month of each year to determine the best magician, and once every 8 years, the Olympics for the best magician. The winner of this festival not only receives a title and a cash prize, but can also gain various privileges. Therefore, there is a limit on the number of participants, 1 for individual competitions and 30 for group competitions, resulting in a total of 31 students from the academies. The one chosen for the individual competitions will be the representative of the academy, and that is presumably Ruin. As it turned out, Mikkel performed every year, and no one particularly remembers his performances. And in the individual competitions, he ended up among the last 4 times out of 5. Because of him, the academy was nicknamed the Academy of Last Place, where no one is capable of performing well in either individual or group competitions. His friends believe that the only way to get rid of this stigma is to send Ruin to show who is really worthy. But he wants to wait until the end of the exam, because what if he fails? After all, the festival participants are ultimately selected based on the results of the first semester exam and the recommendations of the professors. He still has a one-on-one battle against Mikkel ahead of him, so he needs to focus on the next exam. 4 days after the end of the 3rd stage and during daily training, Ruin began to receive 1,000 strength points. They achieved the completion of their preparation, after which they will begin to quickly level up. By completing so many tasks, their new achievement, a repeat task, advanced to the 2nd level, and at that moment, Mishka went to get something to eat. As we know, Strawn increases achievements several times over, and this time he received double the reward. At that moment, Strawn ate and suddenly flew into the air, enveloped in Ruin's flames. Mikkel's uncle, who made the professors let him fight the giant Ruin, did not expect that he would be given extra points and was very angry with him. Now his main concern is whether Mikkel will be able to resist Ruin and defeat him. His uncle understands that he will not be able to defeat Ruin and will not even receive the title of best graduate at the festival. But he wants to do everything possible to keep the Garachil family at the top of the academies. As it turned out, the embodiment of Strawn's power advanced to the 2nd level, for which Ruin received an additional 200 points of power as a reward. He even feels like he has grown taller than he was before, possibly due to the level increase. Indeed, now with each level he will grow, but with each level it will become more and more difficult to earn points. The repetitions of training became 5,000, but a task of training in real combat was added. Now Strand can become anyone depending on the level, but to become a human, you need to be level 5. Ruins asks to demonstrate his skills and show who he can transform into. He turns into a scarecrow, surprising Ruin with his strange appearance. He justifies this appearance by saying that he once helped Drac a lot in his endeavors. Only then does Ruin realize that he is a mannequin for real training, helping to complete tasks. Since he is still weak, he corresponds to the level of a third-class maid. But when he grows stronger and gains power, he will be able to transform into anyone, even a demon or a dragon. Not wanting to waste time, they decided to start training and fight each other one-on-one as mages. If Strand hits Ruina with magic, he will only knock him back without causing much damage. Mikkel is furious that it is difficult for him to defeat Ruina, but his annoyed uncle does not particularly want to listen to him. But he does not understand why he is angry, because it was he who complicated his task, thereby increasing his score. This makes him very angry, and if his family finds out, his uncle will be in big trouble. Because of this, Mikkel asks them not to talk nonsense and to decide together what they can do against Ruina to remedy the situation. Mikkel's main fear is that Ruin will become the representative of the academies at the Great Festival, but his uncle has a plan. The plan involves an awakening herb called the Burning Flower. It grows in the northern hallucinogenic territories and is a rare and valuable medicinal plant sometimes used to create special elixirs. If Mikkel drinks it, his spells will be cast faster, but the side effect is that he will no longer feel pain and will no longer be able to distinguish between his own and others. But he looks down on this mixture, not wanting to use it in his final exam. His uncle forces him to do so, as his position is on the verge of being expelled from the family, but he is afraid above all of Professor Heidel, who is capable of anything. As it turns out, his uncle is a professor who tests drugs, and he has an idea. He presents another potion that can mask the fact that the flower has been taken. The day of the one-on-one battles in the Mana Barrier Arena has arrived. Finally, the long-awaited day has come for Mikkel and Ruin to fight one-on-one. Ruin's professional assistant, Strand, suggests that if his opponent is prepared to get close for the fight, it will be difficult for him. But their plan is to get to him and defeat their opponent with a single blow. The opponents are warned that since this fight is very close to reality, there are geometric objects located around the perimeter. He involuntarily notices that something is wrong with Mikkel and that he looks different than usual. He found this unusual and checked him through the player's eyes, where it was said that he had a double call and was in a special condition. He fully understood that his opponent had taken something but hid it so that he would not be exposed. Mikkel's uncle, Professor Ellick, checks for drugs before the exam, and presumably he helped hide the fact that Mikkel had taken drugs. Ruin decided not to pay attention to this, because the main thing was not to use black magic, and that was all. There was no need to worry about the opponent because in this hall, the Mana Barrier reduced the effectiveness of magic by 99%. Ruin wondered what would happen if it turned out that someone had taken a forbidden potion, which greatly alarmed Mikkel. Punishments range from being barred from taking the exam to, at the discretion of the examiners, expulsion from the academy. They dispersed to their seats, but he was only thinking about finding evidence of potion use. The battle began, and Mikkel cast his first spell, which everyone saw him quickly release, sensing something was wrong. But as it turned out, Mikkel's spells were weakened while Ruin's were as strong as ever. At first, Ruin only defends himself against his magic in order to study the effects of his new powers. He found out that it only reduces the casting time and increases mana collection, and his excited appearance tells him that he drank the awakening herb. He told Mikkel that he found out what he drank and now wants to test his sensitivity to pain. And now he had figured it all out, but that was no problem in defeating an ordinary opponent. If Mikkel could use magic quickly under the potion's influence, Ruin could move faster. He was able to deflect the fire magic with his fist using the power of the earth, thereby obtaining all the information about his new power. And of course, this helped him get close to him, which was not particularly difficult. As a final blow, he decided to just slap his opponent on the forehead. Of course, the latter flew several meters away, but he began to mumble something that Ruin did not like, so he immediately dealt the next blow. At this point, he didn't want to waste any more time and decided to end it all quickly. In the end, everyone realized that Mikkel could be seriously injured if the fight continued, so Ruin decided to loudly announce that he had taken a potion. The examiner will find out if he is telling the truth, and if he is lying, he will be disqualified. He says that the person who can get rare potions and who checks before the exam could get one potion for his favorite, and that it is all one person. Professor Ellick jumped up from his seat and rushed to the arena, outraged by Ruin's statements. No one really believes him, so he decides to demonstrate the basis for his arguments. He shows his power using the example of the tree he hit Mikkel with, and it was indeed too strong. And if we assume the number of blows I inflicted on him, he remained conscious and laughed as if he felt no pain. But Professor Ellick still manages to deny that the head of the academy couldn't take it anymore and stopped it all by inviting him to his office. According to rumors, Professor Ellick was fired and given a new nickname, Ruin, the Expeller of Magicians. His most important achievement is that he was summoned to the head of the academy. Entering the gate, he saw a beautiful garden and Theron's throne, on which the King of Magicians sat. Suddenly, the head approached him with a question about what he saw before him. The appearance of this place was created with the help of Malarok's eye, that is, it was an illusion of some kind. Malarok was a demon who had the power to show people what they most wanted to see. After his fall, his parts were turned into artifacts. For example, his eye could show illusions. The head shared what he saw, and it turned out to be a world where students were students and magicians behaved like magicians. And Ruin saw that he had won and had become the best student and graduate after all. They left the garden, and the headmaster treated him to a cup of coffee while trying to explain the reason for the summons. He was very interested in how he determined that Mikkel had used a potion during the trials, and that it was indeed a burning flower. He began to explain that his unusual condition was initially suspicious when he saw a couple of symptoms. Mikkel was acting aggressively and anxious, and the flow of mana around him was unusual, and the mana was amplified. When asked how he was sure about the potion, he replied that he used physical strength rather than magic, as magic was suppressed by the barrier. He added that Mikkel was in shock and laughing despite his physical injuries, which explained the use of the potion. Listening to his answers, he concluded that he remained calm even in critical moments and had a strong sense of his opponent. The head apologized for the inconvenience and decided to make sure that the Garachil family did not harm him. But he also had a proposal to participate in the great festival that would take place in the 7th month as a representative of the academy. Ruin couldn't even dream of such a thing, but he doubted himself because he had never competed before and lacked experience. The head reassured him that he was a judge at the festival and, in his opinion, Ruin was more than worthy of being considered a candidate for victory. He believes that Ruin has every chance of winning, and that he could become a secret weapon who appeared out of nowhere, since no one knows about him yet. The arguments presented turned out to be true, and he decided that no one really knows about him and that he will be able to win and go to this festival. The headmaster suggested that it would be useful for him to learn martial arts, so he invited a martial arts professor. Ruin was very surprised when he saw him, and the professor asked if he was glad to see him. Golter Perante is the leader of the Knightly Order of the Foldran Territory, one of the 5 6th-rank knights, and the only one in the Kingdom of Radian. He was the very knight who defended him from the ogre in the 3rd exam. It is a great honor for him to study and be a student of such a great knight. Golter wants to clarify one point related to the fact that he is a special mage who is forced to fight exclusively at close range. From the last time he fought the ogre, it was clear that he had no martial arts training, and that he was as easy to read as an open book. He is right that strikes will help against the ogre, but no matter how strong he is, his opponents will be able to predict his actions by looking at the movement of his shoulders and hips. But he shouldn't worry, because he has the best knight in front of him, who will train him in a short time. Golter was ready to start training as soon as possible, and they got started. The most important thing for a knight is his feet, which will guide his next step, and he needs to learn how to walk correctly and only then the art of the body. The training center usually teaches celestial martial arts. In addition to sword techniques, celestial martial arts includes 36 combat techniques. As it turned out, the benefit was one-sided because for Professor Golter, it was only an investment in the future magician, rather than a benefit for himself. In that case, Ruin was ready to carry out any assignment Professor Golter gave him. But he felt awkward hearing the name Professor Golter, because he was not even 30 years old, so he asked to be called Hen. But Hen was very pleased with him, because even though he was weak, his endurance was excellent. Ruin broke Ogre's jaw during the battle, and it was very interesting to teach a mage close combat that was physically stronger than Ogre. The new skills improved his body art skills, and as a reward, he received the power of madness, which fills every part of the body with magic. The effect of mastering the heavenly martial art was incredible, because thanks to it, Strawn was able to raise his level to the 3rd. Having gained more than 2,000 points of strength, he felt an incredibly enormous power. He gains points faster than Drac, who struggled for 2 years, and after meeting Stran, another 6 months on top of that. Suddenly, Jason ran up to Ruin again with big news. As it turned out, signs with a list of participants in the Great Festival had been posted at the entrance to the academy. Ruins was at the top of the list, and he remembers that during the entrance exams, he was the only one who performed on stage, and even then, everyone envied him. But unfortunately, justifying their hopes, for years he showed himself only from a pitiful side. He could only watch from afar as Mikkel received all the laurels. Now, however, he has a permanent smile on his face because he is in first place among those going to the festival. He will represent the Academy. Of course, it took a long time, but he has once again become the representative of the Academies in every sense. Jason was also lucky enough to be selected as the 31st participant in the group competition. Professor Heidel was surprised to hear that Ruin had mastered the heavenly martial art, and had also become a 5th-rank mage at only 16 years old. He even said that sometimes his genius scared him to death. Preparations for the festival went very well, and the day came when they were to travel to the festival venue by mana train. Ruin and Mikkel were about to board the train when suddenly their attention was drawn to a very rude student from another academy. This student's name was Henkus. He had once performed with Mikkel, and they were, so to speak, on the same side of evil. They were against the representative because they did not know him, and it would be better to choose Mikkel because he was experienced in this regard. Students from other academies said that they did not want to accept Ruin as a representative, so let them deal with it themselves. As you can see, many are just trying to suck up to the Garachil family. Now, a confident Ruin stood up for himself, saying that Mikkel's dogs remain loyal to him even if his owner was expelled from the academy. He justifies his rude attitude by trying to make it clear to narrow-minded people that he only gives one piece of advice. This festival is far superior to all others, and if he proves himself to be the best here, he won't need the support of the Garachil family and will be able to break through on his own. Henkes claims that this can only be achieved by winning, but without it, they will be stuck under the leadership of the Garachil family. To which he replies that it is possible if they cooperate with the right people and not with those who prevent them from being a team. Finally, he adds that he is giving them the time of the trip to think about whether they want to be on his side and win, or whether they want to lose as usual. He also reminds them that there will be no one from the Garachils at this festival to evaluate them. Suddenly, Henkes warns that if Ruin loses the first individual battle, he will not listen to him and agree to be on his side. The train was traveling very fast, and Strang, who had seen many years due to his age, was amazed at how far progress had come, because there had never been anything like this before. Students from another academy entered the car, saying that the train smelled of losers and asking who was the bumpkin here. They were from the Oyo Magic Institute, the only educational institution in the Sandy Desert Kingdom. They were famous for their perfect sword skills and extreme physical training. As it turned out, they bullied Mikkel every year during the competitions and gave them no peace, forcing them to serve. They insulted their academy, saying that they would come in last place again this year, but Ruin was very calm and didn't even bat an eye at such words. He didn't even know that his academy was so openly bullied at competitions. Professor Heidel sat with them in the carriage, but he didn't care because now he was just an ordinary escort to the competition. As a representative, he had to protect his team when suddenly the main bully came to ask where Mikkel was. To which he replied that he was most likely lying in bed praying that his broken ribs would heal properly. The bully saw him for the first time, but then one of the students whispered that he was a representative of the academies. They began to introduce themselves, and it turned out that his name was Seda Malkiri from the Oyo Academy. Ruins drew the line, saying that this was enough for a first meeting, and that if he was done looking for trouble, he should get out of his car. But he assumes that the bully wants to apologize to everyone for the insults he uttered in a polite manner. Seda's face turned purple with anger, and he demanded an explanation from Henkes about the new representative, to which Henkes did not know what to say. Ruin saw that his academy students were trembling when they saw the students from Oyota because of Seth and his bully. He even figured out their plan, which was to crush their opponent's morale before the battle. Not wanting to waste much time, he suggests that Seth settle the matter on the spot, to which Seth thinks he has gone mad. He had already started to raise his hands, saying that Ruin would regret his words, when suddenly the professor from Uda entered and stopped him. The professor from Uda apologizes for their students' rudeness, which Professor Heidel accepts. He forcibly took the noisy Set to his carriage, shouting at him to hurry up. In classic fashion, he threatened that he would definitely deal with Ruin later. It wasn't that simple, because it turned out that the professor from Uda himself had suggested this method for victory. He argued that when Seda behaved like that, Professor Heidel smiled as he watched him. This smile made him wary that a fight was coming, as it could be a sign of something. They assume that this guy Ruin definitely has something they don't know about, and that he is different from Mikkel. After the showdown with Oyota, the atmosphere in the car improved, and they began to discuss the initial matches that they would have to cope with as a group without Ruin. At a certain point, these guys, overflowing with envy and selfishness, began to unite. They are worried that Ruin acted rashly, because these strong guys literally grew up in battles. But he is concerned that the others are angry that these guys do not respect anyone from Ignite, making no secret of it, but if he had not responded to them. After all, then they would have started mocking them even more, and they would have completely justified this mocking nickname. He asks whether they want that or not. They allowed themselves to be beaten, and that is why they have been mocking them all these years, and he suggests that now is not the time for selfish motives. The plan of action was for Henkes to stand at the gate during the Arrowball match, which made him very embarrassed. After such a sensible speech, even Mikkel's most ardent supporters sided with Ruin, and now he had to maintain this attitude until the end. They arrived in the Duchy of Altain, a state that is part of the Imperial Federation of Raynok, and is the only one in the Empire with neutral status. In this land, emotions must be set aside, because if bloodshed occurs, the Raynok Empire will hold a trial and punish them for their crimes. Due to this situation, large-scale competitions such as this festival are held here. Ruins, who had never been here before, was surprised that everything was different here, but he was also surprised because what else could be expected from the capital of the kingdom? This city exudes a noble antiquity, and its residents stroll carefree through the streets, which makes it clear that they come from a very small place. Now they must travel by carriage to their temporary residence in this city. Professor Heidel sincerely hopes that neither Mikkel nor Ruin will accidentally visit students from another academy, even by mistake. As it turns out, in such moments, it would be almost impossible to break up a fight. Strand suddenly shouted to look at where a certain smell was coming from. This smell was his relic, Drac, which gave him more strength. The next day, when everyone was just waking up, Ruin went out somewhere during the parade, and Jason even laughed at the date, wondering if he was going out looking like that. With the help of a mini-map, they ran in search of his relic and came to a workshop called Touching Memories. They believed that an item used by the Black Dragon himself would be kept in a more unusual place. At the very least, they expected to see a black market or even the warehouse of some rich man. For ordinary people, Drac's relic is useless, because only those who have problems with mana release can use it. At such moments, in order not to waste a lot of time, they use the player's eye. They found the Ring of Invulnerability, Drac's first artifact, which increases the chance of nullifying physical damage, but resistance can even come from touching Durga. It was Drac's first and failed artifact, as it could work at any time, and Strand doubts whether he needs it. Ruins confidently says that it is needed, and even when he puts it on, it fits him like a glove and adds 200 points of strength. Wanting to buy it, he even asked the price, but they gave him the ring for free because they didn't know what to do with it. Then he decided to buy something else, and through the prism of a player's eyes, he determined the value of any item, which was very useful. Suddenly, he saw a rare book about the quantum mechanism of magic and swords. Just as he reached for the book, another girl wanted to get it too. Her name is Irene Prius. She is a 5th-class mage with high potential from Seiki Women's University. The Dirty King, also known as the King of Mages and Borders, chose 11 mages to represent the next generation, and she was one of them. He had only heard that she was a genius close to reaching the 5th class, but it turned out that she was already a 5th-class mage. She asks him to give her the book, but he insists that he touched it first. From his uniform, she recognizes that he is from Ignit, and she introduces herself, but she learns that he has found what he was looking for, and she came specifically for this book and asks him for it. He asked a perfectly logical question. Why does she need this book? Because people don't just look for things like that. She replied that it was part of her individual assignment and she couldn't give any more details, asking him not to ask any more questions. Assuming that it could be an assignment from the Dirty King, he decided to give her the book, thinking that maybe it really was important to her. He told his friends that he had met Irene Prius, and they immediately began to ask him how and where it had happened. Jason envies him and says that he dreams of touching her at least once, to which Ruin responds mockingly, asking what kind of dream that is. Henkes boasts that he also saw her at the Great Festival once and even sat next to her, but even he couldn't talk to her. In any case, she is strong but always comes in second place, losing to Duma Prime. Jason angrily asks how he can talk about his Irene like that, but the conversation was about the number 1 at the special school for battle mages, so he is the best. He also possesses some kind of shining sword that interests Ruin. This sword was the reason Irene needed that book, because it could help defeat the number 1 mage. However, this sword does not give a significant increase in magic, and besides, becoming a skilled swordsman is not so easy. Duma Pride has sword skills and a talent for magic, as well as a wealthy family and good looks, which Jason greatly envies. Now Ruin wonders if he can defeat the 2 geniuses who fight each other every year. He remembered the words of the head of the Ignite Academy, who said that he was more than worthy of being considered a candidate for victory. Training began, and the first team was asked to gather outside as soon as possible for the opening day of the Great Festival. The time has come for the opening matches of the Grand Festival, where students from different academies have gathered. Ignit's opponents are students from Oyota, which makes them very happy. These are the worst opponents for Ignit because they are famous for their dirty play, but many of them were also injured from interacting with Oyota. The Oyo team believes that they don't need to warm up because defeating Ignite is a piece of cake. Ruins wanted to respond right away, but decided to be smart and say that Ignite is not the same as before. He decided to introduce himself as a representative to other academies, showing himself and getting to know them up close. At the end, he added in a stern tone to stop calling them the Academy, arguing that it was unpleasant. After all, he had been in last place for so long that he was tired of it all, and this time he wanted to try to fight for first place. Other students shouted that how else could they call an academy that was always in last place. Seda asked who he was and whether he thought it was some kind of local competition, to which he replied that he was Ignite's secret weapon. Seda decided not to back down, so the team from Oyota began to prepare a plan and search for information about Ruina, but they found that he had always failed in the past. But as it turned out, at the beginning of the semester, he changed dramatically and became a monster with amazing results. But they are confident in themselves and did not dig too deep, deciding that it was all over after the academy and they should not worry about it. As a result, they will act in the traditional way for the Uda Institute. Ruina discussed the plan with his team for the group mana throwing competition without a representative. The essence of the game is to throw a grenade filled with mana at a mithril golem, and the team that destroys their golem faster wins. They are worried that without a representative they might lose and are very unsure of themselves. But Ruin has already come up with a plan for them to split into 4 groups so that each of them can do their part. The first group will heat the mana balls, the second will move them, the third will attack the golem, and the fourth will restore the opponent's golem. The enemy will attack with all 30 pairs of hands, which will take them longer to destroy the golem. If they attack the enemy with fewer people, plus the guys in Oyote are not weaklings, will they really be able to win, which is what Ruin wants? While Oyote throws 1 grenade, they will throw 2 ATOS and 3 grenades. His team also decided to go all out for victory by agreeing to Ruin's plan. The team led by Hinkies, Zala, Mill, Mora, Ayake, and Frey will heat the grenade. Taemons will move the heated grenades to the next group. Ruina began to divide them by name, taking into account their abilities. Of course, with the help of the player's eye, he looked at who had the best strength. The guys were impressed with the representative when they perfectly fit into the group that suited them. Hope appeared in the eyes of these guys because they became more confident and determined to win. Fulham suddenly entered the house where they were staying in very bad condition. It turns out that Oyota's students and the representative took him out and began to beat him up, mocking him. Ruin immediately went to deal with Seth, where they were waiting for him. Now confident, Ruin immediately called out to Seth to come out immediately. He didn't like being called by his first and last name, so he began to rebel, asking on what grounds he was being so arrogant. Ruin didn't need to beat him up, as he knocked Seth down just by squeezing his shoulders. He was shocked by such strength, but immediately began waving his fists. He turned his hand, warning that if he touched his team outside the arena, it would be even worse for him. Seda lay on the floor, sobbing in pain, teaching everyone a lesson that it was not worth messing with Ruin. Ruina offered an interesting bet to Uda's representative, Seda Malkri. The bet was that if Ignit defeated Uda, he would get to slap Ruina. On this cheerful note of victory, they had to go to the Altane Stadium for the competition. Ruin is very pleased with himself because he has become part of the great festival where legends are created. The opening ceremony is over, and they head to their seats, where Seda warns that he will not let his guard down. But his goal is not Seda, but Doom Prime, who wins in all disciplines every year. If Ignit is obsessed with victory, they are bound to meet him. Suddenly, Irene Prius herself appeared in the corridor, wanting to buy that very book. She is amazed that he even went into open conflict by visiting the Oyo Institute. When asked how she found out about it, she said that Altine was a small town, and she was sure that everyone already knew about it. But he didn't want to provoke a conflict and just talked about how things were. Since he would allow her to take the book she was looking for, she wanted to give him some advice not to stand out too much. It turns out that she herself adheres to this rule of hiding her true abilities. In just a few minutes, the mana throwing will begin, so Ruin ran to his friends because the Ignit and Oyota academies will be the first to participate. The fighting spirit of the Ignit academies is very strong, and before the competition, they encourage each other that they will prove their strength. The spectators are confused because usually only knights are divided into groups for competitions, not mages. Everyone was sure that the Oyota Academy would win, but suddenly the Igniat Golem's arm was broken. Ruins helped his team from the sidelines, telling them who was doing well and who needed to switch places. The Oyo Academy Golem maintained its health thanks to the people who healed it. Seda was furious, and instead of supporting the team, he chose to insult it. All this time, Irene was watching the competition closely and was impressed by the team's good strategy. She noticed that such precise play could be achieved if you knew exactly who was good at what, and he quickly found that book. She was curious about who he was. Jason threw his decisive ice ball, defeating the Golem and the Oyo Academy. Throwing a mana grenade should have led to Oyo's victory, but no one expected the Ignite Academy, or rather the Academy, to win. Soon, the individual Capture the Flag competition will begin, where Seda Malkiri and Ruin Ardell will compete. Currently, Ignit is in 20th place out of 32, which is ideal for attracting interest but not enough to remove past labels. This means that if Ignit defeats Oyo, other academies will begin to view them differently. The main plan of the academies is for Ignit to make a slight impression on the King of Magicians. The Dirty King remembers Ruin as a candidate for the next generation, seeing in him a gift for instinctively learning magic. But he was very upset that he had the curse of releasing magic. Judging by the fact that the head of the Igni Academy chose him as a representative, does that mean he overcame his curse? Strana says that whatever magic it is, he will need to get closer, and whether he needs a defender for that. But his plan, as usual, is to fight head-on without the help of Strana's defender. The match began, and Seda summoned his battle protector, but Ruin did not waste time on him and reached him with force and speed. Ruin had complete control over Seda because he was weak and easy to read. But this was no time for chatter because Seda's battle protector had already come to attack Ruin. He couldn't break free from Ruin and realized that he had lost not because he had let his guard down, but because Ruin was truly strong. He realized that he couldn't win and accepted defeat, when suddenly Ruin saved him from the combat defender. Ruina defeated the steel combat defender with his bare hands, leaving everyone in shock at such power. Seda did not understand why Ruin saved him, since he had been provoking him, to which Ruin replied that he simply wanted to finish him off himself. He once again reminded him of the famous flick that had knocked Mikkel out of action. After performing the flick, he flew away, and even had time to marvel at how clear and unusually beautiful the sky was. Everyone rejoiced at the victory of the Igni Academy and that they were no longer after the Academy. Ruins attracted the attention of another person, the King of Magicians, who had never seen such magic before and was now curious about who he was. Even an 8th-level magician does not understand how this is possible and asks Tyrion Igni to tell him everything he knows about him. He only knows that he turned his weakness into strength and fought to the end. This answer did not impress the Dirty King, and if he wants to ask him directly what the secret of his powers is, Ignit will have to stop him. He will remind the king that magicians have the right to keep their techniques secret under the Oath of Mill. But the king still wants to exchange a few words with him, because he is the king, and only he should be at the top. Ignit's team came to a cafe where they decided to have fun and celebrate their victory, where Ruin is worried that they haven't won yet and are already fooling around. Jason says that the drink Dragon's Kiss comes from the territory where Ruin lives and makes him try the local product. Suddenly, Seda Malkiri comes to them, and Jason asks him to leave and not bother them, as he is interfering with their fun. But he only came to apologize to the Ignit Academy for the inconvenience caused. He apologizes for looking down on them after losing to Ruin at the stadium, realizing that he shouldn't have done so. It turns out that there are opponents in the world who are stronger than him, and at that moment he realizes that his past actions were fundamentally wrong. He even bows as a sign of change, which makes those around him feel uncomfortable. He apologized again for the uncomfortable atmosphere and was about to leave when Ruin asked him if he was apologizing because of the bet or if it was his true feelings. It turned out that he was speaking sincerely, for which Ruin thanked him for his courage to ask for forgiveness. The whole team accepted his apology, and suddenly they even started drinking together, putting their arms around each other's shoulders. This drunken atmosphere was very comfortable for everyone when suddenly he opened his eyes on the bed. As it turned out, the night had not been wasted, and his peers, not knowing how much he liked to drink, laughed incessantly, reminding him of what had happened yesterday. As it turned out, he almost cried his eyes out while shouting about how difficult it was for him at this academy. Everyone remembered it except him, and they couldn't stop laughing because who would have thought that the seemingly perfect Ruin had such a side to him? He blamed himself for making a fool of himself, promising not to touch the drink that made him overly emotional. In the hallway, he was called out by Seda, with whom he had apologized to each other yesterday for hitting each other and sworn that now they were brothers. Seda shouted to him across the hallway, something like, "See you later, friend," to which he wondered why he didn't feel embarrassed. Professor Heidel tells Ruin that a dangerous man wants to meet with him, and that even the head of the academy is very concerned. It was the Dirty King Tehran, a dangerous man with a mask of cunning. Heidel gives him some parting words, asking him to be careful, as people who hide their true nature can be very dangerous. He realizes the seriousness of his personality and comes to the building to discuss a plan for the next battle, the key word of which will be defend if you can. This code word is needed to protect Ruin, as he will run straight to the gate. Arrowball is a game in which a live arrow constantly flying across the field acts as the ball. 9 participants are divided into teams of attackers, defenders, and a goalkeeper. The team that sends more arrows into the opponent's goal wins. Despite the simple rules, the game requires the development of complex strategies and tactics, such as the use of defensive spells, the timing of crowd control magic, and so on. The game began, and Ignit Seda cheered the loudest, which made his team think he had gone crazy because of his loss to him. But yesterday, he almost had a fit because of the loss to the Eternally Last Academy. Apparently, he had completely lost his mind. Of course, he heard the word crazy, and replied that real men become friends after exchanging blows. To which the student shouted that it was a one-sided battle and he didn't even hit him, to which he threatened revenge. After the match with Ruin, Seda was convinced that he was a magician of the next generation. After all, he was stronger than other mages of his generation, not only in strength but also in leadership and spirit, because he accepted him as a friend. The time of the battle and the main target of the opponent was the fast Ruin Ardell. But they did not expect that besides Ruin, there were other attackers who were even faster. Even after they scored 2 points, all the opponent's attention was on Ruin, which helped the team gain time. The Igni Magic Academy won with a score of 11-0. Heidel informs Ruin that a meeting with King Tehran is scheduled for 7 o'clock today. He warns him not to eat anything before dinner for safety reasons. Strand felt an unusual amount of mana, as if he were a dragon, but it turned out that Tehran was a mage standing on the border between a human and a demigod. King Tehran says that he knows Ruin and had to watch him because he was one of the 11 chosen ones. Getting to the point, he asks him to tell him everything that happened during his time at the academy. Ruina immediately realized that he was a thorn in his side, living proof that the border mage was not perceptive enough. Theron wants to hear from him that he was not mistaken, but decides to say only one thing, that even words about talent could be an exaggeration and they could not negate his efforts. Like teacher, like student, for they spoke in the same vein. When asked what efforts he had made, he replied that he had become interested in the art of the body, and how it was that he had become stronger than an ogre. The king suggested that it might be due to some valuable artifact, but he had never heard of such artifacts for the curse of liberation. The head of the Magic Academy, Ignat, asked to stop at this point and end the dialogue. The king warned that he would be watching to see how he could defeat the children he had chosen. Even Rowena became very interested in how much stronger he was than those chosen children. Head Ignat was surprised that the king spoke to him very politely and did not try to swallow him alive. As it turned out, Theron was always happy to meet talented mages, and he was simply overcome with curiosity and asked if the king could satisfy it. He replied that the most important question had not been answered, but something pushed that question a little further. He was amused that this cheeky little rascal had warned the king himself. He was not afraid of the king at all, and while most begged and groveled at his feet, he did not even bow his head. The king found him very interesting and wished that his chosen ones were as brave. His student, Doom, learned that Ruin had been with the king and was angry that the king was accepting other students. Dum had seen some of his matches, and this man had turned everyone's heads. Rumor had it that he was difficult to oppose because of his unique magic. He just imagined how well Ruin had talked to the king, even though he did not see him as a rival, but this time he decided not to forgive him for this act. Dum believed that only he was worthy of recognition from the king of magicians, because he was his best student. As soon as he left the king's office, Dum was waiting for him and began to ask him what he had asked the king and what they had talked about. But it was not clear to him why he had been waiting for him all this time outside the king's office, to which Dum simply asked him to answer. He doesn't understand what is going on, and, not wanting to answer, decides to ask if he is obliged to answer. Dum says no in a confident tone, drawing his sword for battle. They challenge each other, but Ruin sees no weaknesses in Dum, which means that he is strong in all aspects. Dum was truly fearless, ready to fight right there without fear of anyone. As usual, someone from the king's office stopped the fight in broad daylight. It was Irene Prius, who was also a student of the king, and was surprised that they had been gathered in this corridor at the same time. Ruins replied that nothing had been planned, but he had already begun to think about how to properly introduce himself to them. Not wanting to listen to this, Doom left and asked Irene if he always did as he pleased with everyone. It turned out that this situation was an exception to the rule, because usually you couldn't get a word out of him. Doom Prime loses his composure in situations involving Lord Terran. He wants him to recognize him and single him out from the rest. It should be noted that such individual meetings are completely uncharacteristic of the Dirty King, and it turns out that he was jealous of Ruin. Irene is interested in how he would have actually fought if he had stayed a little longer with Doom alone. He joked that he would not want to be disqualified for it and is sure that Doom did not want to fight for real, but only wanted to scare him. She asks if he was scared, to which he replies that Doom is like a wall that cannot be broken by any attack. But he is also very confident that no matter how thick the wall is, it will fall after a few blows. She laughed pleasantly at the strange guy but warned that Doom is merciless and that Ruin should be careful. He is the kind of person who will not let him out of his sight because of what happened. He returned to the dormitory where the team that lost in the group competition was waiting for him. But there is no need to worry, because they managed to take 4th place in the team competition without Ruin's help. It is sad that their winning streak has been interrupted, but now they are not at the bottom of the list. Ruin is asked about his plan for the individual competition, and he thanks them for the drink and says that he will win. At the moment, he is aiming for 1st place, at least in the individual events. The next competition is a battle between representatives of 32 schools, starting from the top of a man-made island. The winner will receive 32 points, and points will also be awarded for the quality of the performance, so a change in the rankings is inevitable. His friends believe in him but wonder if he should be preparing for the competition like everyone else. Other representatives are forming alliances between opponents and allies, so it appears that everyone will be moving in groups, which will make it difficult to move alone. The only person who comes to mind is Irene, but will she agree? And if she does, who else can he find? Like a bolt from the blue, Seda enters the house with a request to join forces. They run to Irene, and on the way, Seda asks not to be abandoned in the heat of the competition. Ruins ran ahead, arguing that they needed to add another ally, and Seda wanted to know who else he had in mind. When they arrived at Irene's house, Seda had his doubts, as she was one of the strongest, but Ruins knew her, which played a key role. Seda couldn't believe that they knew each other and was very excited by the news that he would be on the team, but he was also nervous, as if they had come to confess their love to her. As soon as he knocked and entered the house, Irene greeted him with the words that she had been waiting for him. She was not at all opposed to being on the same team, and was eager to start discussing a plan of action for the competition. Studying the map of the mountain, they discovered that the largest alliance consisted of 14 people. They all gathered around Dalian Malkin, a genius who always ends up among the top 5 contenders for victory. His magic is mainly holy magic and light magic, which proves that he is from the Freelia school. They would not be able to defeat them all by numbers, and as expected, his group would be the strongest at getting on their nerves. Ruins interrupts them and says that the most important problem would be Doom Prime. On the day of the competition, everyone was given protective equipment. If its strength was exhausted, they would be automatically excluded from the competition. They went down to the shore, and as it turned out, Doom Prime decided to act alone. To get to the competition site, they had to cross the sea by boat, and now they are entering the zone where they must survive for 72 hours. There was a barrier in place that showed them the safe zone, which would shrink over time. But they needed to hurry to the starting point to get a good spot before everyone else. Seda, not wanting to go against the leader, asked if they should buy some food at the entrance. Irene complains to Mr. Seda that he himself agreed to set traps first and only then move on. While they were setting traps, a battle between the alliances had already begun somewhere. Now it's their turn, and then they won't have to bother buying food, and now they'll have the opportunity to eat their fill. Suddenly, a team that Ruin wanted to attack appeared on the way. They are walking with huge bags, also thinking about food, that they should not have found food first and then the rest, which their leader asks them to wait a little longer for. The trap worked, and Seda began his attacks while the other team was not expecting it. Iron, without even breaking a sweat, created such powerful magic balls, and their opponents were not such weak magicians as they appeared to be. The opponents realized that there were 3 of them and who they were, and at that moment, Ruin decided to act. They began to attack Ruin, but he used time refraction, catching them off guard and leaving them unsure of what to do. As usual, it was easy for Ruin to defeat them, and he dealt with each of them without giving them time to even think. Now there were 3 against 4, and Ruin began to extort food from them. This team had brought a lot of food, there was even meat, and it would easily last for 3 days. Right behind them, another team collided, and Dalian's group headed in the same direction. Irene recognized Duma at a mana level that differed from ordinary mages. Seda hadn't seen him for a whole year, and in that year, Duma had become much stronger, in his opinion, to the point of giving him goosebumps. They found a house that no one seemed to have entered yet, and Seda decided to immediately cook a steak to introduce Oyo to the taste of steak. But Ruin began to persuade him not to make steak, as the smell could give them away to their enemy. Irene was curious how Ruin knew in advance what was going to happen. According to his plan, the central settlement was the only place on the island where a large group of people could find shelter. Dalian Malkin would probably head there, and Doom Prime would go there too. After all, it would be risky to go there alone, knowing that he would face a large team. He argues that this is the best way to win alone for kill points. That is, he will receive points for each enemy eliminated, which is quite in line with Doom Prime's way of thinking. He was just thinking about what he would do in his place, but deep down he thinks that this will make the king pay attention to him. Irene still finds Ruin very strange, but not wanting to think about it any further, she suggests making a duty roster. Late at night, when Irene was on duty first, she began to wake Ruin, saying that they had a new guest. Someone was approaching them. He was alone, and for safety reasons, she canceled the light magic, and they decided they needed to wake Set and prepare. They all stood silently in their places to see who this lone traveler was. He entered the house and they immediately knocked him down. It turned out to be a representative of the Column Callus Academy. He apologized, saying he didn't know there were already people in the house. He said he wouldn't have come in if he had known there were people there. It seemed there were 6 people with him, and the question was where they were. It turned out that Doom Prime was to blame for eliminating them for points. Since their alliance was large, they moved in a group that split off to find food, and that's when Doom Prime eliminated one of them. The real trouble came after that, when Dalian heard the explosion and set the whole team on them, but only 2 managed to escape. But that wasn't the end, as Doom Prime caught up with them, and that's when he started a fight himself, then retreated and came back for those who had managed to escape. Ruins noticed that he had analyzed the situation and acted in his own best interests, which was quite wise, and he still knew how to take advantage of the situation. In this regard, he asks to be added to their team, no matter how brazen it may sound. They notice that even despite his exhaustion, he thinks like a strategist, but Ruin disagrees and is concerned about how he escaped from Doom. If they are talking about Duma, he would never leave him alone. Perhaps he is lying, or perhaps Duma deliberately sent him and is hiding somewhere watching. Ruins decided to read him through the prism of a player's eye, but it revealed that identification was impossible. And yet it was not Callus after all, but a puppet sent by Duma. Nevertheless, for their own safety, they decided to leave the house as soon as possible. They believed that Callus was eliminated by the same person who created the puppet, and therefore his entire group was eliminated. Perhaps there is some truth in the puppet's words, but there is someone in Irene who could have done it. It is Cherky, one of the 11 chosen ones, the best student at Delphiniac College, who also excelled in creating zombies and puppets. Among other things, Cherky is a member of the Dalian group, which means that they are surrounded by enemies on all sides. Cherky discovered them with the help of a puppet, so other teams will also declare a hunt for them. It's not a good idea to run west because the safe zone will soon narrow there. Ruins uses a saying, use pirates to fight pirates. This means that they must catch their enemies with the help of their enemy. At this time, Cherky says that he almost outsmarted them and that they are hiding in the western part of the island like rats. His friend is shocked that his puppet was exposed, but Cherky himself does not understand because he was hit at that moment. The entire Ruin team is a problem for Cherky, which is why they want to direct all their power at them. They ran to the place where the noise and battle were coming from, confident that Ruin and his team were there. But those they saw were only an ambush while the team itself waited for them in the trees. They all ran there just because of the noise of the fireworks, when suddenly Ruin gives them the task of going there and scoring kills. They made it clear that they came on their own, but saw that they were still outnumbered, and that the story about Duma was true. There were also 3 who remained after all the attacks, which Cherky took the bait on. They all joined forces and there were 6 of them, which wasn't enough, but they would attack Cherky's team together. Suddenly, Doom Prime himself arrived on the battlefield to eliminate Ruin. He seemed to be on Ruin's side and began to get rid of Dalian's team, thus joining the temporary alliance that had gathered there. Perhaps he wants to get rid of Dalian's team first, but since all the survivors have gathered there, they may soon find out the outcome of the match. Many decided to flee from Doom because they could not resist his power. They also decided to act, and Ruin, using time warp and earthquakes, began to get rid of everyone who stood in his way. In Duma Pride's mind, the only thing he wants is to deal with Ruin Ardell himself. At the same time, in the organizer's room, they watched everyone and determined that there were 10 finalists left who were supposed to remain. The king is most interested in Ruin because he said that he would be better than all 11 chosen children. They settled at Base B near the center of the island where Ruin began his training, which he was able to complete for the first time in a long time. As a result of the previous battle, only Dalian and Cherkis remained from the largest alliance, while Doom disappeared with the rest who had fled. Everyone who was at home woke up and left a portion of breakfast for Ruin. She tried the steak, and it turned out to be very tasty. It seemed that Seda was a good cook. She apologized for leaving without saying anything, but Ruin was not offended and even understood her, because she had not slept during her last shift. Over tea, she decided to ask Ruin what he would do after graduating from the academy. He was interested in the root of the question, to which she replied that his approach to magic was very different from everyone else's and that perhaps the standard path would not suit him. As soon as the magicians who compete here enter society and begin to live in symbiosis, they can defend the country as members of the Imperial Army. They can become servants of the Tower of Mages or join a special group to earn money. These are all so-called standard paths. He admitted that he had no ideas at school. He was one of the worst and couldn't spend time thinking about the future because he didn't think he would become a mage. He believes that after the competition and his return to the academy, he will definitely have a couple of ideas. He asked Irene a counter question, but she didn't know where she would go either, because most often she acted as those around her told her to. The root of the question was that in order to start fighting Doom Prime, she thought that after that she would understand what kind of mage she wanted to become. For Irene Prius, who always came in second place, he became a mountain that she absolutely had to climb, a kind of homework assignment for her. The barrier was closing in faster and faster, and they might need to leave this place within an hour. The only safe base for the night was the base in the central settlements, assuming that Dalian and Cherkis were there, so it would be better to capture the village. However, Doom Prime could also be there, which should not be ruled out. Still, waiting for others to join the battle is a bad idea, but then the barrier will be a danger to them, and new options for a plan are needed. A better idea came to Seth's mind, to attack them themselves. He believes that it is not worth attracting attention, but there seem to be no other ideas or solutions. But suddenly Ruin had a revelation. There are few people left, and now even one rank up will bring a lot of points, as everyone is acting cautiously. Moreover, they had already attracted the attention of their opponents, and now they would not react to every little noise. They did not understand what he was getting at, but he shouted that it would give them a chance to get Doom Prime. Dalian and Cherky have lost team members. The remaining weaklings will hide, but Doom will definitely show up because he is confident in himself. But it is also important to note that if they ignore him, they will find themselves in a difficult situation. When asked where to look for him, he replies that Ruin will bring him himself. With the help of a minimap, he hopes to find him, because if there are 3 people in one house, they are the survivors. And if there are 2, it's Dullian and Cherky, and Doom is alone somewhere. Of course, Ruin Ardell managed to find him, so he started calling him to come out as soon as possible. When Dum came out, he did not expect to see Ruin, but Ruin said that they needed to go somewhere together, so they went. His team is shocked, as if Dum had captured Ruin, but it was he who brought him, because no one expected him to succeed. According to the plan, he was supposed to secretly track him down and ambush him, but he dismissed the idea, saying that he was not going to do anything like that. He brought him to say that he would not be his opponent, that Irene Prius would be. He does not consider Irene his rival and advises her that she should hold out a little longer so as not to disappoint the king and raise her rank. But none of the above is her goal. Her goal is to defeat Doom Pride. They engage in a truly fierce battle, for they are the strongest magicians of their empires. Seth feels uncomfortable standing and watching from the sidelines while she fights for victory. When she realizes that she cannot dodge, Ruin immediately arrives, saying that they agreed that he would let her fight, but not eliminate her. She is very worried about her comrade and does not want to lose him for the sake of victory over Doom Pride. He asks Doom for permission to join the fight, to which he asks if that small fish will join him. Ruin is a man of honor, and he understands that it would not be fair for two to fight one, so he enters the fight alone. Golter taught him how to fight someone with a sword by watching their feet, as they can reveal a lot. But as it turned out, a mage with a sword is a very strong opponent, as he wounded Ruin without much effort. People think that knight mages, that is, sword-wielding mages, are not very capable, but they have never seen them because they have no weaknesses. He had never encountered such a strong opponent before, and at that moment, he made another cut. It is called a trace of radiance, and his wound will ache with every movement, and at some point, he will not be able to move a finger. Dum wants to end this and instantly summons 5th-class natural magic, calling forth the wings of the katana. Now Ruin understands why Dum Pride wins every year because he is the strongest opponent in Ruin's path. Dum is slightly disappointed in Ruin because he expected more, but he admits that Ruin is a really strong opponent and seems like an unbreakable wall in front of him. He asks if Ruin is going to give up, but Ruin is categorically unwilling to surrender. After all, he was confident in himself, and too many people believed in him for him to disappoint them just like that. Dum decided that he had gone mad, and that he would teach Ruin a lesson so that he wouldn't even be able to open his mouth. He deflected the blow with his ring artifact and was able to temporarily gain the ability to withstand any physical force affecting his body. Ruina likes to act quickly and immediately, and so he immediately knocked Duma down while he was in shock from what he had done. He began his speech by saying that he has no enemies, that it is an arrogant belief that there is no one better than you, and that this is the reason for his failure. Irene feels guilty that her selfish actions have put the whole team in danger. He replies that she couldn't win because he got in the way and also apologizes for what she said, telling him to forget about that goal. After all, she is now interested not in Duma Prime but in Ruin Ardell, but with him it will be far from easy for her. With Ruin's team now included, there are 5 of them left. Dalian and Cherky fought with all their might but were unable to resist Ruin's team. But now there are only 3 of them left, and Ruin promises not to give up, to which Irene retreats, saying that she is no longer able to fight and that they will fight again sometime later. But Seda also decided not to retreat, because last time he had been too easy on him, but this time he wants to fight. Ruina decided not to stand on ceremony and start right away, without even listening to his request to wait. He had already flown far into the sky. The entire team from the Igni Academy raises their glasses to the winner of the great festival, Ruin Ardell. Irene and Seda were looking for him, but he wasn't in the dorms, so they decided he might be at the cafe with his friends and joined them. They couldn't miss the congratulatory party in honor of Ruin, with whom they shared grief and sorrow, so they came with Mr. Seda. They also behave in a funny way, often arguing and Irene neglecting him. He became the only winner, even though Duma had a lot of points, but because he took a lot of damage, his level dropped below him, as did everyone else's. If he continues in the same vein, victory may not be such a distant dream. Jason is overjoyed just because he is sitting at the same table as Irene Prius. Overflowing with happiness, he suggests cheering once more for the goddess who has descended upon them, which infuriates her because she does not like that name. Dum is depressed that he lost and gave in, because he really did not expect Ruin to target his sword instead of him. He is frightened that he lost right in front of the Dirty King and asks if Terran has been looking for him all this time. His friend believes that the king did not summon him for his own good so that he could rest, to which Doom asks to be left alone. Chapter Ignite expected him to show his best side, but did not expect him to defeat Doom Prime by performing a great deed. The king approached him and said that Ignite had not stopped smiling since Ruin's victory, and that it hurt his pride as an organizer. And you can't look at that brat's face in the competition hall anymore, but the key word was the competition hall where the excitement takes place. Meanwhile, in the group competition, they had 5 wins and 2 losses, but they secured 4th place. All that remained was the final triathlon match, which is played individually. It is an obstacle course divided into 3 categories: athletics, martial arts, and swimming. You can summon a beast. You can ride the summoned beast or overcome time and space by teleportation. Seda asks his friend how he feels hearing the whole stadium shouting at the top of their lungs in support of Ruin. It's hard for him to say yet, he doesn't quite understand how he feels, but he honestly wants to enjoy the moment, but he can't allow himself to do so yet. It's too early to celebrate because he hasn't completely defeated Doom Pride yet. Seda warns his friend that he should dodge again this time because now he won't fall for Ruin's tricks, which Ruin just laughs at. The game starts with the firing of pistols, and everyone begins to summon their defenders and beasts. But Ruin decided to stand out and just stood there doing nothing. At this point, assuming that Irene was tired, Malkin offers to form an alliance, to which she scoffs that he loves forming alliances. Even though they have known Doom for more than 6 years, it is still difficult for them to understand him, so it is better for them to play alone. Duma searches for Ruin and assumes that he is ahead, but Irene and Malkiri were always nearby, so it seems that he stayed behind. While they were finding out where he was and why he was so far behind, he immediately ran at full speed to Duma Prime. Before that, he had been thinking about how if he exposed his back to his enemies, he might lose, so it would be better to come up with a good plan. He decided to eliminate everyone in his way so that they wouldn't interfere with him and his plan. When he saw Seth, he realized that their endless battle must continue, and you could say he gave in because he really couldn't defeat Ruin. Dumb, realizing that there were no other participants left, decided that this time he had to face Ruin no matter what. There were a couple of people left behind who could approach them, and not wanting to waste time, Dumb decided to move on no matter what. In front of him was an area of traps that had once been used to protect treasures, but now served as obstacles for the competition. In fact, it was a dangerous place where one could suffer fatal injuries, but Doom decided to run there alone. Therefore, the safe and recommended way to pass through was to first disable the traps. This makes it an ideal testing ground for magical knowledge and crisis management skills. However, this takes a lot of time, so he decided to destroy the wall using Drax's method. But he cannot break through such a strong wall, so he wants to break down the dilapidated areas. With the help of the player's eye, he looked for places where the wall was dilapidated and finally found the right spot. The other players are shocked by the strange behavior of Ruin, thinking he is crazy for wanting to break the wall. Irene was worried about her friend trying to break the wall with his bare hands, but he succeeded. The other players asked to use this passage too, but he refused and collapsed the wall so that no one else could pass. Strange was impressed because he was able to withstand the strong wall with only 2,400 strength, simply by using his brain. Now only he and Doom remained there. They had already met, and perhaps Doom was in such a hurry that he even got an arrow in his shoulder. The time to summon his spirit horse had ended, and this time he definitely couldn't outrun Ruin. Dumb Pride drew his sword, challenging him to go through the last stage together. They fell together into the water, which would have been great if Ruin had been in a disadvantageous position where he could quickly escape. Dumb froze the river, preventing people from swimming across, which made Ruin very angry. But, as usual, acting arrogantly, he asked if he should worry about it in the context of the competition and galloped away. He heated the water and immediately rushed after him, catching Dumb off guard, as he did not expect such speed from him. They were about to reach the stadium, and he had no choice but to run fast to get ahead of him. Ruin rashly offered to arrange a rematch, but he refused, saying he didn't want to in his condition. Ruin made one strike, and Duma's horse ran into the stadium without him. Everyone on the screen could see Duma lying on the ground, while Ruin calmly walked away, not wanting to think about him. He defeated everyone and won the triathlon and survival game competitions, taking first place. The audience began to shout his name, calling him the magician of the next generation instead of a failure as they had at the beginning. These words felt as if he had been through 6 years of suffering and had passed through all the dark corridors, and they could hear how much work he had done. All these cheers of approval were a reward for his hard work. He thanked everyone, not wanting to lose the pleasant support of the people who believed in him. From the window, they saw many carriages arrive with nobles, and these were far from all those who had been invited. They had all come purely to see Ruin, but he was very bored with this evening and wanted to return to the academy. Irene also arrived and sat down with him, finding it strange that no one was trying to talk to her. Perhaps he seemed smug to them, since he had not come to the banquet dressed enthusiastically. Perhaps, but based on what she heard, that was not the only reason. Apparently someone had staked a claim on him, so no one dared to introduce themselves to him. Dinner with the Dirty King was replete with dishes, as if it had been prepared for the Emperor's meal. In fact, this meal was a debriefing of the competitions that had taken place, and for the week, it was a banquet under the guillotine. There were 2 places of honor left, but it seemed that they would only dine with the Dirty King. Everyone bowed in honor of the king when suddenly he entered with someone else, which was suspicious. He entered with the crown prince, whom Ruin had never heard of and did not even know who he was. The king began by asking how none of the 11 could defeat Ruin, and whether he really had such a gap in skills. He was very disappointed in his children for losing to one Ruin. The only thing this festival proved was that a dragon can emerge even from a small stream. Ruina feels very uncomfortable, as if this dinner is meant to slap all the children in the face, and he is being used as an excuse. But the Dirty King is not the only one who has him on edge, because someone is burning holes in him with their gaze. Even though he was in the disadvantageous position of being the 3rd son, Shomertan Raynak used his intelligence and outstanding political instincts. He successfully kicked his brothers to the edge of the empire, thus becoming the sole heir to the throne. This is the very man who possesses the art of decision-making and combat skills close to perfection. Perhaps he has staked his claim. When the king asked him how he felt about his victory, he honestly said that he felt uncomfortable, as if it were a reason to belittle other students. He took this as a request not to be used as a source of irritation for others. After all, this feeling of inferiority is the best fuel for growth, but he still feels that they are now hostile towards him. He did not come from some small stream, but from the beautiful country of Ardell. He did not like that the Igni Academy was belittled by being called a small stream. That word really got to the king, and he was slightly angered by it. The crown prince laughed heartily, thinking that he was quite a headache, able to talk back to the king because he said he was an interesting fellow. Irene sighed that the situation had taken a more benevolent turn, saying that Ruin was not going to throw anything else at him, to which he replied no. The king had once heard almost the same words from the head of Ignat, and now he was eagerly awaiting what the future would bring. The king announced that the meal was over, when suddenly Raynak invited Ruin to tea, not wanting to take no for an answer. Rowena thought long and hard about what the prince wanted from him, but he did not expect him to ask him to work for him, also refusing to take no for an answer. He said he would give him a month to finish all his business, and then he would take him to a special school for battle mages and prepare a place for him to live. And of course, he should think about citizenship, because it is not fitting to serve as a foreigner. Ruin did not understand why him, since there were countless mages in the kingdom, even Dumb. Dumb had lost to him, and how dare he suggest a loser to the prince? The prince warned that he preferred a simple yes as an answer and no counter questions. But he still decided to answer that the first reason was his father's recommendation, and the second was his courage. It was courageous to wear this rag to a personal meeting with him, and even to stand up to the king and openly declare his position. And finally, the courage bordering on recklessness to continue asking him questions despite the warning. He asks what the essence of the job is, to give him advice, but as it turned out, to protect him from his brothers who do not accept him. The prince noticed that his eyes did not shine, and that he did not want to work for him. All magicians eventually join high-ranking people, and if he refuses now, he may regret it. But there is one thing. He still has many things he would like to do rather than be someone's magician. The prince thought he was reasonable, but it turned out that he was unexpectedly idealistic. He asks if he will regret it, but he replies that he may regret it someday. Well, the prince said it was worth pretending that this conversation never happened, and in the end, Rowena is called the bright gem of the past festival. The prince has a hobby of collecting such stones, and there was not a single gem that he had not yet obtained. The answer to the question of why is simple. He destroys what he cannot possess. Rowena understands that this is a direct threat, but decides to accept this threat no matter what. He still wanted to be a mage who retained his uniqueness, and judging by the prince's mood, the king realized that dialogue was not possible. You see, even threats had no effect on the prince's determination not to give up. He would never give up because he had nothing stronger than his passion for collecting. In the morning, Ruin had already completed his daily training with enthusiasm, and Strand noticed that his body was getting better every day. But he said that he didn't like hearing such compliments from another man, to which he replied that she was a woman. But he is interested in whether the incarnation can have a gender, but all this time he has not asked about it, and they even bathe together in the same tub. She says that there is nothing to look at and that what happened is in the past, so Ruin did not pay much attention to it and went about his business. He tells her that from now on she is forbidden to joke about his body and what she saw there, which she did not see, but he does not believe her. It is time for Jason to leave for school, and as he says goodbye to Ruin, he bids him farewell, as if he were about to die and never see him again. After his friends went home, as the winner, he first had to visit Rivadine to complete all the items on the schedule. A man who introduced himself as a street cat accompanied him as his escort. He wanted to scan him with the player's eye, but it seems he was a high-level mage who did not allow himself to be scanned. He wants to tell him about the plan of action, which consists of going to the Imperial Palace to offer congratulations. Ruins asks to be addressed informally, because he is only 16 and there is no need to be so polite. That's how he learned that he is meticulous and businesslike, and the next stage is to go to the magic tower where the artifact will choose him. It happens that he may be left without an artifact, which makes him think that they have self-awareness like King Rima. Finally, he will receive a task that ordinary students are not allowed to receive, but as the winner of the festival, he can afford it. This can be seen as an announcement to the world that the next generation of magicians has arrived. As a debut, he was given a sheet of paper from which he could choose the mission he liked best, and together with Strawn, he chose a task to his liking. They arrived at the Peony Palace, the residence of the Crown Prince, where he was already expected. He was greeted by this Crown Prince, who handed him 10,000 gold coins as a prize, which exceeded the annual budget of the Ardell territories. The prince gave him the green light that if this was not enough, he could come and ask for more, and it seemed that he had not yet given up on Ruin. Ruin walked a lot through the corridors, thinking that the people who worked here must have a lot of stamina to walk around the palace all day. His escort asked him to refrain from joking comments, as the Tower Master was already waiting for him. He was struck by the fact that the student had chosen such a difficult task, but as it turned out, it seemed the most interesting to him. In the room they entered, they saw the dirty king waiting for him, and learned that Ruin had chosen the search mission. In the king's opinion, the subjugation mission would have been much easier, where he would have simply destroyed a couple of bandits and earned a reputation as a hero. But Strawn chose this place for a reason, as it turned out to be King Rem's homeland, and the place where Drac had lived for 100 years. Heavenly Mountain is a remote area located north of the Kingdom of Radian, where, according to rumors, ancient ogres lived. However, they no longer live there. Apart from the living artifact Kingrem, the rest perished in the Great War. The place became a lifeless desert after the disappearance of the ogres. And another reason for the high level of difficulty is the barrier. To this day, no scientist or mage has been able to unravel the mystery of the Heavenly Mountain Barrier. The mission is to discover the nature of the barrier. Taran is curious why he is interested in this wasteland. Perhaps he is interested in the hypothesis that the wrath of the god of ogres turned this place into a sanctuary. He did not dare to answer that it was because of the dragon that lived there, but only said that he was attracted by the high level of difficulty that this task presented. Since no one has been able to solve the riddle, wouldn't it be the greatest achievement if a 16-year-old student solved it? Or would he become the first winner in history of the great festival who failed the mission? The reason for Ruin's recommendation to the Crown Prince is that the king wanted to keep him in Revedine to watch over him. The king believes that his interest in this task is due to his unusual abilities, but in any case, he will keep an eye on him. During a conversation in the room with Strawn, he shares his concern that he may not find the reason, because no one has been there for hundreds of years. But he has abilities that exceed human capabilities, and at that moment, a delightful boar and a street cat entered the room. Strawn asks when they arrived at the farm, to which he replies that it is the Dirty King's preference. It was time for Ruin to go to the artifact room so that the artifact could choose him. There are different zones called C, B, and A, and the rarest items are in Zone X, which Ruin wanted to enter, but only special cases are allowed in there. They started with Room C, where Ruin was interested in a sword that turned out to be a remnant of a great battle. This shiny sword was no worse than the one used by Doom, which was to be expected from the artifact room of the Magic Tower. There was one rare book there, over 100 years old, specializing in the transformation of Tyra Braun. There were so many books there that he wondered if the employees of this tower were allowed to read them. As it turned out, they were sometimes allowed to, but they could not take them away. The area was a treasure trove of knowledge, where there was everything from forgotten magic books to rare and legendary historical writing. The next area they went to was Area A, but there too, none of the artifacts reacted to Ruin. This made him wonder if there had been people before him who had not chosen any of the artifacts, and as it turned out, this was rare. If he were a mage allowed to visit Zone A, it would be assumed that he would be able to attract the attention of several artifacts. Strange asks him not to get upset about the junk, because it's not for him. The artifact he would choose is in the Forbidden Zone X. He can smell the scent of never-washed dragon scales that would suit him, but he asks to choose from what is available in Zone A. Suddenly, the door to Zone X sparkled brightly, and the tower workers said that a very special event had occurred. The king was immediately informed of this, which showed that Ruin was a very powerful mage who could be the next to take the throne. In Zone X, there are 3 artifacts with different levels of power. These are the Staff of Algala, the Armor of Morshi, and the Tooth of Kunhan, which fell to Ruin, and all 3 items have the ability to make their owners stand at the top. The Staff of Algala is capable of infinitely increasing the destructive power of its owner, and is also a symbol of the King of Magicians. 56 years ago, the staff chose Taran as its owner. Before that, those who were chosen by the staff held high positions in the tower. Morshi's armor provides absolute protection from any physical and magical attack. It chooses a master once a century and makes them a legendary knight. However, Kunhan's tooth has not chosen anyone for a couple of 100 years. It is the most mysterious artifact and the root of the tooth of the first ogre chieftain. It turns out that he chose Ruina, meaning that he mastered the power of the throne, even easily lifting this tooth because no one had ever been able to do that before. This item is so heavy that it took more than 5 men to carry it. It seems to possess the strength of an ogre. The king compared all the moments related to the ogre, its incredible physical strength, the choice of mission, and Kunhan's tooth forced him to convene a council of magicians of Crick. Ruins chose to head west, and he had only a month to complete the task. He was given tickets, a permit, and an ID for the train. His escort wanted to tell him, as his senior, that the tower was good to those who bowed to it, but not to those who disobeyed, and that he needed to be careful. He has no reason to be questioned, as this could turn out badly for him. This is the closest city to the Heavenly Mountain, which was created to protect the continent from the invasion of the ogres, the shield of the continent. In this regard, Tashirian is surrounded by high walls and has a strong army with an iron will. At least that's what the book said, but the city turned out to be pretty deserted because it lost its purpose. It was originally built to hold back the ogres, but that threat disappeared on its own. It was still daytime, but the local soldiers were already drunk and said that everyone in this city fought bravely against enemies. As soon as they saw Ruin, they immediately called him over, calling him a well-dressed young man and ordering him to give up everything he had. Of course, he simply decided to squeeze his shoulder, thereby unable to even resist Ruin. And as it turned out, the real world is very different from books. Ruina politely woke up the sleeping man, who abruptly got up, apologizing for daring to doze off without realizing that he was in front of a magician. Good-natured Ruina said that there was nothing wrong with that. He was only interested in where he could get a horse. To be honest, it was the only stable there without a single horse. He was very upset that there were no horses in the stable, wondering what kind of hole he had fallen into. But the key point was that there was no one else in this hole. But on the same day he arrived, other people came. He and Stran, as soon as they got off the train, felt the same thing, that they were being followed by people. Someone was really following them, so Ruin decided to change his plan and bribe the landlord to report on everyone who asked about him. He decided to go for a walk because after he left, his pursuers would go to the landlord and ask about him. He was sure that these people had been sent by the crown prince, who was angry at his unwillingness to carry out his order on citizenship or that the king was showing interest. But he didn't like either option, and he had to resolve the issue before reaching the Heavenly Mountain. Returning to the house, he learned that no one had asked about him or come to see him. But there was one downside. He had a memory lapse of about 3 minutes. No matter how hard the landlord tries, he cannot remember what he did during those 3 minutes. Mind Control is a high-level 6th-class spell capable of subjugating the human mind. The person loses their memories of what is under control, and the caster gains the ability to look into the memories of the subordinate. Ruina's conclusion is that they turned out to be more careful opponents than he could have expected, and perhaps by entering his memories, they learned that he knew about the surveillance. Entering his room, he saw a note above the bed saying that they did not want to harm him, and that he should just continue the mission. But Ruin sees this as a clear threat, since they entered his room and even left a note telling him to relax. In a fit of rage, he decided to use his powers to jump over to Mai and go out into the street. His plan was to find them at any cost using the mini-map. The people who were following him ran after him, but let them try to catch up with the guy who came in first in the triathlon. Their commander, whom they ask if they should run after him, replies that Ruin just wants to play with them. They were ordered to play with him and run after him, but not to kill him under any circumstances. As it turned out, they were magicians of Crick, and when they ran to one corner, they said that Ruin Ardell's trail had been lost, but the commander knew that he was waiting for them. How right he was, because he suddenly jumped out at them, which some did not expect. Without letting them say a word, he began to beat each of them, which was not difficult for him. Their commander laughed loudly because he was curious about who this Ruin was, but as it turned out, he was quite the monster. When asked who they were, he replied that the head of the tower had sent them to watch over their younger comrade. In Ruin's opinion, it was not observation but surveillance, but it made no difference to the magicians of Crick, and the commander abruptly left. Each mage had a skull tattoo on their neck, which meant that they were vicious mages, shrouded in mystery, who only did dirty work. The only information available about the secret organization of vicious mages is the existence of the tattoo, but no one knows who they are or who their leader is. Stran asked the master how he felt after the skirmish with them, and he replied that they seemed weaker than the representatives of the Great Festival. But one of them had 6th-class magic, which proved that he was not just an ordinary opponent. Moreover, he would continue to pursue him. For now, the new plan was to make him appear before him. The next day, he set off for the Heavenly Mountain, even though it was surrounded by countless barren lands. But he felt very strongly that he was arriving at his destination with all his heart. As mentioned at the beginning, every mage has mana circles in their heart, and Ruin had power circles that gave him no peace. After some time, he finally arrived at the Heavenly Mountain where the barrier began, the place where Drac once lived. Now his main difficulty is getting inside the barrier, because he doesn't even consider it his task. If he were human, he would first try to destroy the barrier, but he cannot do so in a human way. Stran gave him a brainstorm because what would happen if he tried to break it as an ogre? He believes that he could call some ogre to open the door, just like calling friends. Finally, the food for thought that Strange gave him began to work, but Ruin believes that all the ogres were dead according to humans. Strange asks Ruin that his ability is not to confirm or dissuade, but to destroy. He began to shout that he knew the location of the ogres inside the barrier. After all, he had come to deliver the tooth of their leader, Kunhan, and if they heard him, they should open the door. Those inside heard him and began to open the barrier for him. The mage who was chasing him was in great shock that no one was able to open the barrier, but the boy got away with it. The mage Crick did not manage to enter either, even though he ran with all his might to get in, but alas, the barrier closed. But suddenly, Ruin's hand flew out of the barrier, and it seemed that the mage had been caught and would no longer escape him. He must have decided that he could only get him at that moment, but he fell into a trap where Ruin offered to end the game of catch. Suddenly, a huge ogre flew down from the sky and dealt with the mage Crick with a single blow. He began to ask who this man was who had come to them, and at the same time Stran reminded him that they had the mind of a beast. Fortunately, he managed to pass through the barrier of the Heavenly Mountain together with the giant who came to him. And as soon as this happened, it was as if he had entered another world where the ogres, when they smelled him, saw a human, but smelled an ogre. Stran asks the master to be careful and alert because they do not know human morality. Perhaps this ogre had not yet sent him to the other world. They quickly ran away, when suddenly Hans fell to his knees, because it was unknown when they would want to take his life. They came to the top of the mountain, but he asked about another peak, and did not expect to see an ogre even higher than the previous one in response. This is Chieftain Harhan, and according to rumors, he asks Ruin if he has the relic of Kunhan. But first, he greeted Ruin, not yet deciding whether to tear him apart or throw him out for food. He says that he is the owner of Kunhan's tooth, but they do not believe him. even though he is telling them the truth. They only believe him after he shows them what they see as a very interesting person. But he also gives off the aura of a very strong person, so they ask him again about his nature. He asks them if they know the name Draconia, which belonged to a dragon that once lived here in Heavenly Mountain, but they don't understand how he knows it. It turns out that he heard this name from Kingram. He was excited to know if he was alive, and of course he was alive, but as a professor at the Igni Academy. He is a friend of Kingram and the man who inherited the power of Drak, the destroyer of worlds, and his name is Ruin Ardell. Now they treat him differently, and when asked if they want to send him to be eaten by lions, they kindly replied that they do not. But now they have decided to welcome Ruin Ardell with open arms. Having said this, the ogre left, not understanding, and Strand began to explain that this was a rite of passage where he had to prove that he was worthy of equal treatment. Drak had also gone through this once, and it had to be proven through arm wrestling. The ogre introduced himself as Omarush, and he was very huge, which made Ruin a little confused. He was very scared and asked if he would be fed to the birds if he lost, to which Strand replied that she did not know for sure. A match between a normal person and a giant sounds more than ridiculous, but thanks to the artifact, he also possesses great strength. Since he took Kunhan's tooth, his strength has increased by 1,000 points and now stands at 3,520, which should be enough to win. Ruina's hand really feels different, but he is the son of Omarush Omarukan, and even if his opponent is a human, he will not let him off the hook. The game began, and he spent all his strength, but the ogre took his hand and slammed it down, and that was it. He lost. It turns out that now Ruin will be sent to be eaten by birds, or even worse. It turns out that everything is a little different, because Drak himself defeated Omarush 17 years later, but Ruin held out for a long time and earned respect. It turns out that Strawn knew that it would end this way, but she just enjoyed watching. After the arm wrestling match, a large banquet was held at the small peak. They liked how the ogres cooked, but they were concerned about why these ogres lived locked up in this shelter. Ruina had a feeling that he would have to face something more important than the mission. Omarush approached him with a question about what he would do with the tooth of their first chief, but he was curious about what could be done with it. If he wished, Omarush could help create a weapon that would only suit a human. After all, when he took the relic, he didn't know what could be done with it to use it. The only idea was a mace of power, but Strawn said to come up with something later. The chief's tooth is quite hard and heavy, so not everyone can make something out of it, but for Omarush the blacksmith, it is quite possible. Omarush asks if he has any specific weapon in mind, which greatly interests Ruin, because he really does have an idea. Half a month has passed since he arrived, and all this time he has been helping either with hunting or with various training exercises that he couldn't do on his own. However, something took up most of his day, and that was arm wrestling, where he played 15 matches and lost 15 times. He is already beginning to get annoyed by his constant losses, so Strawn wants to cheer him up by telling him that he is indeed gradually getting better. Omarush confirmed Strawn's words that he had indeed begun to use all his strength without wasting it. Thanks to Omarush's advice, he gradually understood how to use all his strength correctly so that he could hold out longer. Ruin set himself this goal of defeating him before his departure, which Omarush was sure would not work, but a couple of days later, Ruin's lost only 16 out of 17 matches and was able to achieve his goal. He defeated Omarush after all, thus completing the task and earning the respect of all the ogres as a reward. Now it was time to hand over the weapons, but it turned out that they had been ready for a long time. Omarush just wanted to give them to him at the right moment. And so they were ready. Kunhan's 10-piece tooth gloves, which do not break from blows and destroy everything they need to, also increasing strength points. He learned a new skill, the will of the leader, and found the most suitable gloves for close combat. Omarush and Strana were very interested in how he liked these gloves and whether he really liked them. He feels incredible because when he puts them on, he feels a surge of strength because they add 2,000 strength points. The other ogres learned that Ruin had defeated Omarusha, which hurt their pride, so they dispersed, seriously wanting to compete with him. Strand feels nostalgic about these moments because Drak loved these matches, but he only managed to defeat 17 ogres here, so Ruin is something new for them. If yesterday's Ruin had been here, he would not have agreed because it was impossible, but after receiving the gloves, he feels that he will never lose now. Naturally, he defeated them, and now it is time for him to leave, and all the ogres see him off as a sign of respect. They said goodbye, and the ogres thanked him for the good memories, and Ruin decided to teach them how to shake hands. The king was worried and asked for news about Ruin every day, but so far there was no news, because one mage had not returned. Even the tracking team he sent after them found no signs of life or human presence at the Heavenly Mountain. But then he reported that Ruin Ardell had returned to the city after all. He admitted that he had failed the mission, unable to find the reason for the barrier, and unable to even enter it. The king seemed not to believe him and said that he was too much of a skilled liar. He asked him to be honest with him, because he had received Kunhan's tooth, and even the mission he had chosen was related to the search for the homeland of the ogres, and whether all this was a coincidence. King Theron did not keep watch, but only feared that he might become a mage who opposed the tower. But doesn't everyone who goes against the will of the King of Mages become an enemy of the tower? Ruin asks. When he doesn't get an answer, they ask him to stop talking nonsense and tell them what really happened on the Heavenly Mountain. He's worried about whether the first ogres are still alive, the king asked him, looking very bloodthirsty. He didn't need obvious lies, especially since he could easily look into his memories if he wanted to. But Ruin took the bait, convinced that he would not stoop so low as to think like an ordinary student. He became very angry, as if he were being challenged, and the word ordinary seemed too modest for him. He played on the pride of the King of Magicians, and fortunately it worked, and he officially failed his first mission and is going home. If the Dirty King had been even a little reckless, he would have been caught red-handed, and the mere thought of it was terrifying. But that's not the end of it, because the artifact of Zone X chose him, and both of them know what that means for the owner of the throne, and because of that, the king will continue to watch him. But for now, Ruin only dreams of going home, not wanting to think about any of this. Those who were waiting for him at the academy have arranged a festive gathering, but he asks them to calm down, because 2 months have already passed. Jason brought a large box into the room containing letters that had been written to him, because he had become very popular. He thought there were a lot of letters, but as it turned out they were only recent ones, and the ones that had been accumulating were in the closet, filling it to the brim. While processing these letters, there were also letters from princes who wrote to the supposedly best and most brilliant magician. People were upset that he had rejected the prince's offer, and they wrote to him as if they wanted to get closer to him. Jason asked him about his plans for the holidays, to which he replied that he wanted to spend them differently. He had not been home for 5 years and had stayed in the dormitory all that time, even during the holidays. At one time, he couldn't bear to look his relatives in the eye and wasn't sure he could answer their questions about his studies. He missed his family very much, and now was the moment when he could proudly appear before them. All the inhabitants of his homeland were shocked to see him because, first of all, he had grown up, and they asked him if he was doing well. Then his little sister rushed up to him, complaining that he hadn't sent a single letter in all that time, and now he just showed up. Her name is Ruina, and she had grown so much during that time that he barely recognized her, but she was still as sweet as ever. He gathered the whole family and told them and the residents of the estate everything that had happened during the past year, omitting the details about the player, of course. They were shocked that all this had happened to him, and that he had even met the crown prince of the empire in person. 2 months had passed, but for his family, this was all new. His family found out the reason for the letters from noble families, but Ruin wanted to tell them about it first, but unfortunately, he couldn't. A resident of the Bagans estate wants to talk about one incident, but his father shuts him up, saying that they closed this topic long ago. Ruin asks his father to tell him, because it will be unpleasant for him to hear it from other people. Reluctantly, he decided to tell him after all. It turned out that all the letters were about Ruin, with offers of money for the estate and someone offering high positions. Of course, all offers were rejected, but there was one small nuance. It was Pilkos Monzo, who was using it as leverage against the Ardell family. Monzo was the only trading city, and most of the goods produced in Ardell passed through Monzo via trade routes. In other words, Ardell was supported by sales in Monzo, but they wanted to get Ruina as a mage defender, for which they devalued their goods. Because of this, the Ardell territories are running out of money, and they cannot come up with a solution to this problem. The people of Ardell love Ruin and offer him their rich harvest or high-quality goat's milk. Since Monzo wants to see him so much, it is worth giving them what they want, and he decided to visit there in full gear. He is already on his way, and Uncle Beggins has packed him a snack for the road as he sees him off. He is ashamed that even though Ruin has only just arrived, he has burdened him with problems that require him to leave, but Ruin does not see this as a problem. Beggins asks Ruin to ensure that the Lord's efforts are not in vain. He even covered the losses out of his own pocket, without letting anyone know about such problems. As it turned out, the current peaceful situation was achieved at the cost of the Lord's sacrifice. He is haunted by the question of why his father simply endured it, even though he adores his territory, or whether he was convinced that his son could figure it out for himself. Ruin asked Beggins to give his father a chest with 10,000 gold coins. He won this gold at the Great Festival and hopes that the money will be spent on what is needed. He himself believes that it would be best to spend this money on buying land so that in the future he would not have to depend on Monzo in any way. His uncle agrees with him but is not sure that anyone would agree to sell land these days, and his primitive idea is that they should seize the land. If they clean up the problematic areas of land where monsters live, they could hire people with this money and become richer. But Ruin would like to leave such delicate matters to Beggins and his father. The trading city of Monzo is the largest territory in the southern part of the kingdom, where all the resources of the neighboring regions accumulate. The lord of the city is Pilkos Monzo. Rumors say that he bought his title or that he was previously the leader of the Valp gang. In other words, Ruin Ardell must be ready for anything. He introduced himself to the guards at his house as the young master of the Ardell family. His name is Ruin Ardell, and he would like to see the lord. They are annoyed by the Ardell surname, which they blow out of proportion, and that he is still a child and has not learned to beg. They began to laugh at him, And then Ruin realized that his father had endured this terrible treatment every time. They tell the boy to go in and look for the Lord himself, but since he is in Ardell, they will just chase him away again. Ruin came here not as a student but as a son of the Ardell family, and if he endured such treatment now, would it be worse next time? He refused to let himself and his family be insulted and took action to change their attitude toward them. He decided to teach them a lesson with his fists for not showing him the respect he deserved. Lord Pilkos Manzo returned and, seeing the man who had won the festival, decided to show his honor and bow. He said he was very ashamed that someone of Ruin's status had come such a long way to his city and that he could not raise his head. Ruina replied that he should not raise his head if he was so ashamed that he had to appear before him. The Lord was amused that people were telling the truth about his straightforwardness. Ruina did not care whether he bowed or stood, but he noted that he should retrain the guards, and the Lord wanted to know the reason for their discontent. Ruins gave them a warning for slandering the Ardell family. When asked if the Lord had any objections, he replied that he should feel free to treat them the same as his subordinates. But inside, he wondered how he dared to hit his guard, as at that very moment, Ruins hit the guard who had come with the Lord. The guest was tired of standing on the street, so he sarcastically asked to be let inside the house. In his home, Lord Pilkos began to show off the works of art he collected. For Ruin, even one glance at them made him feel uncomfortable. He understood that such unusual statues were made to intimidate, and perhaps the Lord wanted to scare him. A rare variety of tea was brought from the south, but Ruin decided to abstain from it. The Lord still tried to offer him at least some kind of drink, but Ruin sarcastically asked why he still did not understand the reason for his refusal. He had no reason to become his enemy and did not poison the tea. His only goal was to become good friends. He rejects the offer of friendship, arguing that it is a nasty trick to bring Ardell to Ruin. Since the Lord has made such a gesture of friendship, Ruin is simply obliged to refuse it. Since he has refused friendship, the Lord will leave the cost of goods from Ardell at the same level, which is terribly cheap. This time, the young gentleman tries to warn him nicely that it is a bad idea to return everything to the way it was. Here, the Lord began to insult him, calling him a bumpkin, saying that he cannot simply ignore the offer, and that it is Ruin who should fall to his knees, not him. They say that students of magic schools can now use magic during the holidays, and Lord Pilkos wants to take advantage of the opportunity to teach him a lesson. Ruins realized that Pilkos did not want to let him go, so he ordered the guards to make a scarecrow out of him, proving the Lord's madness. It is clear that it was impossible to have a fruitful conversation, because he is just a pompous pig caught in the trap of wealth. As usual, it costs him nothing to beat them all, especially with gloves on, and he will only give everyone a slap. Ruin's new skill is to support the leader, and until Kunhan's power runs out, he will rise above his head and move with him. Ruin Ardell's life may be in danger even on vacation. Some opponents, stunned by Kunhan's aura, are consumed by deepest horror, but escape will not help them. Using the magic of explosive burning mana, he blew up Lord Pilkos Manzo's castle. Even after everything that happened, Pilkos Manzo is worried about his collection being burned by Ruin's spell. He made another offer that he would put the cost of the goods in order and compensate tenfold for the losses he caused. This time, he may have understood the essence of the proposal and will accept it, but he still objects to the tenfold compensation. But Ruin's patience is running out, repeating himself and wasting time, so he orders him to bring everything quickly, and finally, he goes to make the compensation. Thus, he dealt with the sales problem and headed back to Ardell. But there, a rather unexpected guest awaited him, Lady Irene, which took him by surprise. About 2 months ago, at a banquet, Ruin casually said aloud that he wanted to go to Ardell, and at that moment, she approached him and asked about him. She shared that the banquet had ended without incident, as she had been afraid that something terrible would happen because of Ruin. She had heard about Ardell, that it had very beautiful nature, and she was interested in whether it was really so beautiful, to which she received a positive answer. He invited her to come and see for herself and convince herself of the beauty of this place. To be honest, he didn't expect her to actually come, and so they arrived at his estate. His father was excited that his son had grown up so quickly, and his sister was angry out of jealousy. She demanded an explanation of their relationship, whether they were lovers and where they had met. Ruina volunteered to show Irene around the area, not letting her older brother do it because she didn't want to lose her brother. She looks really cute. His father was very upset to learn that Irene and Ruina were not dating. But they didn't dwell on it and decided to get down to business by calling Beggins. His father refused to accept the money on the grounds that it belonged to Ruin personally and was not for Ardell, even though he was from the Ardell family. They could not persuade his father. He understands that his son is worried about him, but doesn't he have anything else to do besides Ardell? Yes, he is a truthful and moral man, but it hurts his father that he discusses matters of governance without him. Ruin speaks from the heart to help his homeland and would like to do as much good as his father. By the way, Beggins admitted that he told Ruin that his father had invested his personal money to maintain peace among the people. But in the future, he would prefer that Beggins not make such hasty decisions. Whatever his intentions may be, he cannot accept the money and take responsibility for the estate upon his shoulders. Showing the purse with money, he says that they have another 600 gold coins that were found in a forgotten stash and that it is their rightful money. Ruin whispers to Beggins that he gave 3 times as much, but it turns out that his father refused to accept the rest, and they couldn't even bring up the subject of the land. He is concerned about why their lord is so strict, but that's just the way he is, and there's nothing they can do about it. He left his father's office just as his sisters Ruin and Irene returned from their tour of the area. Ruina wished Irene luck and hoped that she would get along with Ruin as soon as possible, because she saw that she was a good person. The two of them were very confused, wondering why Ruina was saying such strange things. Ruina suggested they just go for a walk, and during the walk, Irene confessed that she would also like to have such a good younger sister. She asked Ruina if everything was okay with him, as he seemed to be deep in thought. He told her honestly that he would like to do something for his territory, but nothing came to mind. If you count the cash prize for the festival and the compensation from Monzo, it would be 40,000 gold coins which he could use at his discretion. Irene was offended that he was lost in his thoughts again, so he tried to fix the situation by asking all sorts of questions. The journey took 2 days from Revadane, where it was only necessary to cross the mountain range, and Ardell was within easy reach. But the answer to such a simple question became the solution he was looking for. Despite the fact that they are part of their territory, the harsh terrain makes it impossible to cultivate those lands. Local monsters are also a factor, but given their proximity to Lake, their geographical importance is very high. By establishing ties with places of the same importance as Monzo, they will be able to establish themselves as an independent territory. And they will be the only powerful name in the south with a path leading to the Raynak Empire. And why hadn't he thought of that before? Suddenly, he began to shout, grabbing Irene's hand and thanking her for helping him find a solution. He had already run away, but now she looked at him as an interesting person and even smiled at him. Ruin had not yet finished expressing his opinion when his father already rejected his idea as impossible. His father had already tried, and as it turned out, 8 trade guilds had refused him. They believed that Ardell would not be able to bring them profit, and even if they developed, they did not agree. But just because the trade guilds refused once, it didn't mean he should give up trying. After all, who knows? Maybe the proposal from the winner of the great festival would be received differently. His father thought this was true because he had been able to solve the problem with Monzo, so what reason was there to stop him? Father gave his blessing, wishing him well, and let him go. Irene asks if he is going to Lake, because now they would be in the same boat as illegal immigrants. She did something illegal. She crossed the border of Ardell without permission. And crossing the border through abandoned lands alone, was he always so brave? She believes that such trifles cannot be compared to his actions. That is, at one time, he entered a stranger's house during a competition without permission, and began to use non-standard forces in the competition. And he won at every stage. Compared to that, her actions seem like a mere prank. And so they decided to set out on their journey, starting with crossing the southern mountains to scout the situation. Due to the uneven terrain, even with a compass, it was difficult to find their bearings, so they used search magic to find monsters and locate a landmark. Incidentally, they are not allowed to use magic, but Irene also broke this rule when she arrived in Ardell. However, the search magic first tracked down humanoid monsters, which led them to the lair of werewolves, putting themselves in danger. During the battle with them, they realized that if they cut off the leader, they could escape, so they did just that and fled from there. He also received an unknown task where he had to find some mains to unlock the quest. Then, using the magic trail, they rushed to their destination again. Fortunately, they didn't encounter any monsters on the way, and it seems that this time they got where they needed to go. 8 Lakes is a country where 8 large lakes connect to the sea. It is a neutral country under the control of the Empire. Here, instead of a king, power is held by representatives of 8 trade guilds, known as the Joint Government, who dominate the continent. Rumor has it that Lake even trades with pirates if they consider the deal profitable. Here, money is valued above all else. They headed to the Gold Hall, an estate where representatives gather for lunch, making it the perfect place for negotiations. He asked to request an audience, to which the guard replied that if he submitted official documents, it would take some time to review them. He decided to use his name to tell him that Ruin Ardell and Irene Prius had arrived. The guard apologized for not recognizing them and went to report it, to which Ruin boasted about how cool he was, to which he replied that it was typical of him. And to their great happiness, they managed to get into the Golden Hall for audiences. The name Golden Hall was fitting, as everything sparkled with gold, and they entered the hall where all 8 representatives were seated. What had brought such a distinguished magician of the next generation to their land? He was very worried that his unannounced arrival would not be appreciated, but his status as the winner of the festival spoke for itself. The other representatives were only interested in whether his proposal would benefit the guild. He announced that he wanted to establish trade relations with them, which seemed to quickly dampen their enthusiasm. They had no idea where it was located and began to explain that it was a small area in the south of the Kingdom of Radian. One of them remembered that it was an estate in the countryside that traded in fish and potatoes, and that the Lord had once come there, but they unanimously refused. The reason for the refusal was that it was not profitable for them and it was a one-sided proposal. Their leader was adamant, and even Ruin's name did not help, and he refused to establish trade relations. Ruina was angry that they were merchants through and through, and as soon as they heard something that contradicted their interests, they immediately changed their mind. He is both a magician of the next generation and the young Lord of Ardell, but in their eyes, he is only the future Lord of Ardell, just a poor young lord from the countryside trying to steal their money. He didn't want to pull out Plan B in the form of 30,000 gold coins so early, but he had to in order for the negotiations to succeed. Perhaps they became more interested with this money. If he bought weapons from the city for that amount, they would give him permission to trade in products in return. For that amount of gold, he was preparing to enter, and otherwise they saw no reason to buy so many weapons. That gold was the 3-year budget of the rural areas, the annual budget of a medium-sized city. Such spending on weapons alone was shocking. He understood one thing after his trip to Monzo, that power naturally attracts wealth, which creates peace. Since he needs weapons to gain power, it is better to invest money here. He knows that each of the representatives is responsible for different goods. When asked who is responsible for weapons, the answer was the first representative. She provides weapons, iron ore, representatives of flora and fauna, and even ships. He even thinks she is much younger than him, but her eyes betrayed a void, a very strict, lifeless void. Her gaze is devoid of childish naivety, and she exudes an incredibly strong presence. What kind of life has she lived? She asks what he is going to do with the weapons he has received, because as a supplier, she cannot help but feel concerned. First of all, he wants to organize a large hunt for monsters near Ardell, then create a trade route to them to connect with Itlek. But after mentioning the southern mountains, the representatives begin to hint at something he has not spoken about, but Irene and Ruin do not understand what it is all about. The weapons representative suddenly says that it is impossible to build a trade route through the southern mountains because of the demon that lives there. But he says that this is impossible because he crossed these mountains yesterday and was even able to get something, starting to take something out of his pocket. He took out of his pocket a ball of wool from the mane that belonged to the silver werewolf. It is not yet clear why she suddenly stood up with tears of joy in her eyes that this werewolf is now gone. 3 days later, they managed to establish a good dialogue in which she confessed that this werewolf had taken her father's life at one time. She is happy to build a trade route through the southern mountains, as this will help establish a direct connection with Oyota so that they don't have to make a detour to get to him. Now the Valtrash family would actively promote the construction of the trade route. Suddenly, Ruin realized that he would have to build the route himself and at his own expense, but he was greatly relieved that their family would help him. This meant that the representative fully agreed, and now Ardell's products would be sold at a price above market value. She, Cecilia Valtrache, was now fully prepared to express her trust in her benefactor. Thus, the deal between Itlake and Ardell was successfully concluded. On his way home, Ruin expressed his opinion about Cecilia, saying that despite her young age and the loss of her father, she had proven herself to be a more than worthy person. Irene noticed his surprising sentimentality, to which he replied that it was easy to understand someone who was in the same position as him. But he assured her that the next time she came to Ardell, she would not recognize the city because everything would change for the better. Word by word, Irene confessed that she too would like to love her homeland as much as Ruin did. He asked her if she would ever invite him to Prius, to which she gave an ambiguous answer. He assumed that perhaps she was not ready for such a proposal, and understood that she did not want to talk about it any longer. Father and Beggins were not at all prepared to receive approval for a new trade route, let alone sell above market price. While others were concerned about financing the construction of the route, Ruin, out of jealousy, asked in different rooms if they lived with her brother and Irene. Ruina confirmed all of their questions that he had negotiated with Cecilia Voltrace herself. His family noticed that he had negotiated with that very cold-blooded representative of Cecilia and that they would receive weapons within 3 months. Most importantly, construction of the trade route would begin this month, and his father was delighted because they would finally enrich the territory. His father was very proud of his son for learning to solve such difficult problems, thanks to him growing up to be a smart and good person. But now he asked his father to entrust him with another task for the survival of the people in the territory of Ardell. He wanted to hunt on the Chinhyun Plain to avenge his mother, who had left her life there. On his 6th birthday, when he was supposed to have the best celebration in the village, the worst nightmare happened. The mud people who had captured the Chinhyun Plains broke into the village and many people lost their lives. The saddest thing is that Ruin's mother was one of those who lost their lives. Unfortunately, he can no longer remember her face without looking at a portrait. Many people suffered and were injured at that time, and at that moment, Ruin made a promise that he would become much stronger. He promised himself that as the young lord of Ardell, he would never allow such a thing to happen on his land again. After the order to destroy the village was given, the residents began to practice spear strikes every day. The atmosphere in his village changed, and he began to notice how people were trying to improve every day. Irene noticed that the technique they were practicing was different from the usual one, to which he replied that they were being trained by a local military commander. In the past, he had even earned the nickname Flash, and fought on the front lines for the kingdom as the greatest knight of Ardell, Sir Bolvar Peyton. If it weren't for him, the invasion of the Mud People would have caused more damage, as his defeat of 5 monsters with a single blow was still fresh in Ruin's memory. He did not want to interrupt the training, but Sir Bolvar himself approached them to greet the young gentleman. Sir Bolvar was amazed that the young gentleman had even won at the great festival and was now hunting. He asked about Irene, who was grateful to meet the saint with Sir Bolvar Peyton's spear, a legend among legends. She recalls how they were told about the gifted Knights of 11, and seeing that he uses the techniques of the capital's inhabitants, everything became clear. The only knight of the Spear of the Kingdom of Radiance suddenly retired and disappeared from view at the age of 30. He didn't think anyone would remember his stories, but it turns out she had read books about him almost to the point of wearing them out. The tale of how he broke through 10 high-ranking mages in the Fern Confederation was truly legendary. He appreciated her respect for finding his stories so impressive, but now he was just an ordinary old man. Ruina was offended that the old man had not told her about his legendary side, to which he replied that she had not asked about it. Still, he was very upset that he was hearing these stories from strangers, and had been unaware of them all this time. But Ruin knows more about him than he realizes because being a legend is only part of his life. It turns out he loves fishing. He used to go on walks with them when he was little, and now he enjoys seeing them grow up to be good people. Isn't that enough for him to understand his true nature? Finally, he calmed down, convinced that he knew him very well indeed. Today, Sir Bolvar will be giving young Lady Ruin sword lessons, and he invites Ruin to join them as well. Irene and Ruin are very surprised by her abilities because she is only 12 years old. Her perfect balance and consistent movements are proof of her deep understanding of the basics. Sir Bolvar uses only his left hand against her and does not use his main technique, instead swinging a wooden sword. Sir Bolvar praises the young lady for her progress, saying that even her brother cannot compare to her in sword skills. Ruin considers his sister to be a truly remarkable person, and also decides to praise her for her hard work. It turns out that Ruin will also be sparring, and although he once fought with wooden swords, now he will show what he is capable of. Sir Bolvara admits that his skills have improved over the past 7 years, but unfortunately, Ruin himself did not expect to lose so quickly. This admission does not help him at all, and he decides to find out how much his skills have improved over the years. He receives an ambiguous answer, as if there is no suitable example for comparison. Ruina knows one knight, Sir Golter Perante, who is the only 6-star knight in Radian and who trained him before the festival. But his strength is nothing compared to Sir Bolvara, because he left the order as a 7-star knight, which means he is the strongest knight in the kingdom. He was given an urgent task to learn how to fight a knight in a limited time of 3 days so that he could stand his ground in battle with the knights. Will he be able to cope if his current sword skills leave much to be desired? Irene says that he has a unique opportunity to learn skills from a 7-star knight as he participated in a knight tournament. After thinking it over, he agreed that he almost missed a good opportunity to learn from the legendary knight of the kingdom. At first, he doubted the necessity, but after completing the task, he decided to continue no matter what. His efforts began to bear fruit. Time passed, and the last day arrived when they continued training without rest. Even after several sleepless nights, he still had the task of making a critical strike with only half an hour left. He intended to make this strike while his family came at dawn. As it turned out, he had not slept, which is why everyone was so worried. They began to persuade him to stop training, to which he asked for just half an hour because he had an idea. The idea was to try a different approach, for which he asked Sir Bolvar for permission. He decided to switch to hand-to-hand combat because now he understood what the knight in front of him was going to do, and the old man realized that they wanted something from him. But Sir Bolvar decided to add one rule. Now Ruin could use magic against him. Of course, he would also fight for real because he was curious to see his true skills. But he noticed that without a sword in his hands, he had to close the distance, but in return, his body became lighter and his balance improved. Getting so close to him, the sword became a hindrance because of the blind spot. The way he dealt with Doom Prime at the festival was by breaking his sword using a non-universal strategy. Knights of Sir Bolvar's level do not engage in direct confrontation but redirect the force of the attack. The plan to retreat to a zone beyond the sword's reach is good, but once it is figured out, it becomes almost impossible due to the distance. Ruina realized that the old man was right, that all his strategies were very obvious, but he had overlooked something. His shocking and best plan in the end was to use light. Ruin admitted that he did not know how to defeat him and decided to blind him, to which the old man expected frightening magic, but it was just light. Ruin apologized for blinding him so suddenly, but Sir Bolvar accepted and understood his defeat. Finally, he dealt critical damage, and his steel destroyer skill meant that he could destroy anything made of steel. Runia beat her brother and scolded him for knocking Sir Bolvar to the ground, to which he immediately began to apologize. Once the sparring was over, Sir Bolvar wanted to wash up, and Ruin apologized for taking up so much of his time but also thanked him for the valuable experience. The short vacation came to an end, and it was time to leave their homeland, as the road to the academy would take 10 days. These workers were sent by the Valtrash family because they are building a base in Ardell and need a lot of manpower. Moreover, the workers will visit Ardell's restaurants and hotels, so all this will greatly benefit the territory. The changes have begun, and Ruin asks his father to use 12,000 gold coins to develop his territories. He kept 400 gold coins for himself and asked his father not to worry. Ruin asked him not to refuse this time, even though his father felt ashamed that he was in debt, but he accepted the money. They said goodbye, and he admitted that the vacation had been quite productive. He said goodbye to everyone and set off with Irene, but when it was time to part ways, he was about to say goodbye when she started talking. She said she would help him destroy the PSO after graduation because she would follow him until she defeated him. Thus, the two parted ways, proving to each other how unusual they were after all, and promising to meet again. After traveling for a week to the academies, he crossed the border and entered the eastern region. Unlike the south, there were many more people here, when suddenly a noise on the street caught his attention. The victim asked the offender to release his sister because he was also a knight, and if the offender did not release her, he would not let it go. The offender decided not to stop and to take everything his father owed him right now, even if it meant selling his sister. He couldn't stand up to the offender, but he tried very hard to uphold his family's honor. When he wanted to intervene, the residents began to stop him, saying that they were representatives of a gang and that he would not escape trouble and it would be better for him not to interfere. He was very disappointed by the residents' words that they were not trying to stop them, not trying to save that guy. They should be ashamed of themselves. After all, they were no different from the gangsters, because those eyes belonged to someone who could become stronger. He suddenly became curious about the true value of that guy. When the gangster started asking who he was and why he was getting involved, Ruin just pushed him a little harder so he wouldn't get in the way. When the guy he helped started asking who he was, he introduced himself after dealing with all the gangsters. This guy introduced himself as Hans and invited him to his home. His story was typical: a drunkard father in debt, children, and he decided to save his sister from slavery. But he was interested in the Odense Lamber gang. Their name was funny, but they acted very nastily. It turned out that if something enraged them, they would tie their victim to a tree and kill them. Their boss personally took 4 lives because of this, so people avoided them. The territory of Faldrin does not know about them, as they are active outside the territories in a couple of villages, all of which are too small to have their own security. Ruins really wants to get involved, but unfortunately he does not have time for it, to which Hans simply thanked him, asking if he was the winner of the festival. He confirmed that he had heard this from Sir Golter Perante. He heard this information from a bandit who is a knight and is obviously acquainted with Sir Golter. And indeed, Sir Golter had talked a lot about an outstandingly strong mage who was, of course, not stronger than him, omitting the fact that Ruin had defeated him in arm wrestling. Hans admitted that he wanted to become as strong and brave as their captain as soon as possible. It's not bad to have such a role model, but he is too weak and wonders if he will even be able to graduate from the academy. He admitted that he was last in the academy and was being bullied because of it. They asked how he could stay there with such skills. According to the captain, he had talent, and if he continued to try, he would shine one day. In this story, Ruin saw himself in him, because both Heidel and the head of the academy believed in him until the very end. At the same time, Sir Golet Perante believed in Hans until the very end, because hard work never fails. He gave his advice that even if he moves slower than the others, persistence will one day bear fruit, as it did for him. Hans warned that his sister's cooking skills were very specific, and he said this just as Ruin put a spoonful of food in his mouth. Suddenly, the bandits returned unexpectedly, ordering everyone to leave his house. When the bandits broke into the house, there was no one there, and Ruin decided to deal with them properly. One after another, the men flew across the yard when Ruin ordered Hans to take them somewhere far away to a safe place while he paid them back for the food. How naive they were, encouraging each other that there were 20 of them and he was alone. They all decided to attack at once, but suddenly he warned them not to do so. In sparring with Sir Bolvar, he acquired a new skill, Steel Destroyer. The moment his fist touched the sword, it broke in an instant. In other situations, they would have gotten off with a light punishment, but it was obvious which of them was the villain, so there was no mercy for them. Suddenly they howled, begging for mercy and admitting that they had committed a mortal sin. As a true strategist, Ruin understood that they must have realized by now that continuing was pointless. And as usual, ironically, not everyone had given up yet, and some still had the strength to fight him, but through the fate of the girl. He began to order his subordinates to get up and continue fighting, when suddenly Ruin asked him if he was the leader of that gang. He was the leader of the Anji Nozel gang, and if he understood, then whoever he was should get up and kneel quickly. Unfortunately, Hans was wounded while trying to protect his sister from the gangster. While Anji Nozel screams at him not to come near, Ruin has no choice but to decide everything on his own. It is difficult for Ruin to solve such problems, and the question of why the Academy does not teach how to act in such moments is on his mind. There is no time to create an illusion, when suddenly Hans gets up and cuts the back of the gang leader who is holding his sister. Hans gets up and confidently orders the other attackers to leave if they don't want to end up like their boss. They quickly ran away, and suddenly Hans fell to his knees, regretting that he had taken a man's life. Ruins encouraged him, saying that it was a necessary measure to stop them. He also congratulated him on his achievement, the sword Perito, which means mastery of the aura, which Hans had achieved in the end. The emission of the blue intangible energy of the aura meant that he had reached the 4th level. Although he did not know how to control it, he thanked him for believing in him and giving him confidence, asking him to stop whining already. At least no one would bother his sister like that, so his problem was solved, and in the morning, he headed to the academy. Before leaving his homeland, he wanted the vacation to never end, but when he returned to the academy, he realized that he had really missed it. When Jason asked him how he spent his vacation, he simply didn't know where to start. Everything that happened to him during the vacation was not something that could be easily discussed, so it was easier for him to say that he was training. He didn't understand that being so strong he was learning the art of sword fighting, to which Jason replied that vacations were necessary for rest. Besides, sword fighting was taught in the 2nd semester, and he didn't see the point in getting ahead of himself, to which Ruin replied that it was preparation. Professor Heidel informed Ruin that he had visitors. They had exchanged letters, of course, but he hadn't expected them to arrive so quickly. 2 princes of Radian had arrived wanting to talk to Ruin Ardell. They argued among themselves about who would talk to Ruin, when suddenly he greeted them with warm words. The first prince was named Croster Radian, and the second prince was named Foster Radian, and they began arguing again about who would talk to him. Ruin immediately understood their plan. If he won the festival, he would take one of their sides, and this would help him advance to the role of Crown Prince. Suddenly, Ruin suggested that the 3 of them discuss everything together. The Kingdom of Radian, on whose territory his estate and academy are located, is currently known as the weakest state on the continent. Despite this, internal divisions continue to exist in the kingdom. This is due to the confrontation between the monarchist faction of the first prince and the reformist faction of the second. The kingdom's magicians are deprived of their independence, being nothing more than pawns in the struggle for power. Knowing all this, the reason for their arrival becomes obvious. The princes are still quarreling with each other, and he thinks that with such infantile rulers, it is not surprising that their country is in such a state. He was confused by their sudden visit, but their arrival was very timely, because he wanted to explain something to them. As it turned out, he did not intend to choose either of the 2 princes as his master. This was quite expected for them, but it still felt like a blow to the gut. True, even the legendary ones refused the offers 3 times. Jasus, who had refused the emperor 3 times, ultimately took his side. He was surprised that the princes actually put him on a par with the first emperor, who was a knight of the 9th rank. Even if they continued to offer, his answer would remain the same, because he wanted to do something like Ruin Ardell. That something is to return to his homeland, Ardell. They ask if he will not leave the kingdom after graduation, because he could become a force for the kingdom. Unfortunately, the situation in Ardell is far from ideal, and he hopes that his desire not to abandon his homeland will be understood. Croster Radian assures him that the future power of emotions should not suffer from groundless worries. The second crown prince is also ready to help with everything, including money and food, but they clung to their words, and that's when he realized that he definitely wouldn't choose between them. When asked why, he replied that it was much more advantageous for him to have them fight for him. A new reason for them to compete was who would send the best gift on the occasion of his graduation. He was not opposed to gifts, but asked them to take care of what they had discussed, not to worry about him, and to focus on his graduation. Fortunately, the princes were satisfied that he would not take anyone's side and decided to leave him alone for the time being. He further confirmed his loyalty by assuring them that he had no intention of leaving the kingdom. He did not remain without benefit. First and foremost, he asked for approval of the plans currently being considered by the territory of Ardell. He also requested military support for the duration of the cleanup, and everything is going smoothly. Could this be the power of authority? There was a slight nuance in that they appointed him as the protector of the royal family. As the person closest to the royal family appointed to protect it, no one in the entire kingdom dares to look down on him. Although the title was given to him unofficially, since the princes themselves approved it, only formalities remain before it becomes official. Despite all the nuances, he is glad that everything was resolved without unnecessary problems. And as usual, everyone began to congratulate him, discussing what a cool position it was. The princes left, so it was time to get ready for class. And at that moment, Jason drove away all the fans with a request not to interfere with them going to class. It seems that things will get noisy again, because before that, the role of defender was always played by members of the Garyhill family. At that moment, Mikkel arrived, having heard all the discussions about him, and, unable to contain himself, shouted that they would all work under him after graduation anyway. After Mikkel used a forbidden potion, the academy considered expelling him, but he managed to avoid the worst by getting away with a month's suspension. All thanks to the influence of his family, the magicians of the academy, no, the magicians of the kingdom, are in fact under the control of the Garachil family. Ruins thinks differently, that the princes seem to have a completely different opinion, and now, after a long time, the rivals of the academy have finally met. Mikkel is still angry with him, saying that time will tell who is who and that he should not consider himself the winner. Jason supports his friend, saying that Mikkel is just jealous and that he should not take his words to heart. But he does not think about jealousy at all and does not even intend to pay attention to it. At the moment, Mikkel's reputation is tarnished, which directly affects his honor, and most likely he has something in mind, especially if it concerns the Garachil family. Today there is a special lecture from graduates for this year's graduates. They are very interested in which of the famous graduates came to their school to teach them, perhaps someone worthy. As a result, the ominous premonition, as always, proved to be true, and not in a good way. For some reason, everyone suddenly tensed up, especially Ruin, who froze in shock when he saw who was teaching the other graduating classes. The teacher greeted Ruin, and it turned out to be Shaquille Garyhill. The second semester of the graduating class focused on practical training, as mentioned earlier, and there would also be classes related to knights. In connection with this, graduates came to the academy to share the current situation among magicians in the form of lectures. Of course, everyone had the best of intentions, but once again, his premonition was not unfounded. Considering that the invited graduate lecturer was Michaela's older brother, Shaquille Garyhill, today he will talk about the relationship between magicians and the Garyhill family. As they probably know, 11 of the 14 court magicians come from the Garyhill family. As a senior lecturer, he wants to share the knowledge that nothing in this world can be claimed as one's own. Even as for Shaquille himself, from this moment on, it is better for them to focus on accepting reality. Just because they glorify Ruin Ardell's representative does not mean that their lives will turn out the same as his. Shaquille Garychill said this with a smirk, touching on Ruin's honor, and asked what he thought of such a term. Ruina confidently replied that even if 10 pieces of trash were combined in a single burst of inspiration, a masterpiece would not be born. At best, only a pile of trash would result. He had heard a lot about Ruina from his brother Mikkel, that he was at least a failure, but perhaps he had not heard the other story that he had not heard. That the same loser had beaten his brother up badly, to which he heard the reply about what a jerk he was. At that moment, they both realized that the rivalry between Ruin Ardell and the Garychill family would not simply disappear. With the arrival of Shaquille Garyhill, the atmosphere at the academy began to change rapidly. The students heard that anyone could join their family. Some of the astonished bad participants fell under his influence because his rhetoric was realistic and honest, which had a quick effect. Now the students believe that if they join the Garychill family, they too can succeed, but some still do not want to work for Mikkel. Ultimately, the academy split into two camps, with some supporting the Garychill family and others supporting the Ardell family. The atmosphere at the academy has become tense due to attempts to humiliate Ruin and his growing anger in response to childish provocations. However, the opportunity to put Garychill in his place did not take long to arrive, and the matter was settled over a cup of tea during a discussion with the head of the academy. As he is a representative of the students, the head wants to discuss with him pressing issues about the current situation at the academy. He replies that everything is as usual except for one element that is causing problems. The head understands what the problem is and is not enthusiastic about this family himself, but what else can they do, since almost every mage in the kingdom has ties to them? However, unlike last year, this year they were given courses that do not affect their final grade, but the noise continues, perhaps because they harbor a grudge against the head. Senior Shaquille Garyhill, who is he really? He was once incredibly popular because of his appearance and language skills, studied well, and was friends with everyone. At 23, he became the youngest mage in the kingdom. However, behind this facade lies a huge snake. He has a tremendous thirst for power and is a strong achiever of goals, whatever they may be. Outwardly, he seems like a decent person, but in essence, he is completely rotten and will use anything to get what he wants. That's Shaquille Garyhill for you. In that case, there are plenty of reasons to go into battle. The only question is under what pretext. The head still wants to discuss his upcoming special assignment with him because he has a wonderful idea. As it turns out, the idea is really good, but will he agree? He has already asked, but the reaction was mostly negative. He entered the auditorium where Shaquille was teaching with a question for him as a junior colleague. It is not a simple request, but rather that he once received an offer from the head of the academy to invite knights to the next class, but he refused. Therefore, he came to ask for permission for the graduates to receive this joint assignment. As part of these classes, graduates who come as lecturers can participate in training like other students. In other words, this is an official opportunity for the two of them to fight on the same level, just as others wanted to see Shaquille's abilities in reality. Also, together with Ruin, they will be able to act as equals, which may appease the Garychill family from attacking Ruin. As it turned out, the die has been cast, and now the decision is entirely up to Shaquille Garyhill, but his question is why all this? After all, the graduates are already experienced magicians with years of practice in such activities, so there is no need for what would be a waste of time. Such a response was quite expected, but isn't the purpose of the elders coming to them to teach them something? And yet he refuses to participate in the joint assignment, even though it is an ideal opportunity to prove himself. They insist that Gary Hill is a unified group, so why are they acting contrary to this? Perhaps there is some reason. Perhaps the reason is that they are afraid of something and do not want to fight him. At this point, Shaquille couldn't take it anymore and said that even though he won the great festival, he is still a student with little experience. After all, he can't do anything against real weapons, and will only continue to stubbornly refuse to participate in such problematic classes. But the other students are eager to see his skills in real combat. Mikkel immediately took his brother's side, saying that he should not be stubborn because this is an excellent opportunity to defeat Ruina. They tell Ruina that he will regret his proposal because his brother is a truly powerful mage. Reluctantly, they agreed to hold the session, not realizing that they had fallen for Ruin's trick. Shaquille refused to participate in the joint session so that he could continue to shine as the representative of the class, but since he wanted it so much, the fight would take place. But Ruin pretended that, as a junior, he just wanted to see his strength and gain experience. In that case, there was nothing to be done but shake hands. But Ruin's hands were very strong, and during the handshake, the lecturer's face changed painfully. Well, Ruin had no choice but to teach a lesson to the bad people who were blocking his air. 3 days later, it is the day of the arrival of the Knights of Foldren at the Ignite Academy. It turns out that the headmaster himself had originally asked for a joint assignment, but he was refused, so he asked Ruin as the junior to ask because they would not refuse him. The headmaster's plan was cunning, and he needed the knights to carry it out. They had just returned and had a warm meeting with Professor Hen. The warm reception consisted of small talk, and Sir Golter learned that one of his experienced mages had won the great festival. He needed to see the head of the Ignite Academy, so he asked Ruin to look after his students. Ruin, in turn, kindly introduced himself to the students as a representative of the academy and asked who the representative of the Knights Academy was. But he did not understand when they said that the representative was busy, as he suddenly heard someone arguing with each other, humiliating the weak. Looking very closely, he saw that the other knights were bullying Hans, whom he had rescued on his way to the academy after the holidays. The representative of the knights was Maltiv Gagan, the son of the 7th-ranked knight Wengras Gagan, commander of the Golden Knights. But Ruin wondered why he needed this information, or if he wanted to show off his pedigree, because he just wanted to brag like a little boy. But he wasn't interested in any of that, and wanted an answer to his previous question about what was going on here. According to Maltiv Gagan, Hans had recently stopped listening to him, so he decided to give him some individual training. And what rudeness it was to show interest in a commoner during the exchange of greetings, asks the knight, or perhaps they are acquainted. Hearing that they were friends, he laughed heartily, saying that it seemed that commoners understood each other best. After all, the Ardell family was not particularly influential, and the academy representative had chosen someone with such a pedigree, and he suddenly felt disgusted talking to Ruin. When people approached from behind, he suddenly realized why the stranger was so hostile towards him. As it turned out, he was from the Garachil family and the brother of Chakil and Mikkel. Well, a fisherman knows a fisherman from afar. And even if he hadn't known Hans, they still wouldn't have gotten along. Sir Golter returned and ordered everyone to gather together, because, as they knew, they had a joint training session today. But to begin the main part, they needed to split into groups, each with 2 students and 1 trainee knight, for a total of 54 groups. The 2 brothers did not particularly want to train with other students, even though one of them had graduated long ago and did not understand what he had forgotten among them. Shaquille and Maltiv wanted to be in the same group, and with Mikkel joining them, they thought they would win this task. While everyone was gathering into groups, Hans was sad because no one would choose him for their group since he was at the bottom of the list of knights. But suddenly, the good-natured Ruin invited him to join their group. Hans was very unsure of himself, so he asked Ruin if he was sure he wanted him on the team, to which Ruin replied that they were friends. Since they had formed a group based on friendship, they couldn't forget Jason, and since Hans was Ruin's friend, he was automatically his friend too. As the leader of the group, Ruin immediately made it clear that their main goal was not just to get a good score, but to deal with that annoying guy. Once the groups were formed, it was time for a short break. Seeing that Hans did not look very well, Ruin offered to take him to the medical center, but he refused, saying that everything was fine. More importantly, Hans is really happy to see him again, but it would probably be better to pretend they are strangers. Ruin doesn't quite understand what he is getting at, but he has seen how the others dislike him, and therefore, when no one else is around, something might happen. Without listening to the end, he asks him not to worry about it, because the guy who bullied him on the training ground is not exactly simple. He is a 4th-class knight, a student of the sword Perito, and with high potential, he is certainly skilled, which is probably why Hans is afraid of him. But at the moment when he killed the gang leader with a single blow, his body was surrounded by a blue aura. Although he is still a 3rd-rank knight, he already meets the criteria for the 4th rank and has high potential and enormous opportunities for growth. He is going to deal with this knight, Malteve, but what about Hans? Oh, he still wants to remain a punching bag. And where did that stern look with which he defended his sister go? He wonders if he can really do it, and Ruin says that of course he can, but then the Garachel brothers, who can no longer listen to this nonsense, intervene. Can Hans defeat Malteve? Can this useless commoner who is wasting his breath really defeat Malteve? He is sure that he never will. Malteve calls Hans over, to which he replies that he does not want to, saying that he felt special next to Ruin, and that this will never happen. Surely Hans had gone mad from the beatings he received from Malteve, when suddenly he ordered him to come closer again. Hans wanted to draw his sword and fight him, but Ruin stopped him, telling him not to stoop to Malteve's low level. He will definitely fight him, but not today. Let him wait for the right opportunity to wipe him out. In the meantime, Ruin decided to deal with him himself, and in the blink of an eye, they were already running towards each other. Suddenly, Sir Golter appeared in front of them and kicked his student before he received something from Ruin that no one expected. Sir Golter asked Melitva for an explanation, to which he began to shout that they had all started it, and that he had done nothing wrong. And so he drew his sword to slay his offender who had decided to start it, Sir Golter asked. He announced that from that day on, he would no longer be a representative of the trainee knights until a replacement was found. Upon his return, disciplinary measures would be applied to him, to which he began to shout that his father would not remain silent about this. But that was until he heard that his son had drawn his sword at the academy and tried to kill someone, at which point his father would be speechless. Ruins noticed that he was acting pompous but trembling with fear at the mention of his father's name. Be that as it may, they seemed to have noticed him. The first part of the joint training was close combat and defense training. Sir Golter Perante taught how to neutralize a mage's main weakness, the time it takes to cast a spell. Professor Heidel demonstrated how to predict the movements of knights and leave their attack range. Each group practiced these techniques. The two brothers were very angry with Ruin and did not understand how they could train in a place full of people like him, so they decided to sit it out, since everyone knew about it anyway. Lecturer Chakil said so, but he couldn't train here in front of everyone, even though they wanted him to reveal his skills. Hans was already exhausted and asked to end the training. Jason agreed, but noticed that Ruin wasn't tired at all and still had energy to spare. He even said that he was just warming up when suddenly Sir Golter asked him to pay attention to him while he was still strong. He wanted to verify his skills because it is impossible to master such skills on your own without a good mentor. It was then that Ruin realized that Sir Golter was much more attentive than he seemed. So Sir Golter Perante wanted to have a sword duel with Ruin. Ruin thought it was a joke because he was not a knight and had only been training with him for a week, but as it turned out, he was not asking him to defeat him, but only to teach others. After all, in Sir Golter's opinion, there is no one more capable than him among the trainees. This attention puts pressure on him, but if he shows himself from his best side, he will have a chance to put some people in their place, so it's not a bad idea. Then he stood at the ready, eager to learn something new from Sir Golter. Everyone froze in amazement at Sir Golter's speed, wondering if he was taking the sparring too seriously. As expected, Sir Golter was very surprised by his new fighting skills and asked the name of the person who taught him. It seemed to him that he should tell the truth because it wasn't as if he was hiding anything, and perhaps nothing bad would happen if he revealed who his mentor was. His mentor was Sir Bolvar Peyton, the legendary spearman who, as they thought, had been dead for many years. Surprised, Sir Golter asked how they knew each other, and he explained that he had retired and lived in his village and had known him since childhood. Suddenly, he shouted menacingly at Ruin Malteve, telling him not to dare lie to him. It turned out that his father had personally told his son that Bolvar Peyton was dead, and he could not prove his words. But why should he prove anything, since he was not in the habit of calling the dead alive? However, even if it were true, nothing would change, because his father was still the strongest in the kingdom. That's the thing. Because his father is officially recognized as the strongest knight in the kingdom, Sir Vengras Geegan, commander of the Golden Knights. But if the legendary knight Bolvar Peyton turns out to be alive, it could affect the existing order. That's what he's worried about, but let him worry about the strongest man in the kingdom, because Sir Bolvar doesn't care about pathetic regalia. These words angered him greatly, so he decided to challenge him to a duel with real swords. Suddenly, he received another message from Sir Golter, who asked him why he wanted to fight Ruin so badly, to which he gave an affirmative answer. Tomorrow, the first match of the group sessions will be a battle between Ruin's and Malteve's groups, and no one objected. As soon as the fight began, Chakil was suspiciously very fast, and as it turned out, he used as many as 6 artifacts that he had brought with him. Last night, there was a meeting between Sir Vengras and Commissioner George. The conversation was about Chakil, who had been invited to give a special lecture at the Academy as a representative of the alumni. The senior authorized advisor of the Kingdom of Radian was surprised that he had been invited by the head of Ignat Tyrion himself to ask how Malteve was doing. He had been a very troubled boy, which is why he was sent to Sir Golter to be taught discipline, and now he was at the Academy. Sir George came to him on behalf of the Academy representative, Ruin Ardell. Rumors had spread that he had won the great festival, attracting a lot of attention. Sir Vengras believes that an ordinary upstart from the provinces should not be able to make his way so easily. They believe that he should not be allowed to win over the princes to his side and that something must be done about it. Their plan was to give them artifacts for George to pass on to Malteve so that they could rub Ruin's nose in it. George reminded him of one man, Bolvar Peyton, who, as it turned out, was alive and training Ruin, and if they lost, their reputation would be shaken. Ruin was quickly caught by Shaquille, who even mocked his poor skills, so he had to quickly come up with something. Malte's weapons were very durable because of the amulet of durability, which made their weapons many times sharper and stronger. Ruina did not lose his composure, and since the sword was as hard as steel and he had the strength to destroy steel, he quickly dealt with his sword. They did not expect him to have such strength that allowed him to move quickly and strike very hard. Even with artifacts, they could not push him back, which angered Ruin because he did not want to use heavy artillery, but decided to put on gloves. These gloves had a terrifying effect, and no one from the academy knew about them before, but now he was able to defeat them. Ruins immediately saw through them with 6 artifacts and ordered them to end this circus because they couldn't defeat him anyway. Suddenly, the first leader's huge hand began to tear the amulet artifact that gave him strength away from him. All the students who saw this were in complete shock that the elder Shaquille had used artifact. As usual, he began to threaten, like Meikle, that the Garyhill family would not let this go and would definitely not leave him alone. But he was already used to such words because first it was Meikle, then the eldest son Shaquille, and who would be the next one he would defeat? Perhaps it would be George Garyhill himself, which made him angry and he began to freak out. But it became too noisy for him, and with just a slight push, he sent him flying. Strand asks him if he is sure about Ogra, that he should show him to everyone here. It's not that he could hide it forever, but if you look at the face of the head of the academy, he is in complete shock. But the most important thing is that Shaquille Garyhill was defeated, and apparently Meikle fainted just seeing Ogra. When Sir Golter decided to announce the winner, Hans suddenly asked for a moment. Since Melitva's weapon was only broken, Hans threw him a new one so that they could fight one-on-one again, because the fight was not over yet. The Sword Perito is a knight with at least a 4th rank and therefore has mastered the control of the aura. 4-star knights have a blue aura, 5-star knights have a red aura, and 6-star knights have a purple aura. Beyond that, the color has no specific meaning and reflects the knight's characteristic. Perhaps the level of a trainee knight is 3 stars. In other words, even among those who have officially become knights, there are those who have yet to reach 4 stars. Ruins decided to watch him, even though the duel was over, not wanting to stop him, because that confident look had finally returned to him. Malteva did not want to accept the fact that an ordinary commoner had already reached the 4th level. Hans also plucked up the courage to say that he was just lucky to be born into a good family and that he was selfish for still clinging to his status. Hans delivered the final blow, knocking Malteva unconscious, but in doing so, the simple boy defeated the pompous boy. When Ruin approached him, Hans asked to see that his sword had now turned red. In a conversation with the head of Tehran, he admitted that he did not expect him to defeat the graduate. But Ruin believes that since he invited Shaquille to the academy, he originally expected such an outcome. Oops, he was exposed, because he wanted so much to temper the ardor of the Garyhill family, but instead he added fuel to the burning desire for revenge. Rumors of the duel had already reached the capital because Shaquille had won, and now the nobles were discussing whether this could be a sign of the family's downfall. And George Garyhill will do everything to restore the family's honor, which means he may soon be in danger. As the head of the Ignite Academy, he cannot allow any of his students to suffer, and that is why they came here. To the stairs leading to the basement of the academy, where a few days ago Kingrim awoke from a long sleep. And the first thing he said was that he could smell his kin. Now all they have to do is go downstairs, because Kingrim is waiting for him with a gift. Ruina is curious why the head of Ignite does not ask about the ogre that appeared behind him, since there is no such magic in this world. It does not matter to him whether he appears before him with a giant behind him or a goblin on his shoulders. For him, he will be the same Ruina Ardell whom he trusts. And that is the only thing that really matters to him, for which Ruin is very grateful for such support. Kingrim still cannot believe that he exudes the scent of his clan that lives on Heavenly Mountain, and even the scent of his father, Munkin. He told him everything that happened on Heavenly Mountain, and that he created an artifact with the help of Kunhan's tooth. When he told them, they laughed at him, saying that he had arm wrestled with 100 ogres, which was completely reckless. Achiever Ruin not only competed in the matches, but also won each one. Kunhan thought he would be locked in this artifact forever and simply disappear, but he was very happy to hear about his homeland. He thanked him for telling him about his homeland, when suddenly he was given a new achievement, the title of Lord of the Ogres, with his strength increased by 1,000. Strand reached 5 stars and can transform into a humanoid form, and because of his new companion skill, his strength is increased by 500. Kuhn believes that he is the embodiment of Drak and his benefactor, and the only one who is trusted by the ogres of the Heavenly Mountain, and presents him with a gift. Thanks to him, Strand reached 5 stars much faster than expected, and he wants to demonstrate his new skills as soon as possible. And it was Strand's human form, which she had been unable to achieve for so long. From his reunion with Kingram, he received 2 more gifts: the power of a leader, which allows him to command the ogres as their lord. He also received the call of the ogre and the special privilege of summoning Kingram, who is bound to the academy for life, to him once. Before leaving, he said to summon him only in case of a real threat to life. Strand turned into a human and was now very happy, but the head of Ignite had questions about her and who she was. Even during his conversation with Kingram, he did not know how to explain her to the head and thought he was doomed. But she knew how to present herself and told everything as it was, that she was the embodiment, one might say the spirit, and then turned into a human. She sarcastically remarked to the head that Ruin had told her to be more polite, but she dismissed it, saying that she had lived much longer than him. Since she had arrived from Kingram's premises, the head agreed to her staying at the academy. She introduced herself as his cousin, Strand Ardell. She was younger but had simply skipped several grades and was now a genius in her graduating class. Suddenly, Jason fell to his knees in front of her, introducing himself as Ruin's best friend and offering to show her around the academy. Hans approached them, and today was his departure day. They were both sad to say goodbye because they had become really good friends. He also wanted to visit Ardell, so he asked for permission, and Ruin, of course, agreed to welcome the guest. But he didn't want to visit as a guest. He wanted to come as a knight of Ardell. He was completely serious because he wanted to become someone important and protect Ardell and its leader, just like him. Jason immediately ran up with the news that he would also be going to wash dishes, help out, and, of course, be close to Lady Strand. But Ruin doesn't remember giving him permission, but he just joked that his friends would move to Ardell after graduation, which is great. In the capital, the day began with curses that everything was over, because so much money had been spent, and yet Malativa was defeated by a novice knight. The same was true of Garachil. Even their eldest son was defeated by Ruin Ardell, and the era of their family had now come to a tragic end. The Garachil family had maintained their status as a house of magic, while at the same time, Vengras Gagan was regarded as nothing less than the strongest knight in the kingdom. This status was maintained thanks to the support of the nobility, but if that support disappeared, for now, they are at the top. But when their sons take over, their fall will be inevitable. The decision is obvious. They must change side, and so they must join Ardell as soon as possible, but the current head of Delin Ardell does not accept money. Suddenly, Commissioner Josh entered the room and asked who they were going to join. They replied that there had been a misunderstanding, but if it weren't for him, they would have been talking nonsense all along. The Garachil family had been in power since the founding of Radian, and history does not tolerate lies, so their fears would not come true. He wanted to use Ruina as a stepping stone for Chakil and Mikkel, but this man trampled their honor in the mud, and now he will kill him no matter what it takes. Another important activity in the second semester is a visit to the capital. As part of the lesson, they will visit the Magic Tower and the Royal Palace, where they will be able to see new magic and learn something from the current magicians. Of course, the goal of this activity is wonderful, but it turns out that they will finally meet Josh Garachil face to face. The head of the Garachil family surely harbors a great grudge against Ruin. Now, visiting the capital is like visiting the enemy's lair, where they will have to face the court magicians. There are plenty of opportunities to target him because according to rumors, Josh is a 7th-class magician, just like the head of the Ignite Academy. If the old Strand were here, she would have defeated him with a flick of her finger, but she doesn't know how strong Strand used to be, and such a mage should not be underestimated. Information about the chapter, which is on the same level, is still unavailable for the player to view, but he must not let his guard down when they arrive in the capital. Finally, they arrived in the kingdom of Radian, which was indeed the capital, but it was only a dazzling grandeur unworthy of such a small kingdom. Someone called out to the leader from behind, saying that they hadn't seen each other in a long time, and he was very embarrassed by such a meeting. What made Josh's representative appear here in person? But he considered it rude, because as a defender, he needed to welcome the future of the kingdom. However, seeing and greeting the young magicians who would be the future of the kingdom today was the only reason. He also wanted to look at the children who had grown up so much to understand how they were able to defeat his sons. And so he quickly found Ruin Ardell and began to stare at him intently in an attempt to get to know him. Ruin felt as if a snake was wrapping itself around his body, and there was something wrong with that. After all, as far as he knew, Josh Garachil was a 7th-class mage, but the player's eyes showed that he could be 6th class, as he could deceive everyone. Perhaps it was all about artifacts because, like father, like son, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Ruin just laughed and was about to leave when Josh Garachil suddenly grabbed his arm because he hadn't finished the conversation yet. Now he asked again, very fiercely, what was so funny that Ruin was laughing about. Seeing this, the headmaster asked Chairman Josh to stop because he was still a student, but Josh simply shut him up. Perhaps he had authority at the academy, but here in the capital, Josh was responsible for the students. Headmaster Ignite did not give up so easily, because if this somehow justified threats against the student, he would be forced to go back. Would they return? But it was true that Headmaster Tyrion was very noble and had always been that way. After all, Josh knew that it was Tyrion's idea to make his son look ridiculous in front of everyone by luring him into an open lesson. Tyrion was upset that he was appointed as the defender instead of Tyrion, which smacked of jealousy, and at that moment he burst out and shouted to stop. But then Ruin interrupts him, saying that he is very interested in one detail about Josh's representative. This caused laughter because he had never seen anyone wear so many rings. Mikkel and Shaquille, his elders, were also fond of accessories. Apparently it was a common trait among the wealthy. Josh realized that he knew what he was talking about and quickly replied that it was just a coincidence that they wore a lot of jewelry and that there was no specific reason for it. Be that as it may, he orders Tyrion to relinquish his authority, and from that day on, Josh himself will conduct the classes. And so, the trip to the capital turned out to be far from ordinary. He said he would lead the class, but as soon as they arrived at the palace, he disappeared. So completely that the senior mage led the tour instead of him. However, despite the lack of information during the tour, the atmosphere was not too bad. Except for one detail. He felt, along with Strahn, that they were all staring at him without hiding it. Once in the room, Strahn told him to look at the courtyard. Wasn't that the man who had been watching them earlier? He had been there since they entered their dwelling, and they had been wondering what was going on. As it turned out, it was all an illusion. He could sense a faint, elusive magic everywhere because he had created the environment around them with illusory magic. Even the landscape and passers-by were not real. In addition, he had put up a barrier to isolate this place from the outside world. Despite the fact that Strahn had taken on human form, she was still far from her former strength, which is why she did not feel such weak energy. Now one of the passers-by decided to lure Ruin away, so he ran after him, because he would not expose others to danger in a closed room. They are all 6th-level magicians who can create illusions, but this is done not by one person, but by 3, and maybe even more. Since they are all 6th-level magicians, the chances of victory are slim, and suddenly Josh Garachil joins the battle. Perhaps this evening will turn out to be special, which is why he decided to take a risk and go after him into battle. A few hours earlier, Josh's representative called everyone to a meeting, but only a couple of people came. The rest deliberately did not show up. Perhaps they are avoiding it, but today is the day when everything will be over with Ruin Ardell, so why is everyone still afraid and not coming? Usually, the room is so full that people have to stand because there aren't enough seats, but today only 4 people showed up. The plan for the day is that the night guards are all his people, so if there's any trouble, it won't be a problem. Josh's representative also gave the captain the task of bringing hired assassins to Ardell. After midnight, they would sneak into the estate and take the head of Ruin Dellen Ardell's father. At least the father and son would pass away on the same night, but they forgot that they also had a daughter. She and Bolvar Peyton must also disappear that night because in their opinion, there is only room for one son in the world. Sir Bolvar noticed that it was very quiet and assumed that it was because of the young Lord Ruin. After all, his recent victory over Garachil's eldest son, whose family he knows, will not be left unanswered. Dellen Ardell also warned Sir Bolvar to be on his guard, as anything could happen. Sir Bolvar decided to ask the resident of Ardell if he had noticed anything unusual about the visitors today. He replied that he had seen 5 merchants, but they had not sold anything, and he had not seen them leave. Sir Bolvar knew that the assassins disguised themselves as merchants and then disappeared from view once they entered Ardell's territory. The resident also warned that they were carrying swords, so Bolvar needed to be careful. Suddenly, he ran into the manor. The hired assassins were waiting for Dellen Ardell in his room, but he had not yet returned to the estate. And then Sir Bolvar entered the room where the hired assassins were waiting. At first, they did not understand how he knew about them, but then they remembered that he was a 7-star knight, and that his skills of concealment were second to none. The assassins hired by Wengrace and Gagan, all of whom had invaded Ardell's territory, were at least 6th-level masters. Bolvar Peyton, a 7-star knight, had long since replaced his sword with a fishing rod, and therefore many believed that his skills were no longer what they used to be. However, this was a fatal mistake for them, because he defeated them all at once. The hired assassins were shocked by his strength, because when they trained with 7-star knights, it was different, and here Bolvar wants to tell them something. He stopped training because no matter how hard he tried to develop, he had already reached the limit of what could be achieved in terms of technique. And how could he achieve what he had already achieved, with nowhere else to go? At that moment, someone jumped on him from behind with a sword, and without even looking at him, he dealt with him. Now the assassins are angry at Vengrass for not telling them the truth about Bolvar, because if they had known, they would not have taken on the job even for a 5-fold increase in pay. Now Bolvar knew who had sent them and ordered him to tell Vengrass never to set foot on Ardell territory again. Ruin did not come alone, and those who watched him say that he decided to go to the other world with a companion who rejected Ruin, saying that this would never happen. He estimated that they were all prepared, and that there were about 7 mages. He decided that Ruin wanted to take this moment quietly, and he used his strongest ability, But Strawn did not let the spell pass and defended him. Ruin argued that there are creatures that are immune to their magic until their master passes away. He used his skill, the will of the leader, in which the first leader of the Heavenly Mountain, Kunhan, would support him until his strength was exhausted. Suddenly, one mage came from below and sealed his burden with dark magic, the seal of water. There are those who practice forbidden dark magic that all mages have rejected. They are called black magicians. The water seal is a spell invented by a water-black magician. It will not leave the one it touches until it sucks out all their life force. He did not expect them to resort to such extreme measures, using dark magic. He saw how they used dark magic, how they had no choice but to get rid of him, because now even Strawn was no obstacle. He was told that he would not be going to the other world alone, because his family had also been sent with him. At that moment, his eyes burned with fire, and he used all the power he had and decided to take extreme measures as well. They all thought he was under the influence of black magic under the seal of water, but it turned out not to be so. After all, he had a unique skill, to summon Kingrum to where the summoner was, but he had to use it in real danger. They had crossed the line, but now he asked them not to be angry, because he would act as ruthlessly as they did. At that moment, there was only one thought in his head, to destroy them all for his family and to take revenge for everyone they had killed. Kingrum asked the purpose of summoning him, to which he replied that he should leave no one alive and show them no mercy. He began to carry out the order without question, because now it was his duty to obey a single command. Ruins did not stop and decided to destroy everyone in his path, no matter what they did to his fists, because this was revenge for his family. It did not matter who his magic killed, but suddenly Strawn intervened with a request to stop before it was too late. Suddenly, one mage decided to intervene, saying that he had been a psychopath all this time, no different from him. And Ruin was still burning with the desire to get rid of them in the harshest way possible for such words. Strawn asks why he is behaving this way since nothing has happened yet, and that there is Sir Bolvar, who is much stronger than he seems. She orders him to pull himself together, because if he succumbs to that power, he will end up like Drakkar. Doesn't he remember how he ended up and what his last days were like? Why, in his opinion, was he called the Destroyer of Worlds? He went mad with unlimited power and ended up destroying the whole world. But Ruin is not Drak, and he must not repeat his fate. Only then did he cool his ardor and agree with her. He still decided to find out what was happening in Ardell from the mage who had been exhausted by his blows. Did he know about the Menden group, which included the best mercenaries with swords of at least 6th rank, 5 of whom had already arrived in Ardell? Perhaps by this time his entire family was already dead, and suddenly someone's spear flew into him from behind. A representative of Josh came to check if everything was in order, but there was complete chaos. The pathetic, worthless mages were called the best people of Garachil, but they couldn't handle a common upstart. Ruin still asks how he dared to attack his family. They should have just gone to the academy and kept a low profile. Why did they have to provoke them and use dark magic? It turns out that Josh is also a dark mage, and if this becomes known, the best outcome will be imprisonment, but it could also be much worse. Josh wants to shut him up forever so that he doesn't spill the beans about black magic, but the call has ended, and now Ruin can't even move. He can't end his life like this, and suddenly he is saved by the head of the academy, Tyrion Ignat. This artificial world was created by Josh's minions, 6th-class magicians, so that no one from the outside would know what was going on inside. However, this magic only keeps ordinary people out. A magician of Tyrion's level can immediately detect the unnatural flow of mana. In addition, a serious drawback of this magic is that if a higher-level mage casts a spell in it, the illusion will immediately dissipate. Josh's representative asks Tyrion if he is capable of destroying the entire city in order to defeat him alone. But the only one who will suffer is Josh Garachil because he has already put up a barrier everywhere that protects those around him from such magic. He is very angry that he not only got carried away with dark magic, but even dared to harm his student, because this is a crime. And for this crime, he decides to punish him himself to teach him a lesson. Perhaps Josh's power is very weak since he cannot resist Tyrion. Strange also thinks so. So it is to be expected that with such a gap between them, it will be a crushing victory for the head of Tyrion Ignita. The head of the academy is a 7th-class mage, and his power so far exceeds Ruin's that he doesn't even dare to challenge him. Despite all his power, it is clear that he still has a long way to go, but thanks to him, he was able to survive. All of Ignat's students ran to the windows, not understanding what was happening, but the picture they saw was that Josh was lying helplessly in front of Headmaster Tyrion. The princes arrived immediately and heard that the head of the Garyhill family had completely taken control of the capital's security. The only one of those who had arrived in the capital on an official visit whom he had targeted was Lord Ruin, and they rushed to his aid as quickly as possible. The princes had not changed in any way, but this time their hearts were beating with anxiety for him, wondering what might have happened to him. They explained that Josh was lying because he had tried to use black magic against him, but the head of Tyrion had stopped him. This was treason and a direct challenge to the royal family. He would immediately report it to his father and have Garyhill arrested for criminal conspiracy. And now that they had confirmed the use of forbidden black magic, every member of that family must be taken into custody. But first, Ruin wanted to make a single request that only the princes could grant him at this moment. It concerned Ardell. He needed to be sure that his father and younger sister were safe, and to get an answer quickly, they sent a request to Monzo. Even so, the wait dragged on for half a day, which seemed much longer than his entire life. Less than a year later, they finally received a reply from Monzo, and it turned out that everyone was alive and safe. The Lord was already aware of the possible danger, and Sir Bolvar Peyton successfully neutralized the assassins who had been sent. Moreover, they managed to find out who had organized the assassination attempt. Wasn't it obvious that it was all the work of Josh Garrichel? But it turned out that there was an accomplice. As it turned out, Sir Wengrus Geegan, who was the captain of the kingdom's Golden Knights, was most involved in the affair. The princes were very disappointed with how rotten the world had become, and now he is stripped of his title as captain of the knights, and everything that could be taken away from Josh is also taken away. Now the prince needs temporary replacements for their duties until the deputy captain takes over the captain's duties. And for the position of defender, he asks the head of Tarion if he would like to assist him in this. When he began to respond that he was old, the prince knew that he was not interested in politics, but due to the dire situation, he was asked to take this position. And if anything, he was asked to take this position until a suitable candidate was found. But something troubled him. It is widely known that the princes had been trying for a long time to bring the head to the capital, spending a lot of effort and money on it. However, the head remained adamant and refused all offers, firmly believing that a teacher had no place in politics. The students who stood aside began to ask him to take this position, because there was no one more ideal for this position than him. If this was the wish of his students, then he should obey, but only until another candidate for the position was found. The princes were very happy and eagerly awaited working together, because now the kingdom would flourish even more, and at this rate, there would be no other candidate. Ruin is just glad that everything ended well, and as soon as the trip to the capital is over, the final exams at the academy will begin. It's a pity that the long and at the same time fleeting stay at the academy will soon come to an end. The trip to the capital, which was unsuccessful from the very beginning, was a reason to discuss whether it was worth canceling everything, but they kept to the schedule and stayed for a couple of days. Now, according to rumors in the capital, Mikhail Garrichel is finally leaving the academy, and only those involved in the situation know what really happened. His father, Josh Garrichel, was put in prison, and the magicians of his family whom he trusted scattered, so this outcome was very obvious. And so it turns out that many well-known members of the Garrichel family left or disappeared, and finally their surname disappeared without a trace. This meant the final fall of the Garrichel family forever, and the beginning of a new era. Finally, the triumph of the Ardell family and banners with similar words began to spread throughout the capital. Soon, the news was discussed not only among the nobility, but throughout the kingdom, with everyone who was not too lazy discussing this news. In the corridor of the kingdom, someone stubbornly and noisily tried to get through to the crown prince, forcing him to come out. Despite being held back by 2 guards, he ran up to the crown prince, and the guards did not even have time to apologize and catch up with him. He introduced himself on his knees, saying that he was Chakil, the eldest son of the Garrichel family, and apologized for the unplanned visit. It was a great honor for him to meet Crown Prince Shomerton Raynak of the Raynak Empire. He understood that his behavior might seem disrespectful, but he asked for understanding, saying that he had not meant anything like that, and began to babble. In general, the essence of his request was to seek refuge in the empire for his younger relatives, a total of 40 people seeking shelter. They would like to serve the Crown Prince and contribute to the future of the empires, but the Crown Prince finds this tiresome because, in the end, they are just looking for a place to eat. Garrichel, once the most influential country in the kingdom, is now fleeing and seeking refuge in his empire, and he asks what the reason is. The reason is an attempt to kill others, which is such a trivial reason, or an assassination attempt on a member of the royal family. But for his empire, helping Garrichel would be an act against justice, and his refusal may even have a better effect on his reputation. The Crown Prince actually sees no reason to grant him asylum. He orders him to return, because he will not help him or grant his request, but he will not arrest him either. Suddenly, he confessed that they had attempted to assassinate Ruin Ardell. Now the Crown Prince was interested in the details and decided to discuss everything over a cup of tea. Despite the series of events after the trip to the capital, there were no serious incidents, and 3 months have passed since then, and the new year has arrived. As if snow had fallen, a huge number of nobles gathered at the academy, and the reason for this was simple. It was graduation day. The academy's graduates demonstrated their skills in front of an audience, which gave the magicians the opportunity to get jobs from the nobles. Today was the day of the exam, and graduation was just around the corner. This exam marked the end of their training at the academy. The 6 years spent here seemed both long and fleeting, and finally, this time was coming to an end. While Ruin is always ready for the exam, the same cannot be said for Jason, because he doesn't care since he's going to Ardell anyway, even though he didn't give him a definite answer. His family has arrived, and even though he knew that nothing had happened to them, seeing them in person and confirming this makes it much easier. Ruin is very touched that they all came to see him and began to ask if anything bad had happened after that incident. He is still very ashamed that they ended up in great danger because of him, for which he apologizes. His father asks him not to worry so much, because he is proud that his son did not give in to the enemies. He manages to thank everyone, even Sir Bolvar, but he waves it off, saying that he was only doing his duty. But Rowena has a keen eye, and this time she began to ask her brother who the lady was, pointing to Strang. Everyone reads differently. He says she's just a friend, but she sarcastically remarks that he has acquired a girlfriend, and until she sees Irene with them, the excuse about his cousin doesn't work. While Jason was introducing himself to his father as his godbrother, fortunately, it wasn't just his family who came to see him. Hans, who had completed his training and become a full-fledged knight, also arrived. Naturally, his new friends, whom he had befriended at the Great Festival, Seda Malchiri and Irene, were able to come from afar. As a bonus, his most powerful connections showed up for his exam. The princes talk about how many difficulties they had to overcome to find him here, and Seat notes that he is now a high-flying bird. The exam for the Academy's senior students was about to begin, and all the graduates were asked to proceed to the arena. Everyone who came to see him was rooting for him and believed in him, wishing him luck on the exam. This is the final exam, and since everyone is supporting him, he has to give it his all. Suddenly, two people he doesn't know at all come up to him, but their faces seem painfully familiar. He decides to consult with Strawn, but she senses that the one on the left is King Terran and the one on the right is the Crown Prince. Although they had changed their appearance, they could not deceive her eyes, for their frightening aura had not gone anywhere. But if they wanted to get into the graduation exam, they did not necessarily have to change their appearance. Perhaps they had come to Ruin. They came secretly to see how much stronger he had become without him noticing. He liked their well-thought-out plan. But if they wanted to make the same offer as before, his answer would remain the same. Since they had tried so hard, he would give them a spectacle worthy of their time and show them how far he had progressed. The final exam consists of a stage of isolation, a battle with ice, and most importantly, destruction. The exam is a timed test in which the examinees must complete the tasks as quickly as possible. The first stage is an isolation test that requires the student to get out of a room with a well-protected door. There are many different ways to get out of these rooms. For example, you can cancel the locking spell that was cast on the lock or create a key using a magic stone. But the method used does not matter, and as suddenly as all 7 members of Team Number 6 left the rooms almost simultaneously, only the result is important. In the next test, the exam becomes absurdly difficult. This stage requires destroying an ice monster in the glacial zone of the arena. In the final stage of the exam, you need to use the most powerful magic available to destroy the wall. Once they pass all the stages, the exam will be considered successfully completed, and Jason was the first to finish. Jason Damon is the first from Team 6 to complete the exam 55 seconds before the end of the allotted time. Ruins believes that although Jason behaved calmly, he was actually actively preparing. Only 3 have passed, and each of them is running out of time, so now he needs to come up with something to finish the exam as soon as possible. Finally, it was time for the Academy representative, who was the pride of the Academy, to perform. Many distinguished guests came to see his performance, and now everyone is eagerly awaiting his appearance. The Crown Prince and the Dirty King are very interested in how much stronger he has become. The two of them came not only to see him, but also to make him a final offer, because there will be no other opportunity. With proper cultivation, his talent will be a huge advantage, but without proper supervision, it could one day lead to disaster. In the event of a disaster, the Dirty King has no choice but to deal with him using special methods. He checks the thickness of the doors, and, as it turns out, the head has tried very hard, but should he just open the lock like the others or not? Isn't it boring to just break it? Because the Great Festival taught him that nothing is perfect. The weak point of this lock was the steel, which he was able to blow up with his new skill called Steel Destroyer. The guests thought that his performance should match his reputation, because he is, after all, the winner of the Great Festival. The door to the room, which takes an average of 5 minutes to open, was destroyed in just 13 seconds. And as usual, at this final exam, an already famous name was once again immortalized in history. From the moment Kunhan's tooth reacted to him, King Tehran understood that Ruin was unusual, but his rate of growth still did not fit in with him. He completed the second task very ingeniously, passing through the ice zone with a huge ball of fire that the monsters did not even dare to approach. The King and Crown Prince were very excited that he exceeded even their wildest expectations. The Dirty King Terran had seen enough, but now he was curious to see how he would pass the wall. He used shapeless, invisible magic that tore everything in its path with sound waves so fast that they were imperceptible to the human ear. The funeral bell spell is only available to those who have reached at least the 6th class. Could he have reached that level and passed the exam in 2 minutes and 57 seconds? Ruins used a 6th class spell and successfully completed his training by passing the exam in just under 3 minutes. The Dirty King wonders how he was able to achieve 6th class magic at the age of 16, which some people cannot achieve even in a lifetime. This will not do, and before Ruin becomes even stronger and poses a threat to the king's position, he will get rid of him at all costs. The two princes rejoice because Ruin has set a record, making him the future of their kingdom. The pride of even his family is indescribable, for he has brought glory to Ardell, just as he once dreamed. Right now, everyone is congratulating him, which in the past would have been difficult to even imagine. Who could have thought that he would emerge with such triumph and universal praise? His best friend immediately approached him with congratulations and said that he couldn't believe he was friends with a 6th-level mage. He is sure that Ruin knows how to surprise, but no one expected him to reach such a high level so quickly. On a day like this, they simply needed something to help them end the day. Of course, he was thinking of a party where they could drink. Now that they had all passed their exams and become adults, it was considered that they could drink until they passed out. He began to get excited about the graduation party tomorrow, as it might be the last get-together and everyone wanted to get the most out of it. And only now did he realize that incarnations could also get drunk. The headmaster and Professor Heidel came into the room to check on Ruin. He was glad that the head and the professor had come, because thanks to them, he could enjoy this evening. Since tomorrow would be a busy day, he wanted to say something now. He thanked them, to which they replied that they were grateful and that soon it would be difficult for them to see each other, even if they wanted to. So, he would have to invite him back next year as a lecturer for the graduates, and he shouldn't pretend later that he didn't know anything. He was already heading back to his room when he began to regret drinking so much, as his head was already feeling heavy. 2 merchantmen from the east approached him to talk to him. He asked them to speak, of course, but immediately revealed that they were Crown Prince Shomertan Raynak and the Dirty King Terran. They were outraged at how he knew, and he replied that even though they had hidden their faces, their eyes were very similar to those he had encountered before. So he decided to take the chance, and the king was impressed that he recognized him just by his eyes. They came with an offer that they would make one last time, to follow him to the Empire, and he would have no other choice. As usual, his signature line is that he does not accept refusals, but Ruin boldly says that he will refuse anyway. Did he hear his words because the Crown Prince warned that he destroys what he cannot get? Ruins knows that they are indeed capable of such a thing, but he does not think they will do so. Knowing the Crown Prince, he would never stoop to impersonating someone else and ordering the murder of an ordinary student, but he was amused by the fact that he called himself an ordinary student, which was far from reality. The graduation ceremony had not yet taken place, so he backed down, but warned him to be ready that the next time they met, they would be enemies. And then Jason came and invited him to go to a party with him to drink. If only he had known at that moment that this alcohol-fueled party would bring him disaster on a scale he could not have imagined. The next day, he woke up with a severe headache in a cafe where Irene was sitting, waiting for him to wake up. They shouldn't have drunk so much, but she was glad that at least Ruin looked normal. As it turned out, Ruin wasn't just drinking beer, Jason had added Dragon's Kiss to it, which had intoxicated him immediately. After that, he jumped up abruptly and announced that they would all go to Ardell with him, Setha, and Jason. She asked if she should go there too, to which he replied that he would always be happy to have her there. Yes, she hadn't defeated him yet, and they had already talked about it, but anyone with a brain would understand that the reason she wanted to go there was something else. A few hours later, the head of the academy, Tyrion Ignat, gave a speech to the students, saying that he was looking forward to his students becoming great magicians. In conclusion, he gave the floor to this year's best student and representative of the academy, Ruin Ardell. He gave him a quick piece of advice not to be nervous and to speak from the heart. But no matter how brave he tries to be, he is still scared at the thought of being the center of attention. His nerves are on edge, words are flying out of his head, but everything will be fine even if he forgets everything he wrote. He will not forget what he wanted to convey. As everyone knows, he won at the Great Festival, and he achieved this result in just 1 year. But the path to this victory was not easy, because he had a curse, a mana release disorder. Being a mage who was unable to release mana, he could only lament, but worse than that was the attitude of people towards him. Many asked why he remained at the academy and why he refused to give up until the very end. But the truth is that he simply did not want to let go because magic was everything to him. It was the only way he could protect himself, his family, and the people he cared about. That's why he held on until the very end, and it didn't matter who won, he just wanted to see how it would turn out. If any of the students desperately hope to see the results of their efforts, just keep moving forward. If you fall, get up, even if you think no one is noticing you, because one day someone will definitely see you. As long as no one gives up, there is always room for a miracle, and he thanks everyone for their hard work over the past 6 years. On the way to Ardell, his sister assessed his speech and said that everyone liked him, that was for sure. She asks if all 4 of his friends are going with them to Ardell or what. But Ruin himself is to blame for getting drunk the night before and inviting them, so yes, they are all going with him to Ardell. And immediately after graduation, they all decided to go to Ardell together, and frankly, it turns out that he himself acted as their employer. In addition to them, thousands of soldiers joined them, as the prince promised to provide support, but he did not think that so many people would be sent. His sister is curious to know if he intends to stay in his homeland once he completes his conquest. Unfortunately, no, because his father is still alive and he would like to travel, although he does not know where yet, but he will think about that after the conquest. They immediately begin to prepare for battle and have a couple of ideas for strategy, but then the workers start to leave, which interests Ruin. As it turns out, the question concerns his friend, who is arranging a duel with a trainee knight. Hans is preparing to fight a full-fledged knight, even though he only recently took his knight's oath. It turns out that there was no reason to start sparring. They were just bored after lunch, and at least one interested young man was found. Sir Bolvar was also there and assessed the sparring as both participants being quite skilled and intelligent young men. It turns out that all the knights who were there were first recognized by Sir Bolvar. Sir Bolvar noticed that his friend Hans was being pushed around, but he was impressed that he was holding his own so well against the Golden Knight. He overheard that this knight was considered elite in the kingdom, although he did not know if this was true or not. Of course, this young man would have to go through a lot more to reach the same level. As Ruin himself expected, Sir Bolvar recognized Hans's talent, which he himself had noticed at first. In that case, he asks Sir Bolvar if he could teach Hans a couple of moves, if possible, of course. If the legendary Sir Bolvar teaches him even one simple move, it would benefit him, Hans, and even the entire territory of Ardell. But Sir Bolvar replied that it was not up to him, and that he should ask the young man if he wanted it. Unlike how he taught Ruin, he turned out to be much stricter with knights. And as you can see, he was forced to take a completely forceful approach by pulling a stone. And even when asked if it was difficult for him, he replies that it is not because of fear, which is how the commander of the knights actually behaves. Rowena felt sorry for him, but even after warning him about the difficulty, Hans was confident that he could handle it and decided to just give him a chance. The other knights wanted to know the captain's name because they learned that he had single-handedly defeated 5 of the best hired killers. But these knights believe that it's all just a fairy tale, how he defeated 5 of them. Rowena's sister is very surprised that Sir Bolvar is so revered among the knights. As it turned out, this time the knights were running on foot without horses and with loads on their backs, and some of them even threw up from the strain. Rowena asks the captain about the training and whether it will really help, because he thinks this method is a little primitive. Of course, it is not the best method because if your body is in the wrong position, you can develop chronic diseases. The reason for this training is that there is nothing else to do on the way to Ardell, and it toughens them up anyway. For some reason, it is not surprising that Ruin was nicknamed the Tiger of Ardell. A little later, they finally reached the Chinhin Plain, located south of the southern mountains. This territory was once part of Ardell, but as soon as it was captured by the Mud People, they became the rulers of this land. Due to their monstrous rate of reproduction, the plain appears crimson from a distance, which is why it is sometimes called the Crimson Plain. So far, he has gone out on reconnaissance while the rest are in Ardell, and there must be tens of thousands of them on reconnaissance with Strang. There is an option for a plan to break through directly through the canyon by the sea, but this is not the case at all, because they will attack from the rocks. What if we put Sir Bolvar on the front line? He can lead the troops and crush everything in his path. That's not an option either, because of their numbers. The mud core is in their heads, and it can't be destroyed with conventional attacks. Even for Sir Bolvar, it would be difficult to deal with them one by one. And now it is clear why past conquests were unsuccessful, because there are no passages here that can accommodate a large army, so we have to take a risk. Then the plan may find itself, because we need to think carefully here. The next day, during the discussion of the plan, the goal was to break through the enemy's front line. Moro is the commander-in-chief of the capital's forces and captain of the Golden Knights. If they don't take risks, they won't win. But these words are not without truth. However, such a plan is accompanied by huge losses. But at first, when they asked the princes for forces, they asked for 300 knights, but they were sent 1,000, so they have nothing to lose. They were ready to fight even with a small number of people, so why delay the decision to attack head-on? To get rid of the Mud People, they need to pass through a narrow canyon, and the monsters will not let them pass peacefully, despite the number of knights. Therefore, it was necessary not to overcome them, but to lure the enemies to them, but they did not yet have a way to put this into practice. Ruins also confirmed that his father's idea to drive the monsters out of their lair sounded very good. He continued this idea by saying that they had a good idea to attack from the tops of the cliffs surrounding the canyon. But they need to learn how to climb, because no one knows how to climb rocks. But not everyone needs to climb the rocks, because a couple of mages who can use their powers are enough. Do they need to use a flying spell? Looking at Jason very mysteriously, he says that they don't need magic to climb up there. Jason is very upset that he cannot climb to the top of the rocks, and he will never agree to it. But his friend is sure that he will succeed because he will throw him to the top of the mountains. And finally, the day will come when they will be able to go against these evil monsters that have taken the lives of many ordinary mortals. The conquest of territories began, and at the forefront were Commander Morrow and the Golden Knights. Even his father and Sir Bolvar donned armor for the first time in a long time. According to the plan, Ruin rode behind the entire column with his friends in a carriage. They began to repeat the plan, and then Jason revealed that it was, of course, for his protection and the best he could offer, but didn't it look ridiculous? He thought he looked very good, but suddenly the knights whispered among themselves, discussing what he had seen, and he began to feel even more ashamed. His friend thought he was wrong to dislike it, because it would be an opportunity to become the star of the current conquest. The fact of his greatness made him very happy, and he immediately changed his mind so that he would trust him, because he would do everything right and even better. Their plan was to throw him harder, but even though he tried to throw him normally, Jason was very afraid. At the top of the cliff where he was supposed to start working, Irene caught him and helped him land softly. He even thinks that all the blankets in this one were unnecessary because they caught him so perfectly. Ruin is very happy that her spells are still as powerful as ever. When he saw the number of monsters, he couldn't even count them, and he began to doubt himself, wondering how he could overcome them and whether he could do it. But Ruin believes that he can do it, because he is capable of at least that much for his friend and can defeat anyone for him. And indeed, he is confident that he cannot let his friend down and that he will complete this task, because they trust him and believe in him. He summoned a rain of fire, a third-class spell, which is why the cloud with the rain was not particularly large. However, it was enough to wake up the mud people enjoying their sweet afternoon nap. If we stick to the plan, the rest of it now falls on the captain's shoulders, says Ruin, hastily putting on his gloves for battle. These monsters are moving in one direction so as not to fall under Jason's attack, and the place where they are concentrated is the side path out of the canyon. He won't let them escape through it, and blocking their way, they began to act. During his absence, Seda improved his magic skills, even exceeding Ruin's expectations. However, as he had expected, these monsters began to climb up to where Jason was standing. Standing on a rock, he began to panic, asking for help because he was only third rank and was very worried that he would not be able to defeat them. Irene asked Ruin to throw her to him so she could save him. All this time, he continued to panic because he had never had a girlfriend and did not want to die a virgin. And then, like a hero, she landed behind him and easily saved Jason from the monsters. They didn't know each other and even spoke formally, but now she learned something funny about him, for which he thanked her embarrassedly. Now they began to walk towards the canyon, and everything else depended on the people from the capital and their forces. The monsters began to attack, and seeing their numbers, they began to fear, so the commander ordered them not to retreat so as not to disgrace the kingdom of Radian. He is confident that the mages will support them from the rear, and their task is only to hold out as long as possible, all in the name of the king and victory. Seda and Ruin heard that the knights had begun the battle, and now Ruin needed to go to them, so he leaned on Seda. And he honestly admitted that he had been waiting for these words from Ruin, that he was counting on him. The knights hear the sounds of explosions, but they don't know who is there. However, they are sure that someone inside is getting rid of the monsters one by one. Ruin broke through the monsters, and now the knights' goal is to make their way through the path he paved and continue the capture. These monsters don't remember, but Ruin remembers every detail of the day when the monsters attacked the residents and his mother, taking her life. There are no thoughts or reason in their heads, only instincts, which is why he will never stop fighting them. They had already returned when Jason began to tell others about his exploits. But apparently these ladies weren't listening to him, because when asked if they were listening, they replied that they were thinking about something else. He asked them to listen carefully, because he was repeating it for the last time. The mop-up operation was successful, with 1,500 casualties but no deaths. The battle lasted about 2 hours, and victory was theirs. Even Captain Morrow enthusiastically noted that the princes would be satisfied with this outcome, and he was glad that both sides were satisfied. Seda was returning to Oyota tomorrow, and perhaps he would not believe it, because His Holiness was looking for people who could show themselves to be powerful magicians. Ruin wanted to talk to his father, and Beggins replied that he was now on the veranda, perhaps deep in thought, and should not be disturbed. For Beggins, this is the happiest day of his long life here, for which he thanks the young gentleman. What Ruin has achieved today will never be forgotten by any of the locals, including him, and let him go to his father. Perhaps he is waiting. Today's victory was a joyful event for everyone, but not everyone can smile, just as he cannot forget the death of his mother. His father, Delin Ardell, was also among the general joy of victory, but his thoughts were surely lost in the events of 10 years ago. He went out onto the veranda as his father asked him to come closer, because he wanted to treat him to some wine. This 17-year-old wine is called Selvruck, but he and his mother, Maria, called it something else, Amoroso Ruin, meaning beloved ruin. His father had prepared it on his birthday and promised that they would drink it together when an even more wonderful day than that one came. Although he did not keep his promise to drink it with her, being with his son gives him the feeling that he is drinking with Mariah. Ruino finds the taste of this wine very delightful, for which his father is grateful for the compliment. Now his father is concerned about what he will do next, and as it turns out, Ruino intends to settle in that canyon and expand his holdings. But then he was very frightened because a system window suddenly appeared. It contained a message that left him confused, as Strang says that something is wrong with Kingram. Yes, he understands that today should have been the best day, but they need to get to the academy as soon as possible. The task was that he needed to overcome the threat that was heading for the academy, or more precisely, to save Kingram, and he needed to hurry. He apologized to his father, but he really needed to hurry to the academy to complete the task. Kingram himself did not understand who had suddenly attacked him on such a night, leaving him without one arm. It was King Theron. It turns out that he sensed something was wrong from the moment Kunhan's tooth chose him, and how he possessed the strength of an ogre. He began to dig deeper through the academy and eventually found the answer to the riddle. He believes that the ancient ogre Kingram did something to him that made him so strong. Tyrion Ignat immediately arrived and said that whatever the reason, the king would have to take responsibility. He reminded him of the consequences, but the king replied that he would not have started all this if he had been worried about such things. The king said that during the final exam, he felt that if he continued to grow at the same rate, he would become a threat to his position. But if all the key elements of his development were erased, he would cease to be a problem, and then he would destroy, ruin Ardell. Rowena and Stran immediately rushed over and noticed that the dirty King Turan and the head of the academy, Tyrion Ignat, were already there. How wonderful, because now the king would not be looking for Rowena. But the question was how he found out what was happening here and rushed over so quickly. But anyway, the answer was no longer important to him, because he would get rid of him today. The leader immediately began to defend him so that he could escape, because he would not be able to defeat the king. Kingram saved him by using all the artifacts of the underworld and banishing the king there, but that was the least he could do. He apologizes profusely to Ruin for ultimately putting him in great danger, but for him, there is nothing to fear, and he is fine. The leader ended up there, sensing Turan's energy because he was nearby, but how did Ruin, who seemed to be in Ardell, notice this? He is very interested to hear his explanation of what is happening. He made up his mind, but it will be difficult to believe his words, but he hopes that he will listen to him. The artifact called the Player and Drak, the embodiment of the mage, that's how he was able to use the powers associated with the giant, and now everything fell into place for the leader. He regrets not telling him earlier, but it was a sensitive issue, but the main thing is that the leader now sees the big picture. He tells Ruin that the king saw this increase in power and was afraid that he would take his throne because of it, so he wanted to get rid of him. He agrees that this is exactly how it is, but Ruin must grow and grow to his power. Immediately, a new window appeared saying that the task was complete and he could now destroy Kingram's oath. Hundreds of years ago, as a result of Freud Ignat's defeat, the predecessor of the head of the academy, Kingram swore an oath to serve the artifact for life. He immediately asks Kingram what exactly the destruction of the oath means, and Kingram wonders how he knows about it. Destroying the oath means returning to his original form and being able to leave this place, but can the player do that? Yes, it is a reward after what happened, but to destroy the oath, the consent of the one who gave it is needed. Tyrion Ignat unconditionally said that Ruin's will is also his will, thereby agreeing to the destruction of the oath. In that case, he decided to let Kingram go and give him freedom by destroying this oath that had lasted for hundreds of years. He still doesn't seem to believe that this artifact in Ruin's possession can even destroy the contract, giving him freedom. Ruins is probably now deeply puzzled by the problems ahead, as he is still too weak to stand up to the King of Magicians. But he just thought of one effective method, but this place is not suitable for him, and they need to go to the Heavenly Mountain. At the same time, the underground prison was attacked, and nothing is known about the attackers, but they were definitely mages. The identity of the attacker was immediately established, and it was Josh Garachil. It was a great honor for him, because someone like him had come personally to rescue someone like him. It was the crown prince of the Shomerton Rhinoc Empire, and it was not out of sympathy for him, but merely for entertainment. Ruin returned to the Heavenly Mountain, followed by Kingram, who had returned to his homeland after so many years. The ogres believed that two great men had come together here, and that was a reason to celebrate. Kingram wanted to answer questions about his hand a little later, because they had a more important problem to deal with. He asked his friend Harkin for a favor, to help him with a special elixir made from ogre tendons. The elixir made from ogre tendons is a secret of the ogres of the Heavenly Mountain. Rumor has it that it is very important for young ogres during their growth period. But seeing this elixir in person is so disgusting to Ruin that he does not want to drink it. But wasn't it he himself who said that he needed strength to defeat the King of Magicians? And Kingram has a reason to give it to him, so he orders him to drink it. He finally decided to drink it, saying that he didn't care, and after drinking it, he cringed at the disgusting taste. It was the worst thing he had ever tasted, but his strength increased 100-fold from just one elixir. Thus, ogres become stronger, but this effect is not permanent for ogres. But will Ruin's strength grow if he takes it every time? And why, in Ruina's opinion, did Drax stay on the Heavenly Mountain for 100 years? Precisely for the elixir. Now he intends to drink even more elixir, but it was the last elixir, and to make more, he needs ingredients. But there is no need to worry, because when he mentioned that Ruin needed help, everyone worked hard to gather everything necessary. Fruits of the heart tree, muscle grass, bush morning glory, and so on, and he is very grateful to the ogres for not being indifferent to him. But there is one last ingredient that no one could get, and that is ogre tendon, which is not so easy to find, which is understandable. But ironically, King Theron helped them with this, and now his hand is enough for dozens of elixirs. He begs them not to refuse this hand, because it is his gratitude for freeing him from his oath. But too much elixir will put a huge strain on the body. Even Dracula needed 100 years. Who knows how much he needs? But what should he do then, since he needs to fight the king as soon as possible? They tell him not to worry, because Kingram has thought everything through. When he banished King Theron, he used some of the powers of the artifacts. Among them was magic related to time, and the right to use it had not yet disappeared. He slowed down the passage of time in this cave, and now time will pass more slowly there than outside. But the main question is Ruin ready to spend an incredible amount of time? He was very ready to do this and entered the cave without hesitation. Strange is worried about time, but he convinced him that an hour outside is equal to about 10 years inside. Even if he doesn't age there, it's still cruel, even for an incarnation, but inside he is human, and he is sure he can handle it. When they were about to leave to organize something, Ruin called out to them from behind. Less than an hour later, the young destroyer, Ruin, emerged from the cave. He wasn't sure how much time had passed there, as he had stopped counting after a week. In any case, now he could do something he had wanted to do for a long time. Every day he was there, he promised himself that if he got out of the cave, he would leave no stone unturned. And in 1 second he destroyed the cave, but at the same time gained another 20,000 points of strength. Now he was sure that he would completely destroy the dirty King Theron. The Crown Prince does not demand gratitude, they only demand that he deal with Ardell. But they are searching together for the dirty King Theron, but no one knows where he has gone. But they have an idea for eliminating Ruin, because soon there will be a grand sword event in the Empire, a great festival of magicians. Ruina's younger sister Ardell will be participating in this event, and since he cherishes his sister, he will definitely attend the tournament. It is there that they and the black magicians will ambush and eliminate him, because they could have done it last time if Tyrion Ignat had not intervened. This time, the Crown Prince of the Empires is very serious about not disappointing him. Just as there is a festival for magicians, there is also a Grand Prix of swords for swordsmen, similar to the tournament for magicians. This tournament also inspires knights from all continents to improve themselves. During the regional qualifiers, Ruina was chosen as the representative from Ardell. She is nervous before the competition and wants to see her brother, but her father warned her in advance that he might have some trouble and would not be able to come. But her brother promised to come and support her, but it seems that Irene came instead. People were shocked that Irene herself came for Ruina, impressed by her connections, which made her even more confident and determined to win. The competition had already begun, but Josh and the Crown Prince couldn't find Ruina with their eyes, even though he was sure he would come to the competition for his sister. Josh wanted to look again, but the Crown Prince was already disappointed that he had given him a chance to redeem himself and fulfill only one request. He was about to leave, but then he had a brilliant idea to lure Ruin out, and he needed to do it through his sister. When Ruin was already in the arena, there was a big explosion, causing people to quickly run to the exit. Seeing the strangeness of the situation, Delin Ardell immediately ordered Ruina to leave, since everything happened during her match. Ruina was alive and well, when suddenly strangers approached her, saying that they wanted to get rid of her in order to get her brother. When asked why they wanted to get rid of her specifically, they only replied that they had a deep grudge against her brother, for which she would now pay. She was attacked by Josh Garichel's children, and the thought that they were now going to get rid of her little sister made him rejoice for a while. Then Ruin suddenly appeared and saved his little sister, apologizing that he was a little late because he had no way to get there faster. Be that as it may, he did not expect to see the entire Garichel family, and this time he decided to get rid of everyone as quickly as possible without ceremony. Suddenly, he decided not to waste time on minor magicians and went straight for Josh Garichel. He immediately jumped into the arena, demanding an explanation of how he had gotten rid of his son. He decided to defeat Ruin with his own hands, but who told him that he would just die like that? This time, Josh Garichel immediately noticed that Ruin's power had greatly increased since the last time, and now he could not defeat him. Ruin asked only one question about how Josh got out of the underground capital, clearly indicating that their influence was not enough, since he had succeeded. He would tell him everything if he spared him, but now he didn't need an answer, because there were only two contenders, the King of Magicians or the Crown Prince. Josh Garichel's sons were very angry with him for directing all their forces against Ruin, but they did not yet understand that his power had grown greatly. The sphere of shining light blinds anyone who encounters it, and the burning flame leaves only ashes behind. It was already 8th class magic, which no one in this empire possessed except Ruin. Crown Prince Shomertan just laughed at what Ruin was doing, calling him a madman. Suddenly, his godfather entered and asked what they were doing. They believed that such chaos would go unnoticed by the king, or why else would they openly dare to confront him? The crown prince argued that the king had left without saying a word and was now raising his voice at his son. But hadn't they seen Ruin's powerful strength, for he had used 8th class meteor magic? In other words, Ruin is now on the same level as, or possibly even surpasses, the king of magicians, Taran. King Taran is very angry that they used a bunch of ordinary magicians to see his power, thereby only angering him. He is angry at their fatal mistake, because it is not worth underestimating him, as Ruin is very cunning and may have already figured out who helped Garachel. But Chamartin did not even try to hide it, because his goal was only to remove the king and take his place himself, and Ruin was only an assistant. The nobles are already discussing the fact that a new 8th level mage has appeared, and he is only 18 years old, but the reason for his growth is simple. He mastered the 8th level faster than anyone else solely to take King Taran's place. Soon, these rumors reached the emperor himself, that a mage from a small country was threatening Taran's position. Emperor Titan Raynok listened to his counsel, who tried to persuade him to give up his place to the young talented mage. Suddenly, King Taran himself decided to come to him for help, and Titan Raynok wanted to hear his opinion on the matter. King Taran said that just a couple of weeks ago Ruin was below his level, but now he had become much stronger. How was this possible? He accused Ruin of using black magic because recently he had used an unknown power connected with ogres and destroyed Garachili. And Theron believed that if someone like him ascended the throne, the kingdom would be thrown into chaos. It seems that this issue concerns not only the magic tower, but also the stability of the empire, and it may even be necessary to mobilize the army. His plan was to slander Ruin so that he would not even be able to cope with the army, when suddenly Crown Prince Shomertine entered, telling Taran to stop. Emperor Titan Raynok is very angry that the Crown Prince dared to disrupt such an important competition as the Grand Prix of the Sword, for he is not allowed to behave carelessly. With these words, Emperor Titan reached his limit and could only order Shomertine to get rid of Ruin. The Crown Prince was very angry that Taran dared to drag his father, who needed rest, out to capture some man. Did nothing else matter to him anymore? Emperor Titan Raynok's illness was progressing day by day, and even the best healers did not know how to help him. King Taran needs to understand that any day now the throne will fall into the hands of Shomertan. And when did everything turn against Taran? He was supposed to become close to the emperor, but in the end, Ruin prevented him from doing so. The desperate King Taran turned to Doom Prime, saying that if he had helped defeat Ruin at the festival, he could have changed the current situation. But this no longer makes sense because soon the head of the Tower of Magicians will change, and no matter how hard the Crown Prince tries, Ruin will not stop it. Dum did not leave, because for him, only Theron could be king. And if Ruin was the root of all problems, then he could uproot the problem. Now with his current powers, this is impossible, but this time everything will be different. This time, the king supports him by granting him the power of the Black Mages. Ruin is very annoyed that it may have been the Crown Prince or the king, but in any case, they involved innocent people, for which he will deal with them. Irene is very concerned about her friend, to which he replies that he has no choice but to deal with them because they are targeting him. He came to this decision after seeing that they had launched an attack where many noble families and ordinary townspeople had gathered. If they continue to be allowed to behave this way, there will be chaos everywhere, and not only in Ardell. Suddenly, he ordered Irene to move away because Doom Prime stood in their way. Enraged, he came to Ruin to avenge King Taran, not even allowing Ruin to say a word about him. Doom was as if possessed or demon-possessed, his eyes black. A few moments ago, the king had given him strength, but that strength would not be enough to deal with him, and his goal would only be to stall for time. Doom Prime was now out of his mind because of the demonification, raging and going mad. In that case, Ruin knew how to fix it. First, he destroyed his sword, then tried to hit him so that he would not fall back, because that was the only way to knock him out. At the same time, his godfather Theron came to the Crown Prince, also possessed by a demon, to deal with Shomertane. Knowing that his position was being targeted, he wanted to gain overwhelming power, becoming not just the head of the Tower of Magicians, but the Emperor of the world. The king returned to the corridor to Dumu, praising him for completing his only task of buying time for him. Ruin senses that the power of the dirty King Theron has greatly increased, without understanding what is going on or the reason for the growth of his power. There was a powerful explosion, and those who were in the arena were very worried when suddenly Ruin, taking Irene and Duma, flew out of there to save them. He ordered everyone watching from the arena to run and save themselves, because it was now very dangerous there. He tried to reason with King Theron because there were many innocent townspeople there who could suffer, but they had already crossed that line. As Ruin's intuition suggested, the king absorbed the Crown Prince's life energy. Thanks to Ruin's provocation, King Theron became a demonic god shrouded in envy, which led to forbidden magic. His energy is so overwhelming that it is difficult to say how many more lives have been sacrificed. A lover of justice, Ruin believes that there is no place on this earth for people like him. And he is right that if such evil people are given free rein, the the world will be plunged into great chaos. Rowena tries to wake Irene because Rowena told her to lead everyone out, but her strength was not enough and she needs Irene's help. She became very frightened because her brother is fighting to the death with the king, and she cannot save the people. Suddenly, people possessed by demons rush towards them, and it turns out that Doom is not the only victim of demonization. Irene is worried about Ruin and orders her to run away as quickly and as far as possible, saying that she will manage on her own somehow. But then Sir Bolvar appears, believing that this is the last place where he will find his grave. Irene decides to stay with him and save the people, because if she doesn't help, she won't be able to forgive herself, despite Ruin's feelings. But they were not alone, and they were joined by all of Ruin's friends. Ruin fell exhausted to the ground because the king's powers were now beyond him, and he didn't know what to do or how to protect the people. But the player's power helped him by summoning a demonic force so that he could fight for real. The king is shocked because until then, Ruin could not repel his power, but suddenly he became strong again, and how does he manage to summon different powers? This power feels like a real god has come to his aid. During the attack together with Draka, King Theron understood that he could not defeat him, and that this was the end for him. As soon as they got rid of Theron, his head was suddenly seized by unbearable pain, as if it were about to explode. His sister wanted to approach her brother to help him, but as if he understood that it could be dangerous for his family, he ordered her to step back. But Strawn became strangely nervous, as if this had already happened many years ago before her eyes. It was when Draka went mad with power and awoke as a god of destruction. It was because he had gained too much power at once, or how could it be stopped? She was worried that if it wasn't stopped, Ruin might also awaken as a god of destruction. Suddenly, they found themselves in an unfamiliar space with bare walls. It was Drac who greeted Stran and asked if he should call Ruin the Young Destroyer, but at the moment, it didn't matter. None of that mattered now because Drac had summoned him to help. What else could be expected from a dragon known as a perfect being, and at the same time as the destroyer of the world, Drac? After all, Ruin could feel his incredible, overwhelming energy just by being near him. Drac had borrowed his inner world for a short time because it turned out that if he left Ruin, something terrible would happen. Right now, they were one step away from going mad from the power, as had once happened to him. And that is why he had to pull Ruin into this world by any means necessary. But what should Strand do, since she does not want him to end up like Drac? That is why he is here, because the artifact connects him and the Young Destroyer. After all, if the existence of a connection implies the possibility of breaking it, therefore, if Dracus puts all his strength into breaking the connection, nothing else will harm the Young Destroyer. The downside is that if he uses all his strength, he may disappear, which she does not want. But Strawn should not be so upset because after awakening as the god of destruction, he only brought harm to this world. If Ruin can use his power without being consumed by it, he will be much more useful than he is now. Ruin shouldn't worry because after breaking the player, he will not lose his powers. But first, Ruin has an important question that has been bothering him for a long time. Why did Drac choose him? He has no idea why he is doing so much for him and has no idea whether his powers will benefit the world. He gave him power because he reminded him of his past, because before he gained his powers, life always brought only pain. But in the end, the power consumed him, causing the destruction of worlds, but Ruin is different. He had been watching Ruin since the moment he had no power, and then he used his power correctly. Unlike Drac, he would lead this world on the right path and be able to help it. It seemed that time was running out. He was glad to see Ruin, and even more so to see Strand, thanking her for the present and the past. In the real world, Ruin's relatives and friends were very frightened for him because he suddenly just fainted. He immediately began to apologize for asking for help so suddenly, but they all responded and really helped him. Suddenly, the Emperor himself interrupted the conversation with an important matter for Ruin. He was afraid that the Emperor intended to accuse him of defeating his closest ally and for the loss of his son, the Crown Prince. As it turned out, he had come to personally ask Ruin for forgiveness. After all the chaos had arisen because of him, since he had failed to see the threat from Terran and, on the contrary, had given him more power. And his biggest mistake was that he had not kept an eye on his son. Earlier, when he saw him fighting against Terran, he became convinced that if this man was fighting for peace, he would move in the right direction. Therefore, he wants to ask Ruin directly if he wants to become the head of the Empire's magic tower. A few days later, while sitting with his friends, Jason did not expect to receive such an offer from the Emperor himself at such a young age. After all, he could not even dream of being offered to take the place of the dirty King Terran. Becoming the head of the Tower of Magicians means that everyone will look at him with admiration. Since the Emperor himself offered him this position, his consent would take effect immediately. King Terran's rebellion against Artemis and the death of the Crown Prince had shaken the world, and as the new head, he had much to do. However, he had only recently graduated from the academy, and now it remained to be seen whether he would succeed. Irene notices that he has no expression on his face and wonders what has made him so pensive. He is overwhelmed by the responsibility of such magnitude, for it is a great opportunity, but he still cannot shake off his anxiety. She suggests that they go somewhere where he can rest without unnecessary fuss and relax. Ruin really likes this idea, but he would like to know where exactly, to which she replies that it would be nice to visit her. Strand is already gloating that he has not yet met anyone and wonders if the current circumstances with Irene are developing too quickly. After all, he is going alone to the girl's house and his friends helped him retreat so that they could go together, and as it turned out, Jason is much smarter than she thought. If the artifact player was cut off from him, then why did Strand stay with him? And as it turned out, she is his only and unique embodiment. Irene heard him muttering to himself, so she decided to ask him what he was muttering about without further ado. Be that as it may, he set off on this journey with Irene, and their destination was Prius. There was nothing remarkable around except for the rocks, when suddenly a shadow ran up to attack him from behind. Ruin began to figure out who he was and why he was doing this to him. Suddenly, Irene apologized because this man was her older brother. Even if he was her brother, he explained his kick by saying that Ruin wasn't such a weakling after all, since he was walking around with her, which meant he was her boyfriend. He said he only wanted to talk if he hit him, grabbing his clothes, to which Ruin asked him to let him go because he didn't understand what he was talking about. It was the 8-star martial arts master Aduma Prius, and what was such a strong man doing here? She couldn't take such misfortunes anymore and asked her brother to leave him alone. He seems to allow her brother a lot, but he doesn't understand her defense of Ruin and what is so special about him. She can't take it anymore and says that she is saving him from Ruin. One problem has been solved, and he now hopes that the rest of the family is calm and that there will be no problems with them. But alas, her father is also like that and does not intend to give his daughter to Ruin, because he came only to ask for her hand. He is angry that his only precious daughter brought a man into the house, and her father is a 9-star martial arts master. If he wants to take his daughter, he will first have to fight her father. Now Ruin thinks he shouldn't have come and wants to go home, tearfully begging to leave. Suddenly Irene's mother arrives and yells at them to stop because her daughter has finally invited someone into the house and they can't even greet him properly. Suddenly she ordered them to apologize, and her husband and sons, very afraid of their mother, immediately apologized to him. And then Ruin realized who Irene resembled, her mother, because who else could be so graceful and kind? But all this was not for nothing, because her mother was also an 8-star martial arts master, Seda Prius. The family of the great Lord Prius once owned vast territories and were surrounded by an aura of brilliant glory. But their glory faded along with the decline in the number of descendants. Several heirs wandered the world and settled on this isolated land. They lived in seclusion, surrounded by mountains, devoting themselves to endless training and meditation. However, Lady Irene, who discovered a talent for magic, chose the path of a mage and set her sights on restoring the family's glory. Mother Seda Prius is very ashamed that this has happened, because the men in this family always act emotionally without thinking. But she hopes that he will be understanding, because they do it out of love for their only daughter and sister. And of course he understood, because she is a precious daughter who brought a man here, which would have taken anyone aback. And now her mother is confident in him. Since her daughter brought someone home, it must be serious. Suddenly her father and brothers return, and it is unacceptable to take Irene away just like that, so he must defeat them first. How many brothers does she actually have, since so many people came for her father? Her father believes that the most important thing for a man is the strength to protect his woman and family from all dangers. He cannot forget about responsibility because he is also a father, and in his eyes, Ruin is nothing more than the son of a noble family who has never known hardship. But if there is even a drop of strength in him, he is confident in his strength above all else. In terms of responsibility, he has no equal, and in terms of physical strength, he is sure that he is second to none. But they believe that this is a complete lie and that he must have deceived their innocent Irene. Why shouldn't he prove what he said, since they were just about to conduct training for the entire male part of the family? They warn him that it won't be easy, which only makes him want to warm up more, and after warning Irene, he goes with them to training. Now he thinks that since they only know the language of training, it will be much easier to get along with them. Mom notices the worry on her face and tells her not to worry, because it looks like that guy can handle it. But Irene is most worried not about Ruin, but about their fearless men. They all practiced to see who could break the rock harder and whose skills were better. So far, the main difficulty for Ruin is to impress his father, because it seems that it will be very difficult. He also wanted to show his strength and broke a huge rock, which none of them had been able to do. In the Prius, strength and endurance are very important for protecting the family, and as he thought, they planned to break his spirit through training. But contrary to their plan, this became a chance to show them what he was capable of, and so several days passed. Her brothers, unable to withstand the training, fell exhausted to the ground, but also invited him to train with them. He even had the audacity to ask permission to call them Henna. One evening, they learned that he had been summoned as the head of the magic tower, and that it was the emperor himself who had done so. Irene immediately confirmed that he had even defeated King Tehran, stopping the chaos, which was a natural development of events. What an important person had come to them. But her father was concerned about why Ruin was only telling them about it now. After all, if he had mentioned it right away, the relationship would have been different from the very beginning. It turns out that he doesn't care about other people's titles, and his desire was for her family to recognize him, and it didn't even occur to him to talk about it. His father took him out at night for an important conversation, but what would it be about? Irene is his precious daughter, and can he take responsibility for her? He is sure he can. Despite the less than warm welcome, he treated them with respect, but if he makes his daughter cry, he will be in trouble. It was time to leave, and all the family members gave their blessing. Ruin promised to come back, but then her older brother stunned them with the news that they were going on an official visit to Ardell, and they had not parted by that time. As soon as they started to leave, she stopped and said that since both sides had given them their blessing, who would they really be to each other now? At that moment, he suggested that they start dating officially, and she asked him to truly take care of her. 5 years later, in the Tower of Magicians, Strawn reminded him of that very day, which she remembered literally every word of. Strawn is such a chatterbox. So many years have passed, and she still talks about it as if it were the first time. Since she volunteered to be his assistant, she should focus on her work. On the Emperor's recommendation, he became the head of the Tower of Mages, and life was full of work, so Strawn became his assistant to help him with his duties. Ardell underwent many changes thanks to its development and became a well-developed city. This was made possible with the help of Hans, who became a Knight of Ardell, and Jason, who took on administrative work. Of course, most of the tasks were actually performed by his father. Ruina continued to pursue her dream, and a few years ago, she took part in the Sword Grand Prix again and won. Now she holds a high position alongside the Emperor, who has regained his health. She came to ask about the preparations, and he assured her that everything was in perfect order and no one would complain. A few days later, there was a great commotion in the territory of Ardell. Ruina was glad to see Hans and Satoya there helping him, for which he thanked them from the bottom of his heart. News spreads quickly throughout the country, and as it turned out, Satoya became the chief advisor in Oyota. His friends did not expect Ruin to surprise them with his marriage. Off to the side, the brothers of Irene were crying loudly that she had grown up so quickly, and their mother asked them to stop. When the floor shook, people thought it was an earthquake, but as it turned out, it was just his friends, the ogres. Jason began his speech by saying that he was from the Tower of Mages, but in reality he was famous for being a friend of the head of the Tower of Mages. The wedding was about to begin, and he asked the guests to take their seats and thank them for being with the young couple during their difficult times. Now it was time to invite the star of the event, Ruin Ardell. He also thanked the bride, Irina Prius, for her desire to restore her family's reputation, which made her a world-famous mage whose name was known to everyone. He promised to be a good husband to her, and now she would finally become Ruin's wife. Their priest would be Tyrion Ignat, the mentor of the head of the Tower of Mages and the head of the Ignat Academy. First of all, he congratulates them on having gone through so many difficulties together. And now, even if obstacles stand in their way in the future, their marriage will once again help them overcome all challenges. Relying on each other in difficult and sad times is what it means to be together. During the vows, he said that he remembers that first day in the antique shop when he had no idea that he would marry such a stubborn and cold lady. Looking back, he thinks he was attracted by her confidence and determination, and he vows to be the best husband. And Irene Prius vows to be a loving partner to her husband. At the end, they both expressed their gratitude to everyone who came to the wedding for their support. He thought about how he had achieved everything despite being a nobody, and that it must all be thanks to that help. He had run without pause, facing many crises, but in the end, he had overcome them all. Just as he was thinking how nice it would be if Dracula were with him, he heard words of congratulations in his head. He immediately asked Stran if she had heard the voice, but unfortunately, she had not heard anything. It didn't matter, but if someone asked him in the future how he remembered that day, he would answer without hesitation that it was the end of a journey he had taken without regrets.